A big, tough monster called Minotaur was defeated by a skilled A-ranked party. People watching everything live cheered for them. In this world, everyone loved the Labyrinth, a place full of exciting secrets and treasures. Later, at a bar, a red mage and alchemist named Yoke Feldio said he was leaving the party. His friends got quiet and then started laughing. Simon Berkeley, the leader of the A-ranked party Thunderpike, said Yoke was holding them back and only let him join because they were childhood friends. Yoke was upset that Simon didn't want to hear his side. Yoke complained that he didn't get paid much for being a red mage in the backline. He had to spend his own money on potions and magic items to help the team. He felt like he was losing out. Simon said Yoke was weak, so that's why he didn't earn much. Then, Barry the Warrior said they didn't need support from Yoke from the start. Jamie the Wizard laughed because Yoke was causing a fuss about how the rewards were shared. Yoke asked Camilla the Priestess, who he supported a lot, for backup, but she just told him not to drag her into the argument. In the end, Yoke gave up and agreed to them. Everyone laughed out loud, saying they could do well without him. Yoke was so speechless that he tried to leave, but Simon stopped him, advising him to apologize for his joke for quitting. Yoke decided to say something and face Simon. He loudly cursed in front of his childhood friend and put up the middle finger. The next day, Yoke became jobless at the age of 20. As a red mage, his main tasks were supporting or odd jobs. For the past 5 years, he worked hard despite not being on the front lines. Just then, he noticed an adventure broadcast but didn't feel like watching it. He realized his dream of becoming an adventurer was getting far away. He calmed himself down and reassured himself that he could still find a job since he had B-rank credibility. However, there were no available solo jobs for a red mage like him. The guild receptionist offered to recommend him for some jobs but still suggested joining a party, though it was rare to accept a red mage. Yoke cried his eyes out, realizing that society disregards red mages to an extent. He was desperate since he was on the verge of losing his budget. Yoke suddenly noticed a stir nearby. A big guy got upset because a girl turned down his offer for a drink. The girl, dressed in armor, kept refusing, which made the guy even angrier. Yoke could tell the guy was bitter. Just then, Mamar, a guild receptionist, showed up. She came out after hearing the commotion and Yoke's situation. She then asked Yoke, the most reliable guy around, to calm things down. She was confident Yoke could take down someone like the angry guy with just one hit. Mamar nudged Yoke forward. Yoke confronted the guy and the muscular man tried to attack him. Our protagonist casually used gravity magic, causing the huge man to fall to the ground. Everyone was surprised. Yoke felt disappointed that the man fell with just one gravity attack. Mamar felt bad because gravity magic was only considered support magic, making Yoke feel hurt again. Yoke had checked on the girls who were bothered by the guy. When he saw the girl in armor, she seemed familiar to him. Suddenly, she called Yoke Master and hugged him, making our protagonist feel flustered. The sword mage Marina laughed and introduced herself. Yoke was surprised because he didn't recognize her at all with her more mature appearance. Then, a ranger and elementer named Silk appeared, recognizing her master. She thanked Yoke for saving Marina. Yoke assumed their third companion, Rain the monk and mage, shyly greeted her master. Yoke was glad to see them, and the three excitedly exclaimed that they had already started adventuring. Yoke felt nostalgic since he had been the one to teach them the basics of adventuring. Silk then explained how the commotion started and scolded Marina. Yoke sighed, knowing Marina's personality. While Silk was forcing Marina to apologize to everyone, Rain wondered what Yoke was doing in the guild. He told the girls that he had been looking for a party to join after leaving his previous one. He claimed he was not approved by everyone because he was weak. Silk was surprised since she knew how capable their master was, but Yoke claimed that he couldn't even find a solo job. He knew how challenging it was to find a job as a red mage and was starting to think of quitting adventuring. The girls were sad to see their master feeling down. All of a sudden, Marina got an idea and invited Yoke to their party, leaving Yoke feeling confused. Marina thought it was the perfect opportunity, but Silk and Rain were getting anxious in their own way. Yoke wondered if it was okay to team up with their former teacher, and Marina happily agreed since he had taught them a lot. However, Yoke thought the girls might not feel comfortable with him around. Just then, Rain, who was usually timid, suddenly said she agreed with Marina. She expressed her desire to be with her former teacher and recalled how considerate Yoke had always been. Yoke, trying to downplay his role, insisted he was just a mere supporter. But unexpectedly, Silk also agreed to let their former teacher join them. She pointed out that there were misunderstandings about red mages, and having a supporter would improve the party's performance. Since they were currently stuck, Silk believed Yoke's help could be beneficial. The usually shy Rain gathered her courage and asked Yoke once again to join their party. She even wondered if he couldn't agree, noting his silence. Yoke had searched for his application and casually burned it with magic, realizing it was already useless. He then bowed his head to the girls and the three of them began celebrating, happy to have their master join them. Silk wondered if it was okay to be part of a low-ranked party like theirs. Yoke assured her that he was grateful because a high-ranked party wouldn't accept him. He expressed his happiness at finding people who valued him. Silk formally welcomed Yoke to their party, and Marina and Rain followed suit. Yoke then requested something from the girls, causing them to worry, thinking it was about his payment. However, Yoke simply asked them to call him Yoke since he was no longer their master. The girls were relieved and happily welcomed him as Yoke. Smiling, Yoke counted on them as his party members. They decided to grab something to eat together. Despite the earlier commotion's mess, Marina calmly enjoyed a hearty meal, causing Silk to become concerned about Yoke's wallet. Yoke pondered the next steps, and Silk informed them about a quest to retrieve magic steel from an abandoned mine. Eager to go since the deadline was approaching, Yoke wished to join to observe their teamwork. Silk planned to check the carriage's arrival time, but Yoke was already aware it would arrive in 3 minutes. The girls became puzzled, questioning how Yoke knew the timing. Yoke explained that as a supporter, memorizing such details was part of the role. The girls were left speechless until Yoke urged them to hurry. Yoke and the girls reached the deserted mines, and our main character felt a sense of nostalgia, even though it was their first time in this maze, just like the girls. They knew they needed magic steel, and Yoke thought they could find it on the 6th floor where it was plentiful. However, Silk told him they couldn't defeat the boss on the 5th floor yet, making it challenging. Yoke suggested mining on the 4th and 5th floors instead. Marina, extending her trap-checking baton, told everyone to set off but accidentally triggered something. Yoke quickly rushed to Marina's rescue, narrowly avoiding the trap. Marina, feeling relieved, thanked Yoke. While Silk scolded Marina, Yoke realized that being the strongest sword mage, Marina should lead and check the ground for traps. Unfortunately, the labyrinth was filled with them. Yoke pulled out a lantern and offered to guide the way. Marina felt confused because Yoke was a red mage meant for the back lines. Yoke explained that he was someone who knew a bit of everything and turned on the lantern. Parts of the walls and floor suddenly glowed, showing where the traps were. It was all thanks to the lantern named Detective Candela, but the girls hadn't heard of such an item before. Yoke then asked Marina to guard the rear since he could also fight. Yoke led the girls like a mother hen through a shortcut to the 4th floor. While Marina was having fun, Silk told Yoke that she would pay for the lantern's oil, but Yoke was fine with it since he could make more with alchemy. After walking through the mines, Yoke stopped and told the girls to get ready for a fight. Suddenly, loud noises came from one of the paths. Monkey-like monsters called Bogles showed up, and Silk offered to go first. She quickly grabbed some arrows and shot them at one of the monsters. Marina then rushed forward to attack the Bogles. Yoke was surprised to see Marina taking on 2 of them. He noticed that Marina's longsword had been shortened for easier use. He decided to work harder too and cast 3 buff spells at the same time. Also, Yoke used a spell called Snare to make the Bogles fall over. He told Marina it was her chance. Marina skillfully sliced the monsters in half. Yoke praised Marina for her skills. Marina wondered if Yoke was responsible for her enhanced abilities, but our main character believed it was Marina's own merit. Marina expressed her amazement at feeling stronger than usual, and Yoke clarified that he cast a spell called Physical Enchant. When Marina started to panic, Yoke hushed her and urged her to focus on the upcoming battle. Suddenly, a horde of monsters appeared. Former miners now transformed into undead creatures. Yoke quickly summoned Rain, who immediately understood what needed to be done and began casting a spell. Yoke directed Marina and Silk to protect Rain. The 2 girls charged into action, and Yoke surprised everyone by casting various empowering spells on them. To restrain the undead, Yoke also threw magic potions and holy water, causing the monsters to stop in their tracks. Rain, witnessing the effects, was taken aback, but Yoke snapped her out of it. Rain then cast an anti-undead spell, bathing the monsters in a bright light. Slowly, the undead creatures turned into ashes. As the battle ended, Yoke breathed a sigh of relief. He looked around and saw the girls staring at him in silence. Everyone was impressed with how Yoke fought, feeling a powerful boost like sharper senses and using less mana. Yoke downplayed it, saying it wasn't a big deal, but Silk disagreed. She was astonished that Yoke casually tossed away something as valuable as holy water. Yoke explained that he could easily make holy water with alchemy, using an alternative ingredient, ashes of the undead instead of the light crystal. These ashes could also be used to block attacks from behind, preventing ambushes. Silk was left speechless by Yoke's explanations. Rain wondered why she only used a little mana. Yoke explained that he used a spell called Refresh Mana. Rain was shocked because this spell was considered rare, typically only used by red mages. It was an amazing spell that always increased a wizard's chance of winning in battles. Yoke said it was hard to learn, but he downplayed it, saying his experience with Thunderpike was different, because they didn't care about his supporting role. The girls were amazed at how calm and collected Yoke was. Our protagonist explained that his 5 years of being an adventurer helped him stay calm for everyone's sake. He believed it was crucial not to make others anxious. The former students were surprised and admired Yoke for this new insight from their former master. They expressed their surprise and admiration as they continued on their mission. Shortly after, the party reached the stairs and started mining on the 4th floor. Yoke had played a crucial role in their progress, so the girls turned to him for guidance. Yoke proposed a break, but the girls hesitated, concerned about having cold and tough food in the gloomy labyrinth. To their surprise, Yoke pulled out a pot and promised to serve them hot food. Initially stunned, the girls soon shared their amazement that enjoying warm food was even possible in the labyrinth. Yoke had reassured the anxious girls that he had acquired the pot and instructed them to observe closely. He gently tapped the empty pot with a ladle, and to the girls' amazement, soup magically began to fill it. Witnessing this, the girls were astonished. Yoke then opened a small drawer containing utensils, ingredients, and condiments. He ignited the stove, proceeding to cook eggs and bacon. Once the meal was ready, he served it to the hungry girls. Although the girls were impressed, they hesitated to eat the soup, expressing concern. Yoke assumed it would be seafood this time and assured them that he had been using the tool without encountering any strange tastes so far. Marina, taking a sip, was pleasantly surprised by the warm soup. She remarked that it tasted rich. Silk and Rain also sampled it and confirmed that it was clam chowder. Marina couldn't help but wonder if she was dreaming as she found herself enjoying warm food within the labyrinth. Yoke had explained that he used a tool called soup stock, which he had acquired from a ruins and fixed up. However, every time it was used, it produced a random soup. Rain, a mage, became more interested, but Yoke wondered if she had dwarf blood, given her fascination with magical items. Silk then mentioned that there was magic power in the food. Yoke praised her magical intuition and clarified that cooking was similar to alchemy. Silk then questioned whether Yoke used magic power as an ingredient, realizing the innovative nature of his cooking. Rain advised her to stop overthinking and just go with the flow, an unconventional approach for a mage. Everyone had finished their meal and thanked Yoke. Being supportive, Yoke requested the girls' equipment for a maintenance check. The equipment was laid out, and the girls observed their master thoroughly inspecting everything. Silk wondered if it was necessary to be so thorough and memorize their equipment. Yoke explained that it was his responsibility as a support. He reminded them that they would start mining on the next floor, and the stairs were a safe area where monsters didn't appear, providing a place for them to rest. Silk finally understood why Yoke had chosen the stairs. Suddenly, Marina questioned why Yoke was so serious about everything. She mentioned that she had never seen a supporter so aware of the entire party's equipment and carriage schedule. Yoke explained that it was because he was a Red Mage and needed to put in extra effort. The girls were impressed, seeing Yoke as a hardworking person. Yoke could sense that the girls were curious about his motivation for working so hard, and surprisingly, he revealed that it was for his dream. He asked the curious girls not to laugh and shared that his dream was to conquer the world's top labyrinth called Achromatic Darkness. Rain had suddenly spat out her drink, insisting she wasn't laughing. Yoke understood her reaction. The labyrinth they discussed was one of the Abyss Gates, the deepest and most perilous. Rain had heard these gates were like portals to another world, making her curious if Yoke desired to venture there. However, Yoke clarified he only sought to witness the end of the world. After a brief silence, Rain remarked that Yoke's dream suited him. Out of the blue, Marina offered to assist Yoke in achieving his dream. Initially surprised, Yoke explained it was a personal wish, but Marina argued he couldn't navigate the labyrinth alone, emphasizing the strict requirements of A-ranked or above parties. Yoke questioned her motivation, and Marina responded with a rather unexpected reason. It sounded romantic. Rain chimed in, agreeing that the bigger the goal, the more passionate one becomes. Worried, Yoke turned to the mature Silk, hoping she would intervene. However, Silk surprised him by expressing her desire for an exciting adventure like that as well. Yoke was left speechless, and the girls reached a consensus. Our protagonist could only sigh. He claimed it was an unrealistic dream, but the girls knew he was up for it. Suddenly, Marina suggested making a name for their team, making Yoke surprised that they were still a nameless party. Silk then wondered if she got an idea, and Marina excitedly named themselves Clover, since Yoke was their lucky fourth leaf. Rain and Silk quickly agreed, and Marina asked for Yoke's opinion. Yoke was silent the whole time due to happiness overload and embarrassment. He shyly claimed that he was happy, and Marina officially announced that Clover was founded and their goal was the Abyss Gate. The girls looked at their former master, who was happy to be with them. As they pumped themselves up to continue their mission on the 4th floor, the labyrinth suddenly experienced an earthquake. The tremor was the signal of the appearance of the mining point, where a huge lizard appeared. The lizard used to be a D-rank monster named Rock Lizard. While Yoke and the girls were hiding and observing its enormous size, the monster noticed them. Yoke realized he had to take action and ran away to divert the rock lizard's attention. Even though the girls told him to come back, Yoke used 2 spells, Chain and Slow, simultaneously. Rain was surprised to see a double quick cast, but Silk explained that these were just support magic spells. The rock lizard charged towards Yoke but abruptly stopped right in front of him. Initially, the girls thought the monster had stopped, but it was actually moving very slowly, essentially creating a time-stopping effect. Yoke instructed Marina to attack, continuously using the 2 spells on the massive monster. Yoke remembered that its skin was tough for beginners to break. However, Clover had Marina, a sword mage capable of easily slicing through the rock lizard's skin. Marina's special ability, Magic Blade, coated her weapon with mana, enhancing its attack power. It was a rare class, and Yoke was impressed to see the lizard's head fall off. Marina celebrated and quickly moved to retrieve the magic steel. At that moment, Yoke lifted her, causing Marina to become flustered. Yoke put her down and explained that Magic Blade consumed a lot of strength and mana. He asked the girls to take care of Marina while he collected the magic steel. Silk then stared at the flustered Marina. Yoke approached the huge lizard and brought out a magic item called the Wrecking Pickaxe. He mined the ores stuck on the monster and collected a significant amount of silver, copper, and magic steel. Meanwhile, Marina was lost in thought. Silk couldn't help but notice Marina turning red and asked her why. Marina simply said it was for no reason at all. Silk then wondered if Marina was feeling shy, suggesting that her heart might be fluttering from Yoke's hug. Silk playfully teased Marina, suggesting that she might have a crush. Marina quickly defended herself, pointing out that Silk had a similar reaction when Yoke complimented her archery skills. The banter continued until Rain joined the conversation. Surprisingly, Rain admitted that she too felt flustered when Yoke protected her in battle. Silk and Marina were taken aback, not expecting Rain to share something embarrassing. Rain clarified that they weren't hiding their feelings. Silk and Marina insisted that Yoke was just admirable, like a prince, and Rain agreed. Just as they were engrossed in the conversation, Yoke returned and asked what they were talking about. The girls fell silent, blushing like red beets. Silk attempted to act normal, but her face turned red and she couldn't stop shaking. Marina insisted they were just exercising, but it was a weak excuse. They sought Rain's assistance only to find that the mage was the most flustered of them all. Trying to shift the focus, the girls offered to help with mining, but Yoke revealed he had already gathered everything. The girls were curious about Yoke's efficiency, and he credited it his experience. With the insufficient magic steel, Silk suggested taking down another rock lizard. Yoke questioned if Marina was up for it while looking at her red face. Despite being flustered, Marina insisted she was fine and tried to snap Rain out of her embarrassment. With no response, Marina simply declared that they should move on. The group had reached the entrance to the boss room without running into another rock lizard. They debated whether to venture further, but Silk felt uneasy about it. Then decided they should proceed to the 6th floor. However, they had to deal with the boss monster on the 5th floor, also known as the Novice Killer, first. Yoke listened to the girls' concerns about facing it, but he reassured them that their party could handle it. With confidence, he assured the girls that he would give his all to defeat the boss and demonstrate his usefulness to the team. The girls hesitated for a moment, stating that Yoke had already proven himself. Encouraged by their master's confidence, Silk asked Yoke to stay determined and not to lose. With everyone's agreement, Yoke took something out of his bag and told them to get ready for a battle. Marina was really surprised when she saw GoPro-kun, a magic item that automatically records. Impressively, Yoke had the flying version. Marina wondered if their fight would be recorded, but Yoke just wanted to keep a record. Marina then suggested that Yoke should broadcast their fight because it sounded like fun. Yoke was nervous about showing his face as he hadn't been able to do it properly with his previous party. Marina pointed out that broadcasting was beneficial for parties. Yoke somewhat agreed, considering Adventure Broadcast was the world's largest platform for adventure content, featuring raids with commentary, item reviews, cooking shows, and potion-making processes. Adventurers basically became celebrities and gained fame and wealth. Yoke didn't really want to become a celebrity, but advertising themselves to get a few more quests exclusive to Clover was something he hoped. Yoke had asserted that putting in maximum effort wouldn't change things, as gaining views was not an impossible task. Determined, he activated GoPro-kun for the broadcast, casting 3 support spells: Great Haste, Blink Shadow, and Protect Shade. On himself, he opened the door where the 5th floor boss awaited. Yoke proudly announced Clover's inaugural adventure broadcast. They had searched for the boss monster, but it loomed in front of them, a massive crab named Steel Crab. Without warning, it swiftly charged towards them. Yoke instructed the girls not to panic and guided them on where to attack. Yoke then cast not 1, not 2, but 6 spells to weaken the enemy. The Steel Crab stopped in its tracks, and Rain was astonished to witness a multi-quick cast. Yoke decided to conclude his chain of spells with gravity. The Steel Crab collapsed to the ground, shaking the earth beneath them. The girls, surprised, hid behind Yoke. Yoke told them it was their chance to attack since the monster was now crippled. However, as he checked on the Steel Crab, he noticed something that made him break into a cold sweat. He claimed that he accidentally defeated the boss monster on his own. Marina jumped in, calling Yoke fantastic while on top of him, and Rain mentioned that double quick cast was already impressive, but Yoke casually performed many of them. Yoke confirmed he used 6, causing Rain a headache. Silk wondered how Yoke managed to one-shot the boss monster when they were all supposed to be support magic users. Yoke explained that he used Paralyze, Slow, and Chain to stop the monster's movements, Blindness to prevent surprise attacks, Venom to weaken its strength, and Collapse to make its joints prone to breaking. Gravity was the finishing move, used only to make the monster fall to the ground. Yoke apologized, thinking he would only deal some damage as support, but the girls were delighted by the spectacle and showered Yoke with compliments. Yoke, suddenly embarrassed, told them to celebrate later. It seemed someone was weak to compliments. Yoke then explained that the allure of labyrinths lay in the treasures they yielded. They proceeded to unlock the treasure chest dropped by the boss monster. Upon opening it, their eyes widened at the sight of numerous ores and top-notch ingots. Silk also spotted a good amount of magic steel, marking the fulfillment of their mission. Silk felt relieved, while Rain was preoccupied searching for rare magic items. Marina, on the other hand, sought confirmation on whether they could exchange the treasures for money. Yoke affirmed, and Marina rejoiced. It was clear what she desired. Yes, she was hungry. Meanwhile, at the Finesse Adventurers Guild, a ranger and thief named Cork was griping about being a member of the Thunderpike party led by Simon. He moaned about how the party had been too demanding, and he even called their abilities a mistake from the start. Barry labeled Cork as a coward right after they gave him the tasks that Yoke used to handle. Jamie chimed in, mentioning that they had been struggling lately since Yoke was no longer with them, and started to say something more. Simon banged the table, emphatically instructing everyone not to mention Yoke's name. He clicked his tongue and cursed at Yoke. What happened to Thunder Pike? A few hours ago, on the 4th floor of a certain maze, the whole team was surrounded by direwolves. Simon got frustrated when he saw more monsters than usual. While Barry was fighting some of the wolves, he mentioned how strong the monsters had become, surviving his attacks. Simon was confused, recalling that they had gone to the same maze many times before and even reached the 10th floor, but this time, they were stuck on the 4th floor. Simon and Barry blamed the newcomer Cork for dragging them down. Cork then explained that he tried to stop them, but the two overconfident guys didn't listen. He called them stupid for not bringing beast repellents, which Simon didn't know about. Cork clarified that dire wolves would gather after tracing their smell, and using beast repellent to erase their scent on the way was common knowledge. He assumed that Thunderpike, their regular group, had some, as they always went to the same maze. While they argued, a dire wolf suddenly attacked Jamie. The poor mage was tossed around like a toy, and Barry and Simon rushed to save her. Simon checked on her and found her battered, with her clothes falling off. Simon asked Camilla for healing, but she was out of mana. Simon pushed her aside and attacked more incoming direwolves, thinking he had taken them down in one shot, but they were still standing, looking okay. He was shocked because normally the wolves would die instantly. Cork asked what Simon was talking about, explaining that it's tough to deal critical damage to direwolves, and suggested they should have at least used a physical enchant potion even if no one was supporting. Cork then recommended running toward a safe path he had discovered. Everyone took a break on a nearby staircase. Despite attempts to wake up Jamie, she remained unconscious from the wolves' critical attack. Simon instructed Camilla to use a potion to replenish her mana so she could cast healing magic on Jamie, but they discovered the potion had run out. Simon, puzzled because they always had enough mana potions before, questioned the others. Barry said it was a porter's responsibility to keep them supplied. Cork offered one, and Simon hastily applied it to Jamie. Cork then reminded them to pay for the supplies he provided. Simon got upset with Cork's attitude, especially when someone's life was at stake. Cork lectured Simon, emphasizing that as the leader, it was his responsibility to ensure the well-being of all members. He noticed Simon lacked knowledge, strategy, and preparation for their journey, questioning how Simon became the leader of an A-rank party. Simon, angered by the lecture, blamed Cork for everything, but Cork argued that Simon lacked knowledge. The two continued arguing, exchanging insults until Cork decided to leave the Thunderpike party the next day. That night, the Clover group enjoyed a relaxed dinner at a tavern. Yoke, the leader, received thanks from the girls and they began praising him. Yoke, feeling shy, blushed as Rain encouraged him to try some of the food. Silk and Marina followed suit, putting a lot of different dishes in front of Yoke. The girls playfully competed to see who could offer the best. Watching Yoke tremble, the girls wondered if he was worried about finishing all the food. To their surprise, Yoke wasn't worried. He was genuinely happy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he expressed gratitude. It was the first time he had been treated so kindly. Suddenly, Yoke remembered that he was the girl's master and should not let compliments get to his head. Trying to regain his composure, he aimed to act mature and courteous. Silk noticed his attempt and reminded him not to be too formal in front of them. She suggested that since the girls followed Yoke's guidance, he should officially become the leader of the Clover party. Yoke felt surprised when Silk suggested that he should be their leader. Silk mentioned that they were initially troubled without a leader, but Yoke arrived at the right moment, attributing it to the guidance of the spirits. Yoke attempted to rationalize the situation, but the girls quickly agreed, stating that he seemed more like a leader than any of them. Despite Yoke insisting that he had just joined them, Marina excitedly announced the official founding of the Clover Party. Yoke couldn't find words, his concern growing as he observed how easily the girls placed their trust in others. Taking care of them, Yoke believed, was a leader's responsibility, and among them, he had the most experience. Eventually, Yoke reluctantly agreed and the girls celebrated. Yoke, as the leader, began distributing rewards but wanted to know how Silk had been handling it before he arrived. Silk said she had been managing everything on her own, giving only the necessary allowance to others. When Yoke asked for more details, Silk got worried that she might be doing something wrong. Yoke reassured her, saying it was for their dream, and he supported her efforts. This made Silk feel a bit flustered. Yoke then inquired about their days off, and Silk confirmed they had 2 days per week. Yoke praised her for being considerate. During the conversation, Silk unconsciously referred to Yoke as Master, which Rain pointed out. Marina then asked how Yoke spent his days off, and he explained that he usually bought supplies, especially the ingredients for his holy water. The girls became quiet when they heard his answer, and quickly they began praising him. Marina casually mentioned she wanted to join Yoke at the market. Silk and Rain thought it sounded like a date and said they wanted to come too. Yoke asked them to wait and questioned what if he was a bad guy who might take advantage of them. Marina argued that no bad guy would give a warning like that. Yoke sort of agreed. As Yoke stood up to set up an account for their party's savings, the people inside the tavern got really excited. Marina found it unusual to see everyone so hyped up and pulled Yoke over the commotion. Yoke's eyes widened as he watched the commentators shouting when they saw a multi-quick cast. It was Yoke who had executed the 6 spells against the huge steel crab and ended it with gravity. The crowd got excited watching a Red Mage solo kill a boss. Yoke and the girls just stood there looking surprised as the commentators praised the Clover Party. The girls were thrilled to see thousands of views and people watching them, including newbies. The girls hugged Yoke, and Rain told him to redo the celebration. The entire party kicked off another celebration complete with drinks. Yoke realized it all happened because of the girls. As a not-so-skilled Red Mage, he only got into the party because he personally knew the girls. Yoke expressed his gratitude to the girls, but they got confused because they thought they should be thanking him. Yoke quietly chuckled about it and decided to thank them again another day. He resolved to become stronger for the girls. The night went on, with the Clover Party finishing their drinks. 3 days earlier, Yoke had been staring intently at the request board, contemplating which task to choose for their upcoming party. At that moment, Mamar approached and inquired if everything was all right. Mamar confidently asserted that the Clover Party could effortlessly handle quests with substantial rewards. However, Yoke was more interested in selecting a quest that would provide valuable experience for the group. Observing Yoke's seriousness, Mamar couldn't help but chuckle at how Yoke was taking on the role of a master. Yoke jokingly asked Mamar to refrain from teasing, and in response, Mamar presented a quest specifically for the esteemed Yoke. It turned out to be a C-ranked mission involving the delivery of some pebbles from the Yonman waterfall. Yoke was taken aback, considering that gathering quests were typically classified as D-ranked. Mamar explained that there were extenuating circumstances. Yoke remembered that the Yeoman waterfall was close to Orden Lake, an area suitable for novice adventurers. In brief, the pebbles were essential materials for creating light sources and magic items. Putting the pieces together, Yoke deduced that there was an unusual event occurring in the lakeside forest of Ordan Lake. Mamar confirmed Yoke's suspicion, revealing that a massive demon beast was lurking there, elevating the quest's difficulty by 1 rank. But Mamar was sure that dealing with a demon beast wouldn't be a big problem for Yoke. Yoke couldn't help but feel that the quests Mamar suggested were a bit strange. He wondered if he could take on the quest, even though it wasn't allowed. Mamar acted like she didn't see anything wrong. As Yoke was thanking Mamar, his girls walked in wearing their casual clothes. Yoke then said he found a suitable quest. Without much discussion, the girls quickly agreed. Mamar hurried to finish the procedure. Yoke wondered if everything was okay. He informed them about the demon beast, but the girls were fine with it. They believed it would give them more credibility, especially since Yoke would be with them. Yoke told the girls to get ready in an hour. When Mamar returned with the confirmation note, Yoke realized she had planned to give them the quest from the start. Mamar was excited because it would be great to watch a demon beast on a live broadcast with Yoke subduing it. She even brought out some baby fireworks and congratulated Yoke for reaching 10,000 views on their Steel Crab live broadcast. Mamar was thrilled and happy that Yoke, who had been unlucky before, was now gaining recognition. It felt like her son was finally being acknowledged, surprising Yoke. She made it clear that she was more of a mother figure than a romantic interest. Yoke couldn't believe that they were getting a lot of views, and Mamar confirmed that people were eagerly waiting for the next installment. With a disappointed expression, Mamar talked about Yoke's former comrades. She mentioned that the newcomer to Thunderpike had left after just one day and seemed to struggle with quests. She warned Yoke to be careful, emphasizing that they didn't know what people might do when they hit rock bottom. Despite leaving the party, Mamar insisted that Yoke was still not safe. Yoke fully understood Mamar's concern and thanked her. Shortly afterward, Yoke left the Adventurers Guild to prepare for the upcoming quest. Unbeknownst to him, a shady figure was stalking him with a fiery glare. Yoke kept walking and the suspicious person followed. Yoke stopped to check the time, realizing it was getting late. He needed to meet the girls. He wondered why the person was following him so clumsily. Thinking that Thunder Pike might have sent them, Yoke decided to confront the person by leading them to a nearby corner. Curious about what the E-ranked adventurer named Veggio wanted, Yoke asked. Veggio tried to confirm if he was Yoke, and Yoke denied it. In a hurry, Yoke asked Veggio to keep the conversation short. Frustrated, Veggio ordered Yoke to leave his party, accusing him of repeatedly approaching the girls. He wondered how Yoke managed to be with them. It dawned on Yoke that Veggio was the one stalking his girls. Veggio drew his sword, threatening Yoke to stay away from the girls. However, Yoke quickly used Snare and Sleep Mist, causing Veggio to fall to the ground. Onlookers assumed he fell due to intoxication, giving Yoke the chance to leave the area. Shortly afterward, Yoke caught up with the girls in the carriage. He shared with them that he had encountered their stalkers, specifically the chubby man. Silk informed their master that Veggio had persistently asked to join them many times. She added that it would have been okay if Veggio were strong, but he was only an E-rank and, to make matters stranger, a bit odd. Yoke then recounted an encounter where Veggio unsheathed a sword in front of him. This made the girls concerned for Yoke, but he assured them that nothing dangerous had transpired. Yoke was just relieved that Veggio hadn't done anything peculiar to the girls. Rain had been impressed by how mature Yoke was despite being the same age. Yoke in turn was shocked to find out they were of the same age. Initially, Yoke had thought Silk was the eldest, but it turned out Silk was only 17, just like Marina. Yoke was surprised to learn that Rain, who looked the most childish, was actually the eldest. Rain, sensing Yoke's thoughts, wondered if Yoke was thinking that her body was underdeveloped. This made Yoke start apologizing. Upon reaching their destination, Marina noticed a giant tree beside a clear lake, the lakeside forest of Orden. Yoke then reminded everyone to focus on the quest. Marina began to wonder if the demon beast was real, as the area had been peaceful just 2 months ago. She recalled that not a single monster, not even a normal animal, had been seen since then. Yoke explained that the situation was bad. He pointed out that animal senses were more sensitive than humans, and considering Orden's reputation for abundant wildlife, there might be something extremely dangerous lurking in the area. Yoke urged the girls to stay sharp, emphasizing that their target might be a huge demon beast. Orden Lake used to get its water from an ancient dungeon's groundwater. Deep inside this dungeon, there was a magical item that kept water flowing endlessly without ever drying up. What was once a peaceful location turned into something dark and murky. When the Clover Party, led by Yoke, arrived, they brought along GoPro-kun to document everything. Yoke planned to switch to live broadcasting if they encountered the demon beast. The girls were curious and asked why. Yoke explained that this way, the guild could be informed and they might receive support. Additionally, Yoke wanted to capture live footage of the demon beast as proof in case they managed to defeat it. Rain expressed concern about the expense of GoPro-kun. Yoke reassured them, pointing out that Orden Lake was a spot for newcomers who didn't have broadcasting equipment. This explains why there was little information about the demon beast. Despite the reports, Marina wondered why there was no information about it since adventurers had come to the same area. Yoke then assumed that they were simply not able to return alive after encountering the demon beast. The girls got scared, but Yoke told them not to worry since it was only an assumption, and no high-ranked demon beasts had been seen yet in Orden. Yoke claimed he would do his best to support the girls. He then cast Sneaking Move, a spell to make the target move stealthily on everyone. Yoke then added Blink Shadow on himself. It could only be applied to the caster and could negate an attack once. He decided to stay in the rearguard to check for surprise attacks. He told the girls that they were skilled enough and just needed experience and swore to support them well. He claimed that Clover would be fine. The girls finally felt motivated and everyone went on their way. The group explored the area, marveling at the beautiful scenery. However, Silk noticed strange fluctuations in the magic around them. Rain and Marina realized there were no signs of animals nearby. Yoke was grateful that the girls were perceptive about their surroundings. Just when everything seemed fine, a loud and ominous sound interrupted the tranquility. It hushed as they turned toward its source. The girls wondered if it was just a tree falling. While observing a nearby boulder, Yoke sensed something amiss. He warned everyone to be cautious about something behind them. Yoke swiftly moved to shield the girls just as something narrowly missed them. Worried, Yoke clicked his tongue and investigated. His eyes widened with fear as a massive horse-like monster emerged. A B-ranked creature named Zarnag, a high-ranking monster from the northernmost wastelands. Yoke found the situation unpredictable. It was unusual for such a monster to appear in Orden. He knew this was a formidable opponent, but he believed Clover could handle it. Yoke quickly switched GoPro-kun into live broadcast mode and told the girls to retreat right away. He ordered them to report to the guild and assured them that he would handle the monster, allowing them to escape safely. Marina questioned if the monster was truly dangerous, and Yoke explained that it was a high-ranked creature, even challenging the formidable Thunderpike. This monster was Zarnag, the Beast King of the North Pole. Silk couldn't understand why Zarnag had come to Orden, but Yoke instructed her to take charge as the leader and lead the retreat to safety. The girls then realized that Yoke was sacrificing himself for them. Yoke emphasized that the monster was intelligent enough to analyze their moves and urged the girls to escape while they still had the chance. Silk fell silent, overwhelmed with fear at the prospect of Yoke sacrificing himself in the face of such a formidable foe. At that moment, Marina calmly drew her sword. She didn't want to leave. Yoke tried talking to her, but Marina reminded him that he was in the backline, and someone like her, a frontline fighter, should be the one diverting the enemy's attention. Rain and Silk stepped up too, suggesting that they should team up to take down the monster. Yoke warned them that the monster was too dangerous, but Marina argued that it was just as perilous for him. She added that it was too late. The monster was already approaching. Silk shot an arrow, but the monster vanished quickly. Yoke realized it was targeting Marina, so he cast protection spells on her twice. The monster tackled Marina, sending her flying. The attack happened so fast that Marina would have died if it weren't for Yoke. Zarnag then charged at Marina as if about to devour her. Just in time, Yoke used a scroll of rock breaking, saving Marina from the monster. It was a close call. Marina apologized, but Yoke reassured her that it was okay since the wide-ranging magic spell had hit the monster. Yoke started feeling anxious because he was running low on magic scrolls, and debuff spells weren't effective against high-level monsters. At that moment, Silk informed Yoke about her plan to seek assistance from the Dryads. Behind her, branches sprouted, carrying boulders ready to be thrown. The branches launched the boulders at the Zarnag, but the monster effortlessly dodged every one of them. Despite the misses, Yoke encouraged Silk to persist. Yoke then cast 6 debuff spells, similar to those he used against the Steel Crab, on the Zarnag. However, the monster quickly shrugged off all the debuffs. Nevertheless, one of the boulders managed to hit Zarnag, showing some effectiveness from the debuffs. Yoke, recognizing this, signaled Rain to take her turn. Rain cast one of her most potent spells, a 5th grade magic known as Thunderbolt. The lightning struck the monster, causing it to explode. The girls questioned the effectiveness of the attack, considering Rain had invested all her mana in it. Yoke, aware of Zarnag's cunning, anticipated that Rain's attack would have at least heavily damaged it. However, to Yoke's shock, he discovered that Zarnag didn't have a scratch on it. Realizing its overwhelming strength, Yoke pondered if the demon beast might be a named monster. Seeing that Zarnag looked fine, Silk couldn't help but feel devastated. It was obviously too strong for them to handle. Despite being scared, Silk continued using the nearby branches to attack, but Zarnag casually flung them aside. It even got the chance to counter, but Yoke was there to save Silk using his Blink Shadow. Yoke then checked on Silk, who claimed that she was fine, but it was clear that she was shaken. The situation was dire, with Silk scared and Marina injured. Bottles scattered as Rain had just finished recovering her mana. She asked them to buy her some time since it was the only way. Yoke was worried because Rain's previous all-out attack had been useless against Zarnag. Betting everything on the same attack was too risky, and Yoke wondered if there was anything they could do. He then resolved himself and bet everything on the magic that he secretly possessed. Yoke used a scroll of light shield to protect the girls. He requested Silk and Rain to distract and restrain the monster, even if just for a brief moment. Marina was advised to conserve her stamina for the final strike using her magic blade. Yoke assured the girls that he would come up with a solution and encouraged them not to give up. Silk, displaying a bright expression, agreed, bringing relief to Yoke. Yoke then activated an incredibly large magic circle, reminding himself not to hesitate, as this particular magic was their only hope in this dire situation. It wasn't a complete spell yet, as it involved a combination of all the spells he knew. Silk instructed Marina to prepare, and with the assistance of the Dryads, Marina went all out. Zarnag was temporarily bound by the branches, providing Marina with an opportunity to attack. However, even in that restrained state, Zarnag managed to dodge and create some distance. Rain completed her spell, encasing Zarnag in a powerful ice coffin. Silk, utilizing the Dryads, helped hold the ice coffin in place. The girls signaled to Yoke that it was the perfect moment. Yoke then unleashed a 5th grade magic known as Prismic Magic. It was the last chance the girls had given him, and Yoke hoped that this powerful attack would be enough to bring down Zarnag. The girls watched as Zarnag got hit by Yoke's spell. Surprisingly, it continued to move forward as if nothing had happened. Just when everyone thought they were defeated, Zarnag began tearing up and foaming at the mouth. Rain and Silk were confused about what was happening, and Yoke instructed Marina to take action. Marina drew her magic blade, acknowledging that they would have perished without Yoke's help. The rest of the group, including the other girls and Yoke, encouraged Marina, knowing that they couldn't face Zarnag individually. Despite this, Marina achieved victory for the team by slicing Zarnag's thick neck in one powerful stroke. Zarnag's head flew off and rolled to the ground. Yoke knelt down, realizing they had won. Silk and Rain hugged him tightly, with Marina joining in. Yoke noticed the girls were unusually quiet during the embrace, but he hugged them back, concluding the raid in an emotionally charged silence. 2 days earlier, the Clover Party had returned to the Adventurers Guild without any problems. They became famous after successfully subduing Zarnag, a feat that was broadcasted live. Silk found it surprising that they were getting attention now, and Rain felt proud that Yoke's true power was witnessed by everyone. However, Yoke wasn't comfortable with all the attention he was receiving. The girls encouraged him to be more confident, assuring him that he was incredible enough to use an original spell. This revelation surprised Marina, who had been asleep when Yoke explained the magic he used. Amazed, she wondered how it worked. Yoke then explained that he simply combined alchemy with various types of magic, including various status ailments and debuffs simultaneously. Rain, as a mage, was impressed, noting that multicasting could combine multiple spells into one. Suddenly, Yoke's expression went blank and Rain noticed. Yoke had made a mistake, unintentionally revealing his true feelings on his face. Rain asked him to share whatever was on his mind. Yoke smiled, realizing that Rain could see through him. He had been trying to keep silent about the spell, but as he began to explain, Benwood, the guildmaster, appeared. The girls were scared by his imposing presence. Benwood wanted a private conversation with Yoke and asked the others to follow. Yoke had a sense of foreboding about it. Later, at the guildmaster's office, Benwood and Mamar greeted them to discuss their recent quest. Benwood happily praised everyone for defeating Zarnag, but oddly, he specifically praised Yoke without clear reasons. This made everyone uneasy. He then brought up the live broadcast where people saw Yoke's unique spell, one that hadn't been officially recognized. If the Royal Academy deemed it forbidden, Yoke could face serious charges. The girls passionately defended Yoke, insisting that he use the spell to save them. Benwood urged them to calm down, emphasizing that it was only a possibility. He then stood up, apologized for getting the Clover Party into trouble, and assured them that he would take full responsibility. He mentioned that he had already received a positive response from the Royal Academy. At that moment, Mamar apologized as well, admitting that she was the one who assigned them the quest. The girls were surprised to see experienced adventurers apologizing to them, and insisted that it was all thanks to Yoke. They urged the veterans to lift their heads. Benwood and Mamar then expressed their gratitude. Benwood, looking at the girls, complimented Yoke on having excellent disciples. Yoke grinned, expressing his pride in them. Benwood agreed and recalled the Royal Academy's response. The message stated that the spell's widespread use was prohibited, but since it was evident in the broadcast that Yoke hadn't violated any rules, he was not guilty. Benwood clarified that the magic would be exclusive to Yoke alone. Upon hearing the news, the girls celebrated, but Benwood cautioned them not to celebrate too early. He went on to recognize each girl's individual performance during the raid and announced their promotion to C rank. The girls were elated by this great news. Yoke, on the other hand, achieved even higher recognition, being promoted to A rank after showcasing his original magic against Zarnag. The girls were even more excited than Yoke upon learning this. Yoke, initially speechless, eventually laughed it off. Benwood was surprised by Yoke's subdued reaction to achieving the rank he had always desired. Yoke explained that it was too sudden for him. Benwood smiled, congratulated Yoke, and reminded him that he was now an A-rank adventurer. Shortly after, Mamar presented their rewards, and Silk pondered whether it was okay to accept them all. Mamar clarified that the quest had now reached a B-ranked status, and because their party had brought back Zarnag's body intact, the money in front of them was a reasonable reward. Benwood then spoke up, offering a personal reward of 1 platinum coin, a premium in the kingdom. He presented it as an apology, surprising the girls with the generous amount. Benwood claimed it was mere pocket change for him as a guildmaster. Marina wondered about its value, and Mamar explained that it equaled 100 bills. Silk, upon hearing this, exclaimed that they had already achieved their goal of buying their own base. The girls celebrated and Yoke congratulated them. In that moment, Silk questioned whether it was appropriate to be rewarded with such a significant amount. She felt uneasy about achieving their goal so easily. Yoke reassured her, urging her not to be formal and emphasizing his full support for their dreams as a fellow party member. Silk warmly agreed, but the veterans playfully teased them about being a great team. Despite Yoke's attempt to clarify that there was nothing romantic between him and the girls, Benwood jokingly told them to leave, and the girls playfully dragged Yoke away. Benwood had watched the Clover party leave from his office. He found it amusing that teasing Yoke was still so effortless. Mamar had cautioned Benwood about going too far, but the guildmaster argued that Mamar was even more relentless in teasing. Then their conversation took a serious turn as they discussed a named monster that had unexpectedly appeared in Orden. Benwood anticipated an overflow occurring. Even more concerning, a stampede might be on the horizon. A month ago, a show aired, and it was about the Clover Party. Everyone was excited to see the team take on a monster named Lefty Hand. The commentators praised Yoke a lot, calling him the leader of the party. As they talked about Yoke's fast multicast skills, a man at a table started shaking with anger. There was a loud slam on the table, and people found out it was Simon from Yoke's old group. Simon was frustrated to see Yoke become A-ranked, with everyone cheering for him. He didn't understand why people found it interesting to watch the Clover Party defeat low-floor bosses. Simon thought they were all foolish. He was also upset that more adventurers were becoming weak. Thunder Pike, his current, always lacked members and kept failing their quests. Because of this, a sponsor decided to stop supporting them. Simon tried recruiting official members for Thunder Pike, but no one stayed, and he blamed Yoke for their misfortune. Barry then accused Yoke of being arrogant, and Simon couldn't believe they were the ones suffering. Suddenly, Barry had an idea. Since they couldn't find a new member, he suggested recruiting Yoke back to Thunder Pike. Simon was confused by Barry's suggestion. Barry insisted that Yoke was better than everyone else. Simon agreed, remembering they never failed a quest with Yoke. Simon thought having Yoke around meant they wouldn't have to do errands themselves. However, he worried because Yoke left on his own. Barry assured Simon that Yoke would come back, citing money as the reason for his departure. Barry suggested raising Yoke's salary, convinced it would bring him back. Simon knew Yoke wouldn't build credibility by sticking with low-ranked quests. Despite this, Simon agreed to compromise for Yoke and supported Barry's idea. Simon recalled Yoke's dream of reaching the Abyss Gate, requiring permission from the Adventurers Guild, the government, and being in an A-ranked party. Simon felt embarrassed that Yoke left their qualified party because of money. Barry encouraged Simon to talk to Yoke when they met, and Simon repeated his willingness to compromise. They cheered, claiming they were being generous for Yoke. A few hours ago, the Clover Party faced off against a C-ranked demon beast named Lefty Hand. The hand monster launched magical attacks, but Yoke quickly stepped in, creating shields and protecting Marina, who was at the front. Silk enlisted the help of the Dryads to restrain the monster, allowing Rain to unleash a fourth-grade spell known as Lightning. Despite their efforts, the monster proved resilient. Recognizing the need for a stronger move, Yoke employed the trusty Scroll of Rockbreak. Spikes of hardened earth shot through the hand monster, causing it to crash to the ground with a loud thud. The team celebrated their success, having defeated the monster, and Yoke concluded the live broadcast. With the quest accomplished, they made their way back to the guild. A month had passed since Clover was founded. Despite facing challenges, the girls had improved through their experiences. Carrying their dreams, they tirelessly worked on their skills, guided by Yoke. Each girl became stronger in her own expertise and roles. When they returned to the guild one night, Marina wondered if Mamar was still there. Yoke questioned her interest, and Marina explained that Yoke seemed close to Mamar. Yoke shared that Mamar had been a great help when he was a newbie adventurer. He described Mamar as the most senior staff in the guild, once known as the Grey Hermit and the strongest among the previous generation of adventurers. Rain teased Marina about being jealous, but she denied it. Silk reminded everyone to focus on counting their adventurer credits and suggested they spend the night drinking together. As they talked, someone approached and greeted Yoke. Yoke instructed the girls to report to the receptionist first. Though worried, they hurried off as Yoke asked Simon what he wanted to discuss. Simon haughtily smiled, indicating he had something to talk about. He had invited Yoke to grab a drink and chat with Barry at their table. Yoke sighed, saying he was tired from dungeon exploring. Simon stopped him, saying he had a good deal that could help Yoke. Our main character scolded his childhood friend, warning him about scams. Simon told him to stop lecturing, which angered Yoke. Simon bragged and blamed Yoke for not listening. Yoke remembered how Simon always made himself the hero of his stories. Yoke tried to excuse himself, but Simon grabbed his shoulder, insisting he go back to Thunder Pike. He said Yoke might miss a good deal and offered to solve money problems. Yoke got mad at Simon's nonsense. He agreed that money was part of why he left, but said the main reason was that they thought the Abyss Gate was nonsense. Plus, he was now part of Clover, a group with similar dreams. Yoke declared he was the leader of Clover and couldn't return to Thunder Pike. Simon got upset, questioning Yoke's attitude. Yoke claimed he was being neutral and reminded Simon that he agreed to him leaving Thunder Pike since they saw him as useless. Simon said they should act like adults and have common sense. Yoke wondered what trouble he caused for Simon to act petty. Simon said they'd been failing quests since Yoke left. Yoke told him to recruit new members as he was treated like baggage. Simon said Yoke was being exploited by his current party, calling the girls shameless for their low credibility. For the first time, Yoke glared angrily at Simon, who was flustered. Yoke corrected him, saying Simon and his teammates were the ones exploiting him before. He wondered who the real shameless inferiors were. Yoke made it clear he wouldn't return to Thunder Pike and asked Simon to leave his current party. Yoke said his goodbyes and left. Simon claimed Yoke would regret his decision and left with Barry. Yoke rejoined the girls, and Marina began to wonder if Simon was someone from Yoke's past gatherings. Yoke assumed the girls had overheard everything and said sorry for the disturbance. Marina suddenly hugged Yoke and inquired if he would go back to Thunder Pike. Yoke already knew she had heard him mention it to Simon. Marina asked again, her concerns more evident in her eyes. Yoke apologized for causing her worry and assured her that he wanted to be with her for as long as possible. The girls blushed upon hearing Yoke's words, which seemed like a proposal. Yoke tried to clarify that it wasn't a proposal, but Silk reminded him that polygamy was accepted in their country. Another day dawned for the Clover Party, and an elderly man resembling the owner of KFC joined them. Despite appearances, he wasn't a fast food chain owner but a realtor ready to help the girls find their dream headquarters. Onlookers observed as they strolled through the streets. Monday, the old man felt honored to be chosen by a rapidly growing party. Yoke was pleased with their growing fame, but the intense gazes from men bothered him. Understandably, he was in the company of 3 beautiful girls. Silk expressed gratitude that Yoke accompanied them, though Yoke didn't mind it. Yoke admired Silk for connecting with a friendly real estate agent, and Silk mentioned consulting with Mamar. She wondered if Yoke also had knowledge about real estate. Yoke casually mentioned that a support member should have some knowledge about it too. The Monday real estate agency used to be well known, had a strong reputation, and had close ties to the guild. On that Monday, they introduced the first house, a bungalow close to the guild, market, and trading centers. The girls were impressed because it was newly built. However, Yoke noticed some shortcomings, particularly regarding security. He explained that bungalows are easy targets for theft, especially for women living in them. Monday was impressed by Yoke's knowledge, and Marina loudly supported his insights. Even though the house was great, the Clover Party decided to check out the next one. They soon arrived at a huge renovated apartment building with shared spaces and individual rooms. Yoke was impressed to see underground storage and a terrace. Despite being far from the guild, Yoke told the girls that the place was great, and they all unanimously agreed. Monday then suggested checking out the third house since it was considered better than the apartment type. On their way, Marina got excited, but Rain noticed that Yoke seemed uncomfortable. He mentioned that Thunder Pike's base was in the neighborhood. Hearing this, Silk suggested canceling the trip to the third house, expressing her reluctance to have neighbors like the Thunder Pike Party. She assured Yoke that she wouldn't let them get close to him, causing our protagonist to blush. The other girls agreed with Silk's decision, and they signed the property deed. They celebrated, finally realizing one of their dreams, and Yoke congratulated them. He was pleased that the 3 girls would now live in a safe place, which left them puzzled. Silk explained to Yoke that it was their party's base, meaning that Yoke would also be moving in. Everyone fell silent, continuing to be confused. Yoke had asked again if it was him and them living together. Silk then corrected him, saying that they lived together as members of the Clover Party. Yoke claimed he was happy to be treated as an equal, but he was a man. With teary eyes, Marina asked if Yoke didn't want to live with them. Flustered, Yoke claimed it would be fun living with the girls, causing the girls to have different expressions. The girls threw more logical reasons on why Yoke needed to stay with them, especially if the girls were left all alone. In the end, Yoke agreed, making the girls victorious. Still, Yoke suggested putting locks on every room. The girls looked at each other and agreed since they knew what Yoke meant. Silk then decided to contact the moving agency so they could have an early celebration. In the past few days, Yoke and the girls brought in some furniture and set up the kitchen for a nice meal. Yoke even gave the girls a mirror that could show live adventure broadcasts. The girls were happy to have Yoke with them. Later, Yoke went to his bed and felt proud of his disciples. He was grateful to have his own room because he used to rent rooms before that. While thinking about buying supplies for the next day, someone knocked on his door. Rain showed up in her casual sleepwear, and Yoke felt a bit flustered seeing her in a vulnerable state. Rain asked Yoke for a favor. Yoke was taken aback by Rain not acting like her usual self. She then mentioned how Yoke didn't add a lock to his door despite telling the girls to do it. Sitting on Yoke's bed, she asked him for a favor, making Yoke feel flustered due to Rain's assertiveness. The following day, Yoke and Rain visited the marketplace, where numerous magical items were on display. Yoke had grasped Rain's words from the previous night. Seeing Rain in casual attire, Yoke couldn't help but find Rain incredibly cute. Rain, curious about what was amiss, asked Yoke, who mentioned noticing how well-dressed Rain was. Flustered, Rain explained it was their first time going out alone together. Feeling unsure, Rain thought she might have made a mistake since it was her first time hanging out with a boy. She worried if she looked strange. Yoke, caught off guard, remained silent, making Rain uneasy due to his lack of response. Rain apologized and attempted to walk away, but Yoke asked her to wait and took hold of her hand. Time seemed to stand still for Rain, who blushed intensely. The two had restarted the awkward silence from earlier. Rain felt flustered when she realized she was holding Yoke's hand. She was surprised when Yoke pointed it out and said she didn't look weird but cute instead. The sudden compliment caught Rain off guard, and she couldn't help but blush. Yoke then asked what Rain had been searching for. Rain admitted she hadn't come out to find something specific. She just wanted to spend time alone with Yoke. Feeling flustered, Yoke suggested moving on. However, they fell into another awkward silence until Rain giggled, realizing she had made things awkward. The two laughed it off and decided to casually wander around the market. Rain had wondered if Yoke was accustomed to visiting the shops. Yoke admitted that although many items seemed unimpressive, they often turned out to be surprisingly practical. Rain understood that Yoke possessed the ability to repair broken items as he was an alchemist. Yoke then shared that, with luck, he could even discover artifacts from labyrinths. Upon hearing this, Rain pondered if they might come across something that could enhance her magic sense. The two wandered around the marketplace, exploring various products while avoiding sketchy ones. Yoke felt happy seeing Rain enjoying the item they had just bought. However, he had noticed Rain acting strangely since the night before. Putting the pieces together, Yoke questioned Rain about whether there was something she needed to share with him. Rain became silent for a moment and then asked if Yoke was considering returning to his previous party. The atmosphere turned serious as they both fell silent again. Rain acknowledged Yoke's skills as an adventurer and suggested that he should pursue his dream with the A-ranked party instead of sticking with them. She felt that Yoke was wasting his talents with their group and apologized. At first, Yoke couldn't find the words to respond. He reminded Rain of the promise they made with the other two girls to reach the end of the Abyss Gate. Despite his initial hesitation, Yoke expressed his happiness that the girls supported the dream that his previous party had dismissed as ridiculous. He genuinely wanted to stay with them, and asked Rain not to distance herself from him. Rain's mood shifted, and she appeared more relaxed. The two then headed home together. At that moment, a man accidentally bumped into Rain, causing her to drop the magic item she had just purchased. A thief quickly seized the opportunity, snatching the item and making a hasty escape, laughing all the way. Rain, lacking her usual mace, attempted to fight back, but it proved challenging. Yoke, eager to catch the thief, faced unexpected obstacles as the street suddenly became crowded. Fearing he might lose sight of the thief, a girl passing by assured him she would handle the situation. This girl with animal ears skillfully navigated through the crowd with impressive agility. Rain and Yoke were amazed, barely hearing her footsteps as she ran. Observing her attire and abilities, Yoke assumed she was a seasoned adventurer. The girl successfully apprehended the thief and demanded that he return what he had stolen. The guards thanked the girl, and Yoke and Rain did the same shortly after. The girl seemed surprised by the gratitude, insisting it was nothing. She felt a bit awkward receiving sincere thanks. Despite her reassurance, Yoke and Rain were more focused on her cat ears. Yoke recognized her as a Furchi, a race known for keen senses suitable for scouts and hunters. However, he noticed that her skills went beyond her race's natural abilities. The girl then admitted that she always cared about other people's business, especially if a little girl was in trouble. Rain felt a pang of hurt upon hearing this. The girl, unaware of Rain's feelings, speculated whether Rain was Yoke's little sister, inadvertently causing more emotional distress. It wasn't long before the girl realized her mistake and apologized. She then assumed that Rain was Yoke's girlfriend, leading to a wide smile on Rain's face. Yoke attempted to deny the catgirl's assumption, but Rain intervened and stopped him. The catgirl had claimed she wanted to do something and invited Rain to join her. She noticed Rain's hair had come untied and fixed it, suggesting that Rain should have a lovely hairstyle for their date. Rain thanked her and smiled sweetly. The two continued chatting, and Yoke was impressed that the catgirl easily made friends with the shy Rain. Yoke realized that the Clover party didn't have a scout yet and hoped the catgirl could join them. Despite assuming she already had a party, Yoke wanted to invite her but needed to talk to his girls first. Suddenly, the catgirl called out to Yoke and asked if Rain looked cute with her new hairstyle. Yoke was stunned and admitted that Rain did look cute. The catgirl teased the two, noticing their shyness and red faces. Yoke then invited the catgirl to a meal as a thank you, but she didn't want to ruin their date. All of a sudden, the catgirl got really scared when she remembered something. She started to panic, saying she was in big trouble. In a haste, she said goodbye and left Yoke and Rain. Rain thought that the catgirl might be working for someone strict and scary. She smiled and said she had a feeling they would meet again. Yoke was surprised and watched the catgirl run away. He also had the same feeling. A week later, Yoke and the girls arrived at a dungeon. Yoke checked on how they were doing. All three girls were now wearing new gear that made them look even better. Yoke thought this was the kind of quality he expected from Earthies, a well-known workshop. He then told the girls to go on their first mission as a team. The Earthies workshop hired Quattro to explore a dungeon and come back. Quattro was far from Finis, where Yoke and the girls came from. They had to go through a nearby dungeon named Eon all the way up to the 4th floor. When they finished Eon, they would find a path leading to another dungeon called Odred. That would be the end of their journey. Yoke wasn't worried because Eon wasn't challenging and they had efficient equipment with them. Even though they got the equipment for free, Yoke reminded the girls to be careful with it, emphasizing that it would be featured in advertisements. This left Marina confused as Yoke had already explained this to them before. He clarified that their footage in the dungeon would be used to promote Earthy's new products. Marina, feeling unprepared because she hadn't done her skincare routine, started to freak out. Yoke reassured her that she didn't need to worry because her skin and hair were beautiful as they were. As Marina was getting anxious, Silk wondered if they could successfully pull off the task. Yoke assured Silk that no one could wear the equipment better than her. Meanwhile, Rain observed the situation, feeling embarrassed for the other girls. Yoke then called Rain, but instead of complimenting her, he gave instructions on how to make their video more eye-catching. Rain silently pouted, and Yoke wondered what was bothering her. Silk intervened, asking Yoke about Rain's appearance in her new outfit. Observing the accessories and ribbons, Yoke casually described Rain as cute. This caused Rain to feel embarrassed, and the other girls scolded Yoke for being too much. Once the girls received lots of compliments, they went ahead and got to the dungeon, which looked really nice on the inside. Yoke then told them where the staircases were on each floor. Because there was a gap between the floors, Marina said they could use a rope to climb down. Yoke tossed a rock into the gap, but it vanished when a shadowy figure grabbed it. Yoke explained that even though it seemed straight, the floors got twisted when the place turned into a maze. He warned the girls to be cautious and assured them that things would go smoothly if they avoided falling. Silk had wondered if there were any floor bosses. Yoke began telling a frightening tale about a floor boss from a distant past. Holding his lantern, he described a shadowy humanoid boss with glowing eyes that protected treasures from intruders. Moreover, this mysterious boss monster used dark magic. The use of such magic was prohibited due to its ability to cause pain, awaken the dead, and spread unhappiness. Learning or using it was banned because it involved tapping into the power of evil gods. Yoke had warned the girls to be careful, cautioning them about the dangers of being dragged into the world of the dead. However, he couldn't resist teasing them, pretending that a monster lurked behind them. Startled, the girls rushed over and hugged Yoke. While Marina appeared genuinely scared, Silk seized the opportunity to play along. In the process, Yoke ended up being pushed to the ground, where he quickly apologized for the scare, assuring them it was just a joke. In Yoke's story, the monster he mentioned was the Shadow Stalker, a creature that hadn't been seen in 10 years. This information made Marina feel more at ease, thinking the quest might be easier than expected. With GoPro-kun tagging along, they continued their adventure. Little did they know, a pair of bright eyes observed them from the shadows. The Clover Party had been exploring the labyrinth for a while now, encountering traps, battling easy monsters, and stumbling upon a magical bag that caught Rain's interest. They were nearing the staircase to the next floor, looking forward to another delicious lunch prepared by Yoke. Excitement filled the air. However, Yoke noticed something off about Silk. Silk mentioned detecting a strange smell ahead. Yoke, sensing danger, immediately instructed the girls to step back. Without warning, a powerful attack narrowly missed them. Out of nowhere, a group of orcs appeared, leaving Yoke puzzled about why such creatures were in that area. Silk, looking at the orcs with disdain, seemed to have a particular reason for her disgust. The orcs used to live up north and treated intelligent races as food, wrecking an ancient elven kingdom named Sandrion. Ever since that event, elves despised orcs as their sworn enemies. Yoke remembered that orcs were a military race, sorting themselves purely based on strength. Seeing the orcs in front of them without items, Yoke assumed they were low-ranked. However, orcs were sly and relied on numbers. When Marina attacked the orcs, they ignored her and headed towards Silk. Swiftly, Silk used a scroll of light shield. Yoke was confident that his team could handle the orcs with ease. Silk then sought the help of dryads and pushed the orcs to the edge of the floor. The orcs were surprised, and Yoke couldn't help but smirk. With the dryads around, the orcs couldn't move. Silk instructed Marina and Rain to attack. Rain cast a Tier 4 spell, Fireball. The massive ball of fire was hurled toward the orcs. Yoke then told Marina that there were 2 more left, and she quickly jumped in to slice the remaining orcs in half as Yoke cast debuffs on them. Yoke had been impressed with how composed and collected Silk seemed, thinking she might become the leader in the future. While Marina was celebrating their victory, Yoke took a moment to check on Silk and see if she was okay. Silk mentioned that she wanted to give herself credit for staying calm during the situation. Yoke praised her, calling her reliable, and Silk chuckled, half expecting Yoke not to acknowledge her by her race. She then reminded him that dark elves were considered traitors by elves, stemming from a rumor that they were once part of the elf population during the war with orcs, but turned into a dark army. Yoke was a bit surprised but wondered if orcs could really distinguish the difference. With a smile, he dismissed it as a superstition, and Silk agreed, thanking him. Just then, Marina approached, holding a scroll that they had obtained from the orcs. Upon checking, Yoke had claimed that it was the letter of revelation that could awaken the power of grace deep within, essentially an important item. He assumed that the orcs had looted it from dungeons or deceased individuals. However, it was not an item that was supposed to appear in Aeon. Marina wondered if it was from Odred, and Yoke agreed. Despite the absence of floor bosses in Aeon, Yoke wondered why orcs would venture deep into the labyrinth and why they had come in the first place. Yoke knew that orcs were a looting race that targeted lower floors of high-level labyrinths. As they pondered what caused the orcs to appear in Aeon, Yoke assumed that something had chased them, and that they were threatened by something. Yoke used Zarnag as an example, leading Rain to assume that it could be a demon beast. While Yoke attempted to deny that assumption, Marina suddenly turned pale and told Yoke to look behind him. Yoke then turned around and his eyes widened. A shadow in a human shape with bright eyes appeared. Yoke had warned the girls to be cautious because the monster known as Shadowstalker hadn't been seen for over 10 years. Suddenly, the Shadowstalker spoke up and revealed itself to be a recorded mysterious being. Everyone was surprised, and the Shadowstalker simply disappeared into the darkness. Yoke, seeing it escape, debated whether they should pursue it or ignore it. As they were near the staircase considered a safe area, Silk suggested ignoring the Shadowstalker. Marina agreed, not sensing any hostility from the shadow monster. However, Rain thought it would be better to catch it to gather more information about the monster. Despite Rain's suggestion, Yoke decided to follow the majority and ignore it, but they still needed to be cautious because it was an undead type of monster. Marina was surprised to learn that the Shadowstalker was undead, and Yoke explained that some undead monsters had intelligence and could attack at any time. Yoke reminded the girls to be careful against dark magic, especially curses that could only be broken by killing the caster. However, some curses had different conditions. They would only disappear when certain conditions were met or end, and in the worst case, they could last until the victim died. Silk found it absurd, and Yoke explained that using dark magic also had a price to pay. Even holy magic like purification of the undead wasn't enough to defeat them unless weakened. Yoke reminded them to be careful and to use holy water while moving to the next floor. The group reached the staircase and had lunch. Marina wondered why monsters didn't appear on the stairs. Yoke explained that it was one of the many mysteries of labyrinth dungeons. He gave an example of a monster born from the labyrinth's magic power, which explained why they stayed in one area. Yoke shared his idea that each floor represented different worlds and showed the girls an illustration. The girls assumed that this was why the Shadowstalker couldn't approach them. Yoke advised them to relax and get ready. However, he couldn't shake off the memory of weird events, including the appearance of the Shadowstalker. He thought about worse things that could happen but felt it was too early to dwell on them. Yoke wondered if there were still monsters on the way. Soon after, Yoke and the girls reached the 4th floor and found it to be very dark. Yoke then asked Silk to seek help from the spirits of darkness. However, Silk noticed something above them. The Shadowstalker from earlier was staring at them intently. Yoke reassured them about its position, but then he noticed Rain suddenly stop breathing. Yoke realized that the Shadowstalker was using a magic that could penetrate walls. Yoke used a spell called Awakening to revive Rain. While moving away, Yoke noticed that the monster was using dark magic. Suddenly, Yoke was hit by a powerful curse spell and felt its strength. He fell on Rain's shoulder and the girls saw him losing consciousness. As he realized he was passing out, Yoke told the girls to run away before it was too late. The monster in front of them was essentially a demon that foretold someone's death. The Shadowstalker passed through the floor, which was supposed to be impossible, surprising the girls. Seeing Rain trying to wake up Yoke, Silk reminded the girls about what their master had told them regarding curses, to kill the caster of the curse. The girls decided to take down the Shadowstalker together. The Shadowstalker had smirked at the girls. Silk told the others to weaken it first and hide their master behind the wall. She asked Marina to keep attacking and Marina charged forward while Rain carried Yoke to the side. Marina began attacking the Shadowstalker relentlessly, not giving it a chance to cast another spell. It tried to escape, but Silk enlisted the help of the Dryads to attack it. However, the monster easily dodged everything. Rain confirmed that Yoke was in a safe place, and Silk used the power of the Wood Spirit to protect their master. While Rain was chanting a spell, Silk noticed that the Shadowstalker was only making fun of them. Angered, Rain then unleashed a 4th tier magic called Water Inversion. The Shadowstalker dodged the attack, but Marina was hot on its tail. However, the monster evaded her strike and escaped to another floor. It continued mocking them and began chanting another spell. Worried, Silk told the girls to quickly hide. Just then, the monster swiftly disappeared into the darkness. Marina was surprised to see it vanish. Suddenly, she got attacked from behind, causing her blood to spurt. Silk instructed Rain to quickly heal Marina, who was still struggling against the attack. Marina claimed she couldn't see or hear anything. The girls were panicking since their master's life was at stake. Meanwhile, Yoke dreamed of something he recognized. It was his past, and we saw Yoke as a little boy. Two adults, Yoke's guardian named Highness and his wife Irina, called him out, wondering why he seemed lost in thought. They asked Yoke if he was facing any troubles, and Yoke thanked them for their concern. As night fell, Yoke woke up because he needed to use the toilet. He discovered that his uncle and aunt were still awake, discussing Yoke's condition after surviving a monster attack. Unfortunately, his hometown had been attacked and even his parents were no longer there for him. The two guardians were worried for Yoke, and our protagonist sat on the staircase listening to his aunt cry with sympathy. Suddenly, the wind blew strongly. The two adults noticed it was snowing, unusual for the summer season. They sensed that something was amiss and familiar. Yoke rushed to the door, opened it, and called out for his father. Outside, a black-haired man appeared riding a huge wolf beast. Yoke's aunt asked the man to appear more normally next time, and he apologized, claiming it was a habit. The man landed on the ground and thanked the wolf named Celsius for the ride. The creature then flew away into the night sky. Yoke, surprised, asked his father about the wolf. Sage Feldio, an A-ranked adventurer and leader of the legendary group Anubis, wondered how Yoke was doing. He picked up his son and explained that the wolf was the spirit of water. Yoke wondered if it was his pet, and Sage expected Yoke to grow up amazing for calling a spirit a pet. Just then, Irina questioned why Sage caused a blizzard in the middle of the night. Sage explained that he had planned to go home early, but some things happened, so he asked Celsius for a ride to meet everyone. Irina couldn't believe that the unkempt man in front of them was the legendary leader of Anubis, who had overcome the labyrinth called Colorless Night. Irina asked Sage to have more dignity, but Sage claimed it was all about strength. Irina then called her brother a scammer. Saga and Yoke raced to Yoke's room to share more about his adventures. In Yoke's room, Saga said he had seen the edge of the world and described it as a beautiful place. Yoke happily listened to Saga's stories with sparkling eyes. Yoke praised his father, calling him awesome. Saga then mentioned that he would be leaving again in 2 days. Playfully, Saga pretended to feel shy about Yoke being sad, but Yoke insisted he wasn't sad. Saga wondered how Yoke was doing in the village, and Yoke assured him that he was getting along well with everyone, despite Simon causing some trouble. Still, Yoke missed his old house. While gazing at his son, Saga asked Yoke if he wanted to be an adventurer. Although Yoke acknowledged the danger, Saga sensed that it was what Yoke truly desired. He encouraged Yoke to be honest and explained that adventurers were free people who could rely on themselves. Even if everything familiar was gone, hometown, home, dreams, purpose, friends, and family, they could create a place they wanted to return to. Feeling determined, Yoke clenched his fist and admitted that he really wanted to be an adventurer. In response, Saga decided to train Yoke and asked him to address him as master. While Yoke dreamt about his past, the battle against the Shadow Stalker raged on. Marina was thrown against a wall, suffering severe injuries, but she bravely got back up to continue the fight. Rain and Silk, exhausted, supported Marina from the rear. Marina realized that the Shadow Stalker was toying with them and panicked as the enemy vanished from sight. Worries about their master's safety intensified. Silk suddenly instructed Marina to give it her all. Marina, confirming the plan, asked Rain to unleash her most powerful Great Wind spell, providing an opening for Marina to attack. She declared that this was their chance to counterattack. Silk had a realization when they first encountered the Shadow Stalker. Understanding its limitations was crucial for success. Knowing its appearance meant victory. Silk instructed Rain to use her spell to cover a large area. After drinking a mana potion, Rain cast Great Wind to unveil the monster's location. Marina was then tasked with finding the Shadow Stalker, as the hurricane weakened its invisibility magic. Despite Marina's efforts, the monster remained elusive. Silk, not giving up, utilized something with the help of the Dryads. Trees sprouted and leaves combined with the hurricane, revealing the target. Marina charged toward it, determined for victory. However, when she swung her sword, the Shadow Stalker smirked and countered with a hurricane spell using dark magic, causing injuries. Silk, shocked that Marina's attack was repelled, saw the monster seizing the opportunity to finish Marina off. Fortunately, a tree branch intervened, causing the Shadow Stalker to retreat to another floor. Silk rushed to Marina's side. Realizing that the Shadow Stalker had merely been toying with them, Silk became serious. The girls trembled as they saw the dark magic cannon creating orbs above them. Unable to move, they watched helplessly as the dark magic balls surged towards them. Rain had cast a barrier to block the Shadow Stalker's attack. Silk saw that they were safe, but she noticed something and jumped to shield Marina. She took a hit that got through the barrier and fell to the ground. Marina panicked, and even Rain got distracted. The Shadow Stalker seized this opportunity to attack Rain. At the same time, a young Yoke sensed that something was wrong. Saga asked what was the matter, and Yoke said he felt a bad omen in his heart and had to leave. Saga was relieved that Yoke had noticed and told him he wanted his dream to change. He asked Yoke to remember his true self. Yoke transformed back into his adult self and realized he was in his second hometown. Saga explained that the saga he saw was not real. It was an image created in Yoke's dream world. Yoke had subconsciously called for help and Saga was there to assist. Yoke recalled encountering the Shadow Stalker and grew serious, realizing that the three girls were left alone, battling the dangerous monster. Saga urged Yoke to find a way out of the dream or risk dying, along with the girls in the real world. Back in Eon, Marina gasped for air in panic. She saw Silk and Rain lying in their own blood. Desperation filled Marina as tears welled up in her eyes. The laugh of the Shadow Stalker echoed through the labyrinth's floor. Marina knew everyone was exhausted and the monster's next attack could be fatal. Marina fell to the ground, realizing she couldn't move anymore. Apologetic thoughts overwhelmed her as she felt she had wasted the chance given by the others. Tears streamed down her face as she apologized. Suddenly, she heard rustling and saw Silk getting up. Marina's eyes widened as she witnessed Silk looking different, surrounded by mana. Silk remembers when her own kind labeled her a traitor among elves. Fortunately, she found companions and a master who didn't mind such judgments. Frustrated, Silk declared that she wouldn't let anyone take away her precious friends. Despite bleeding heavily and Marina's warnings, Silk kept walking forward. She sensed the connection between her body and soul weakening, allowing her to feel the mana around her more keenly. She realized she was tapping into the true power of the Dark Elves. Her resentment fueled her magic and she could easily sense the refined mana around her. With a single glance, Silk located the Shadow Stalker and used the Drades to attack it. Despite its attempts to dodge, the Shadow Stalker was still found. Marina couldn't believe what was happening, especially seeing Silk's eyes sparkling like amber. Marina trembled as she got back up, feeling the healing energy. Rain still managed to cast a healing spell. Silk had no trouble talking with the Dryads anymore, and her attacks became quicker, stronger, and more agile. Marina, feeling confident, charged ahead, confident that she could now defeat the monster effortlessly. Silk in turn enlisted the help of the Dryads to ensnare the Shadow Stalker while Marina leaped in for an attack. Marina successfully slashed the Shadow Stalker for the first time, causing the creature to collapse to the ground. Relieved, Silk dropped to the ground, exhausted from her efforts. However, to their dismay, the Shadow Stalker was not yet defeated and launched a counterattack on Marina. Silk, panicking, realized she had lost her connection with the Dryads. Just as Marina was about to be in real danger, a Scroll of Life Shield kicked in and saved her. The girls quickly figured out that it was Yoke who activated it after waking up from a dream. Yoke, visibly exhausted, stood up, and when the girls asked if he was okay, he assured them he was fine. Despite his claim, Marina couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off with Yoke. The Shadow Stalker attempted to attack Yoke, but he skillfully defended himself. Yoke, now angered, unleashed a powerful spell against the Shadow Stalker, giving the girls a sense of unease. To be precise, Yoke cast 1,000 spells of snares on the Shadow Stalker, causing the creature to stumble around like a clumsy person. Adding to the onslaught, Yoke simultaneously cast 6 debuff spells, and even utilized a Scroll of Rock Blast and Gravity. Witnessing the once menacing Shadow Stalker reduced to a sorry state left the girls utterly speechless. Yoke confidently stated that his attacks were effective, crediting his girls for weakening the monster. He even taunted the monster, telling it to endure the consequences. Yoke had casually healed the girls. He clenched his fist and attempted to apologize to them. Silk stopped him, saying that the fight hadn't ended. Despite appearing injured, the Shadow Stalker got back up, and Silk could see that it was preparing to attack again. It seemed to be gathering a large amount of mana on its body, signaling a plan to self-destruct. Silk told Yoke to weaken the monster while Marina and Rain would deliver the final blows. Marina decided to showcase her special attack, and Rain planned to make things painful for the monster. Yoke cast more weakening magic. Silk used a 4th tier spirit magic named Iron Maiden. Marina employed a magic sword technique called Void Edge, and Rain utilized a 4th tier magic called Turn Undead. The trapped Shadow Stalker exploded, and Silk mentioned that she couldn't sense its mana anymore. She exclaimed that their mission had been completed. Suddenly, Yoke quietly hugged the girls. The girls began to panic as they were embraced by his arms. Yoke apologized to them and felt relieved that they were safe. He assured them that nothing was more valuable to him than all of them, and he reminded them to run if he instructed them to do so, as he didn't want them to get hurt. Silk playfully pinched Yoke's cheek and advised her master not to always sacrifice himself. She couldn't believe that Yoke was trying to avoid his role as a supporter. Silk claimed that though they might seem unreliable now, they would surely become reliable adventurers in the future, worthy of being by Yoke's side. She asked Yoke to support them without spoiling them. Marina and Rain agreed to fight together and vowed to always stay together. Yoke then remembered Saga telling him that adventurers were free. As he thought about losing his hometown, he hugged the girls who had become precious to him. Yoke expressed his love for them. Silk and Rain blushed and acted flustered, while Marina casually stated that she also loved Yoke. Yoke decided to create a place he could call home by himself. A couple of days passed, and Yoke along with the girls came back to the girl and told her about the Shadow Stalker. They hung around in Quattro for a bit and later headed to a meeting with a serious vibe. Present at the meeting were Benwood, who was the Guildmaster of Fines, a guy named Clive, who was the Guildmaster of Quattro, and Marquis Betty Boa, the president of the Royal Academy of Arts. Yoke and the others felt nervous encountering two guildmasters and the person in charge of the aristocrats in the country. Yoke was especially concerned because Betty Boa seemed pretty proud. At that moment, Marina inquired of Yoke about the identity of the old man. Yoke, in turn, tried to explain things to Marina, who was completely unaware of the higher positions in the country. Upon learning that the person she had referred to as an old man held significance, Marina began to feel nervous, much like the others in the group. Betty then expressed his frustration, stating that they were wasting his time. He had come because he heard a C-ranked party had defeated the Shadow Stalker, and he couldn't believe someone uninformed had accomplished it. Marina apologized, but Betty corrected them, acknowledging their achievements. Yoke and the others expressed gratitude for his recognition. Benwood laughed, observing Betty's usual prideful demeanor, and praised the Clover Party. He went on to assert that the Shadow Stalker was a special monster, the same as Zarnag. The girls were surprised because they thought it was just a simple undead. Benwood heard that it could use dark magic, which was unusual. Without a doubt, it was considered an A-ranked monster. Benwood thought it was amazing that the three girls working together were able to defeat it. He also mentioned that it was the first time they had recorded a battle against an unknown monster. Clive thanked them for the sudden discovery, which led to the labyrinth being closed to prevent further losses. Betty said it was thanks to the Clover Party for quickly dealing with the problem. As a representative of the Royal Academy of Arts, the prideful Betty Boa praised the members of the Clover Party. He also promised to give them an award in addition to the compensation for completing the quest. He changed the topic and asked for Yoke's attention. He wondered if Yoke knew why someone great like him had come over personally to meet them. Yoke was impressed that the prideful Marquis also felt something was off. Yoke then explained, with a resolute expression, that the Shadow Stalker might be responsible for even more phenomena happening around. He claimed that the worst possible event would be the occurrence of a stampede. As a disclaimer, Yoke mentioned that his opinion was based on pure speculation and might be wrong. Betty was fine to hear anything since it was coming from someone who experienced the threat of the Shadow Stalker. Betty heard him clearly and thought his assumptions were true, making the atmosphere in the meeting room tense. At that moment, Marina asked about something called a stampede. Slick then scolded Marina. Yoke reminded her that he had already explained a strange rule in dungeons that stops monsters from leaving their assigned areas. When this rule is broken, monsters come out and people call it an overflow. If overflows happen from multiple dungeons at the same time, it's called a stampede. A stampede is dangerous for cities and villages. Yoke said his hometown, a big village, turned into ruins in just a few days due to a stampede. The girls were shocked to hear about Yoke's past, but their master used the story as an example. Suddenly, Marina felt upset. Benwood claimed that he started an investigation after the incident with Zarnag and discovered other strange occurrences. Yoke realized that their encounter with the Shadow Stalker was a result of an overflow. He thought that if it was Zarnag, monsters would have emerged from the dungeon. Silk stated that there wouldn't be a single soul left. The conversation became more intense for the girls. Betty reassured them, mentioning that their country had expertise in conquering dungeons and would confront any threat using the information they had gathered over the years. He urged the young people to follow him and stay calm. Yoke agreed, stating that a stampede was just a swarm of monsters and that there were various ways to deal with them. Betty was surprised, while Benwood just laughed it off. The girls also found Yoke amusing and giggled. Betty felt impressed when Yoke referred to a stampede as just a swarm of monsters. He was surprised to find that the Red Mage of Clover resembled his master. The girls were curious about this resemblance, and Betty wondered what the great mage Sage Ferdio was currently up to, surprising the girls even more. Yoke thought he had already shared in about his master with the girls. Betty went on to explain why Yoke was close to Benwood and Mamar. They were former party members of Anubis, which Saga led as the leader. Benwood suddenly recalled someone saying hi to Yoke. The girls became excited upon learning that Yoke's master was the legendary adventurer. This caused a commotion, and Betty, annoyed by the noise, got upset. The girls apologized and the old men asked the members of Clover to leave them alone. Betty then suggested to the guildmasters that they should investigate further. Benwood wondered about Betty's thoughts after meeting Saga's disciple. Betty praised Yoke's knowledge and stated that he deserved to be remembered. He also claimed to have the image and name of the Red Mage from the Clover Party firmly in his mind. A month ago, Yoke was wrapping up his work in the middle of the night. He had planned to keep going with his holy water project when the girls burst into his room. Silk, looking a bit annoyed, complained about Yoke working too much. Yoke tried to explain that he would finish soon, but he got a bit flustered because the girls were wearing light night clothes. Silk kept scolding Yoke, but his attention was all over the place. Unsure of where to look, he covered his face and couldn't help but wonder what they were wearing. Silk told him not to change the subject and reminded him that they had been helping him with various things. Despite their assistance, Yoke was still sacrificing sleep by overworking. Yoke assured them he would get some rest as advised, but Silk didn't fully trust him. She then instructed Rain and Marina about their plan. The girls dragged Yoke onto his bed and they all lay down beside him. Yoke's mind tried to make sense of the situation but quickly became overwhelmed. Silk insisted that Yoke wouldn't sleep unless they surrounded him, wanting to bridge the gap he had created. Yoke realized this and apologized, asking Marina to move away because something was touching him. In response, Marina squeezed in, curious about what was touching him. In a moment of panic, Yoke turned his head to the right and accidentally bumped into Rain's face. The group, all around the same age, felt embarrassed. Yoke requested some alone time to sleep, but Silk scolded him instead, insisting it was impossible. Despite his protests, Silk ignored him and went to sleep. As the room grew quiet, Yoke was surprised to hear Marina snoring. Suddenly, Marina started nibbling on Yoke's ear. Yoke was shocked and wondered if Marina was just pretending. He quickly pulled his ear away, causing Rain to kiss Yoke's cheek. Flustered, Yoke apologized, but Rain was already knocked out from embarrassment. Silk had glared at Yoke for being too touchy with the other girls. Then she realized she had been hugging Yoke's arm the whole time and felt embarrassed. She stared at her master and started gently caressing Yoke's hand. Yoke was confused about what was happening until Silk locked their hands like lovers. Silk started giggling, and Yoke wondered if she was making fun of him. Silk claimed it was because Yoke wasn't sleeping yet, playfully teasing him, which made Yoke blush. He got mad at the defenseless girls and told them to be more careful, warning that there would be times when he couldn't hold himself back. Silk was surprised and asked Yoke if he meant something, but Yoke told her to sleep since she had told him to do the same. The night continued with Marina sleeping peacefully and Three Faces blushing. Morning came, and everyone looked sleep-deprived except for Marina. Meanwhile, in the underground canal of Murun, a group of familiar adventurers stayed in one of the small rooms with dry bread and jerky. Simon had asked the women to cook something, but Chimera said it was impossible because they didn't have many tools for cooking. Barry then mentioned Yoke, Simon's childhood friend, and Simon asked Barry not to bring up Yoke's name. Simon wondered if they still had enough potions, and Chimera explained that because of a certain someone, they only had a few left. Simon told Chimera that she was supposed to be restocking potions, and this reminded him of someone he didn't want to think about. With a sad expression, Jamie remembered how someone used to carry around ingredients, and cooking tools, and even buy consumables for the party with his own money. Simon interrupted her and asked if the broadcast was ready. Jamie said it would take a while, and Simon started teasing her, calling her a shabby magic user and errand girl. Chimera added that Jamie should at least do her part and quickly input something into the broadcast equipment. Jamie got flustered because the commands became messy. Chimera called her an idiot, assuming that it just needed simple magic. But Jamie explained that the equipment needed to be set up properly to avoid issues. Simon and Barry, unaware of the complexity, joined in calling Jamie an idiot when it came to magic, deeming her useless. Simon told her not to drag them down since they were only taking a simple request that had been exaggerated as a B rank. Simon considered the task of exterminating Bulguls, monkey-like monsters, as only a D rank quest. He criticized the one who rated the quest, calling them ignorant. Jamie wondered if there was a reason for the higher rank and reminded them about Yoke's warnings. Simon got mad and scolded Jamie while Barry laughed, dismissing Yoke's words as those of a coward. Simon proudly declared that an A rank like him would not fail a B rank quest. The Thunderpike Guild came back to the guild after a failed quest, looking all beaten up. The receptionist then suggested they take on lower ranked quests, but this made Simon really angry. He blamed the guild for not finding new members and for misjudging the quests, claiming there was a powerful monster they weren't told about. The receptionist reminded Simon that they'd been failing high-ranked quests, and if they kept it up, they'd lose their adventurer score and be demoted. She pointed out that their last quest was about investigating a canal, and the details mentioned that dealing with Bulguls could be tricky. She wondered if Simon's 5 years of experience meant nothing, as he didn't seem to understand the quest details. Simon got even angrier and continued blaming the receptionist for her attitude. He threatened to report her to her superiors, but the receptionist calmly told him to do as he pleased, and he stormed out of the reception area. The others in the guild worried about being demoted. While they were fretting, Simon heard a broadcast about the Clover Party. This just added to his frustration. The 3 girls from Clover appeared on the broadcast, and Simon's expression made it clear he was extremely angry, as if he wanted to hurt someone. The broadcaster said everyone knew about the Rising Party. Simon felt frustrated as he kept hearing about the Clover Party. The Clover Party was the big talk in town. The broadcasters then said that the next video from the Clover Party was about the Shadow Stalker, a weird rumor initially. Simon listened as they described the Shadow Stalker as a special monster, an A-rank one at that. The broadcasters thought Clover would soon be an A-ranked party, which shocked Simon. He couldn't understand why people considered such trash as special. The broadcast then showed a preview of the Clover Party's battle, featuring Yoke hugging 3 girls. Everyone was excited about this intense moment, but Barry remembered their plan to recruit Yoke back. Simon reassured them not to worry because he had a great idea. A few weeks later, a bird delivered mail to the Clover Party's base. It slipped through the door while everyone was eating and watching a broadcast together. The bird landed on the table, catching everyone's attention. Yoke noticed the mail was addressed to him and read it. Seeing his expression, Rain wondered who the letter was from. Yoke then said it was from Simon on behalf of the guild. Marina thought Simon might be trying to recruit Yoke again, but Yoke chose to ignore the invitation. Just then, the broadcast announced that Simon's party was planning to investigate the Endless Darkness, which was Yoke's original target. Confused, Yoke decided to go to the guild to find out what was happening. Shortly after, he got the news from Mamar that Yoke had been nominated by Simon's party to join them in investigating the Endless Darkness. Mamar presented him with the documents. Yoke thought Simon was being impolite, leaving Marina puzzled. Yoke clarified that there was a one-time request a party could use to recruit someone temporarily if they lacked a specialist. However, it only applied to inactive individuals. Yoke, being an active member, found it rude in this context. He informed Mamar that he would decline the invitation, and Mamar agreed, acknowledging it was a reckless move. Despite Yoke's refusal, the Royal Academy was already seeking information on unusual events, and Simon might have exploited this opportunity to make a request. Yoke, understanding the situation, declined the offer for both his and Simon's benefit. Mamar, anticipating Yoke's decision, had already prepared a mailbird in advance, impressing Marina. The girls were aware of Yoke's inclination to accompany them into the Endless Darkness, supporting Mamar's foresight. Yoke was taken aback and in a fluster confirmed their expectations. At that moment, someone burst into the guild looking for Yoke. It was Simon, demanding an explanation about Yoke's refusal. Yoke had instructed the girls not to take any action and confronted Simon. He stated that it was unavoidable because he lacked interest in accompanying Thunder Pike to Endless Darkness. Yoke reminded Simon that recruiting someone from an active party was against the rules. Simon then referred to Clover as a mere C-ranked party, and emphasized that to explore the Endless Darkness, Yoke would need assistance from an A-ranked party like his. In frustration, Simon told Yoke to stop and warned him not to become arrogant just because he was surrounded by girls and a foolish audience. He criticized Yoke for using the girls to attract sponsors and for staging emotional performances in low-level dungeons just for attention. Simon pointed out that Yoke was essentially a useless person who only did odd jobs. Yoke later understood that Simon had been upset because he led a famous rising party, and was trying to convince Yoke to join back his party to make him feel insignificant again. Yoke called Simon shameless and pitiful for making groundless accusations due to jealousy. Simon argued that Yoke was mistaken, mentioning that he only earned a small amount from a lower-ranked party. He advised Yoke to pursue his dreams, but Yoke firmly declined. Yoke corrected him that even if Simon used the Abyss Gate as a justification, taking on the Endless Darkness was still a risky plan for someone like the Thunderpike party. Other adventurers had a good laugh when they found out about Thunderpike's true situation. Simon got angry and started accusing Yoke of making a fool out of him. Yoke calmly explained that it wasn't his intention and reminded Simon of his responsibilities as a leader to be prepared before entering a dungeon. Simon continued to blame Yoke for Thunderpike's repeated failures, but Yoke advised him not to shift the blame to someone else. He pointed out that he always calculated and warned Simon about the dangers, but Simon dismissed it as the talk of a coward. Yoke emphasized that, for an adventurer, knowledge was just as important as combat skills. He wanted Simon to realize this. Yoke ultimately highlighted that Thunderpike kept failing because Simon wasn't taking the job seriously and was underestimating the responsibilities. Simon had been puzzled by Yoke's incomprehensible talk. The other adventurers witnessing the drama had agreed with Yoke's words, labeling Simon as foolish and an irresponsible leader. They thought Simon was disgusting for recruiting someone from another party right in front of their current party members. They went on to criticize Simon, calling him childish and rotten. They pitied Simon for being clueless except for looking down on others. Despite Yoke's attempt to lecture him, Simon acted like a spoiled child, telling Yoke to be quiet and insisting that Yoke was the one in the wrong. Simon paused to catch his breath, only to hear someone else call him disgusting again, leaving him speechless. Yoke issued a final warning to Simon, advising him to forget about Endless Darkness and take a good look at himself. Yoke instructed the girls to leave and bid farewell to Mamar. Silently passing by Simon, Yoke exited the guild, leaving Simon feeling frustrated and humiliated. A few weeks later, Yoke and the girls returned to the guild. Mamar apologized for the sudden call. As Mamar guided them to the reception office, Marina wondered why they were called. Yoke thought it might be another request. Marina was relieved because she had expected them to be scolded for turning down a request the other day. They arrived at the office, and Yoke was surprised to see Marquis Betty chilling in the office waiting for them. Yoke wondered if Betty was upset about the declined request. Betty then started the meeting and asked Benwood to fetch something. He tossed it toward Yoke, and our protagonist realized it was a scroll of exit. Marina questioned what it was, and Yoke explained that it was a one-time use item to help adventurers exit a dungeon whenever they wanted. They wondered why Betty gave them such a precious item. Betty then announced that the Great Hymn had come to nominate a mission from the kingdom. He asked them to listen carefully. He wanted the Clover Party to investigate the endless darkness to help understand the cause behind the stampede. Everyone was shocked by the sudden bomb. Betty further discussed that the strange events happening lately were concentrated around endless darkness. They had already sent out 2 A-ranked parties, but they couldn't gather any solid information. He wanted information as soon as possible, and Betty trusted Yoke's discerning eyes and deduction capabilities. The girls were thrilled to get such a request because their master had finally taken a step toward his dream. However, Yoke stayed quiet about it until he asked the girls to withdraw from the request. He said they still didn't have enough strength and apologized, knowing he couldn't ensure the girls' safety in the risky dungeon. Betty then wondered what Yoke meant and told him to stop doubting himself. Ever since watching Yoke on broadcasts, Betty recognized Yoke's strength. He questioned if anyone else could perform multi-quick cast and create new spells using alchemy. Impressed by Yoke's vast knowledge, decision-making skills, intuition, and heart, Betty held high expectations for Yoke. Betty continued praising Yoke until Yoke became teary-eyed. Yoke believed he could handle things and return safely with the necessary information, stating that since Saga was gone, the country could only rely on him. The girls then encouraged Yoke to accept the request. Yoke thanked the girls and Betty. With a determined expression, Yoke agreed to the country's investigation request. Upon learning that Yoke was accepted, Mamar presented the details of the request, indicating that the Clover Party had been designated as an A-rank party for the quest. Marina assumed they would get to see the sealed object proving the existence of the Abyss Gate, an account of battles within the endless darkness left by the legendary Anubis Party. The girls eagerly read the book's contents. Meanwhile, Yoke, already familiar with the information, received a new set of documents, recent records gathered by 3 other parties over the past 2 weeks. According to Benwood, only his information was useful, while Thunderpike's data was deemed entirely useless. Yoke wasn't surprised, having warned Simon about it earlier. Benwood asserted that Thunderpike's standing would plummet, but Yoke doubted it. Benwood explained that Simon and the others had manipulated the weapons they used and spread rumors about Yoke joining them to attract sponsors. He reassured Yoke not to worry about them. Yoke had told the girls that collecting information was crucial, but he had a more urgent matter in mind. He considered bringing in a temporary member for support. Turning to Benwood, he requested finding a skilled scout. However, the guildmaster mentioned that the most capable scouts were already employed. In that moment, Mamar offered a solution. She suggested introducing a trainee, the daughter of an acquaintance who might be suitable. Yoke, feeling empathy for the scout, hesitated. Mamar sensed his concern and assured them all to meet up the next day at 9. The following day arrived, but it was already late. Mamar appeared visibly annoyed, causing Yoke to worry. Mamar then speculated that the scout might have encountered some trouble. Trying to calm everyone's nerves, she reassured Yoke and the girls that her protege was still capable. The girls, curious about the new member, wondered what they would be like. At that moment, a big, tipsy adventurer approached the girls, requesting them to pour him some drinks. Marina promptly said no, and the man became angry. He angrily flipped the table, causing the girls to quickly escape. Silk attempted to call for security, and just then, a familiar catgirl arrived, admitting she was late. Accidentally, she kicked the drunk man in the knee, rendering him unconscious. Rain recognized her. The catgirl started to panic. Yoke, drawn by the commotion, recognized her too. The catgirl was surprised by the coincidence, and Mamar, joining them, was pleased her protege had finally shown up. She declared that the catgirl was the person she was going to introduce. Thoughts about her varied among the members of the Clover Party. With a threatening vibe, Mamar questioned why the catgirl was late. The catgirl apologized profusely, but Mamar assured her the apologies weren't necessary directed at her. The catgirl then apologized to Yoke and the girls, introducing herself as Nene Sylfendal, a ninja. She vowed to demonstrate her usefulness and pleaded with them to hire her, explaining that Mamar would surely kill her otherwise. Yoke understood. Shortly after, Nene found herself pleasantly surprised when she was easily accepted without a formal interview. Yoke expressed trust in Mamar but wanted to verify something. He aimed to check their compatibility. Nene understood this as an opportunity for them to assess how well she could coordinate with the team. Without delay, Yoke and the girls departed for a dungeon. Upon their return to the abandoned mines, the group decided to have a rematch with the Steel Crab. Nene was curious about their intentions, and Yoke proceeded to share how he had defeated the boss monster in a single shot. Impressed, Nene praised his choice of the Steel Crab as a test and reaffirmed their common goal of defeating it. Offering to showcase her skills, Nene volunteered to guide them through the quickest route. During the journey, Nene efficiently alerted everyone to the trap positions with just a single glance. She explained that she relied on sounds and vibrations to detect hollow areas containing traps. As a scout, she believed it was crucial to possess knowledge about disabling traps and understanding their patterns. However, she admitted that she could only truly learn these skills by experiencing them firsthand in the dungeons. The group was genuinely impressed by Nene's skills and knowledge. Just then, Nene heard something approaching. However, the others couldn't hear anything. Nene said there were undead about 100 feet away. Everyone was impressed, especially Yoke. Nene wondered if they should avoid the fight. Yoke questioned if it was possible, and Nene said she knew a path to avoid unnecessary fights since she already memorized the dungeon. Yoke was impressed again. It didn't take them long to reach the boss room. Everyone from Claire started praising Nene, making her embarrassed. Yoke said she was amazingly talented and that facing the endless darkness should be easy as long as Nene was with them. Nene was glad to be useful. The girls then suggested not fighting the steel crab anymore, but Nene wanted to showcase her ninja skills. She explained how ninjas use jutsu taught to her by Mamar. Everyone found her cool and they decided to confront the steel crab. The rematch began and the steel crab quickly approached. Nene intercepted the monster, impressing Yoke with her speed. Nene created clones using jutsu by pulling strands of her hair. Yoke was amazed at how Nene distracted the monster. With her clones, Nene used a sword technique called Ripping Heaven Sky to slice off the steel crab's tough leg. Yoke found Nene's use of her clones impressive. A scout like Nina was powerful enough to take down the steel crab on her own. Marina, Rain, and Silk were astonished at how Nene had overwhelmed the steel crab. Yoke reminded them that they would lose screen time, motivating the girls to join the battle. Yoke weakened the boss monster, and Marina attacked. Nina was surprised that Yoke's debuff magic affected a floor boss monster. Yoke then instructed her to divert the monster's attention, and Nina immediately felt the buff applied by Yoke. She and Marina struck the steel crab simultaneously, both agreeing they made a great team as the steel crab toppled with a loud thud. Silk then directed Yoke to use a water-based scroll, and Rain to employ lightning magic. Yoke dampened the steel crab, and Silk followed up by enclosing it in a large water ball. Rain finished it off with a burst of lightning magic. Nene was impressed by everyone's skills and together, they successfully defeated the steel crab. Everyone celebrated while Nene had doubts about whether the Clover Party had really been C-ranked. Suddenly, Marina hugged her and began praising her ninja techniques. The others joined in, showering her with compliments until Nene turned beet red. She claimed she wasn't used to receiving praise. Yoke and Silk then decided to formally hire Nene to join them on their venture into the endless darkness. Nene's eyes widened with joy. However, she couldn't help but wonder if they were certain about bringing her along, considering she had been treated as a nuisance by other parties in the past. She admitted to them how she had felt incapable and clumsy with her previous groups. Even though Mamar was convinced that Yoke would hire her, Nene suggested they reconsider their decision. With a determined expression, Yoke declared that he wanted her to join them. He said that nothing bothered him, and expressed how he would solve the issues Nene faced in her previous gatherings. As a supporter, Yoke reassured her that they didn't anticipate any problems. Nene expressed gratitude for their acceptance, and the other girls were happy about Nene joining them. Afterward, everyone motivated themselves to investigate the cause of the stampede and explore the Abyss Gate. Out of the blue, Marina proposed that Nene should live with them, now that she was a part of Clover. Naturally, everyone was taken aback by the suggestion. Later that day, Clover returned to the guild to handle the paperwork needed to officially add Nene to their party. They happily welcomed her to their home base. Yoke expressed apologies for the sudden decision and questioned if Nene had considered everything, especially since she would now be living with a man. However, Nene appeared unfazed, causing Yoke to worry. The other girls then instructed Nene to take her belongings to her room and return. Shortly after, Nene came back to the living room and was taken aback by the warm welcome from everyone. They had organized a welcome party following Mamar's suggestion. Nene was deeply moved and couldn't hold back her tears. The meal had started, and Nene really enjoyed the delicious food. It surprised her to learn that Yoke was the one who cooked it. Yoke explained that they took turns doing chores, and Nene didn't mind at all. Yoke then asked if Nene needed anything, and she shyly requested help washing her hair and body during baths. The girls agreed to help, which made Nene happy because she thought they might laugh at her. As the girls continued chatting, Yoke felt a bit out of place. Rain noticed his discomfort and jokingly called him a pervert, suggesting she knew what he was thinking. Marina said Yoke seemed lonely, and the girls teased him by playfully suggesting he join them in the bath. After their meal, the girls went to take a bath together, chatting about Yoke. Nene shared her thoughts about the girls liking Yoke. Silk and Rain blushed, but the airheaded Nene casually confessed. Silk said Nene might also come to like Yoke soon. Nene agreed Yoke was attractive but insisted she wasn't interested in love. Excusing herself from the bath, everyone realized Nene was an easy target. While drying her hair and walking down the hallway, Nene bumped into Yoke in a corner. Surprised, she backed off toward the stairs. Yoke reached out, holding Nene tightly, asking if she was fine. Nene's face exploded with blush. She claimed she was alright and ran to her room. During the pajama party, Nene told the girls what happened and admitted she had fallen for Yoke. The girls were shocked at how fast it happened. For the next week, everyone prepared after accepting the national request. After everything was checked and prepared, Yoke formally announced that they would venture to the endless darkness the next day. The girls expressed their excitement, except for the worried Silk. Everyone then had dinner so they could charge themselves by sleeping early. Everyone munched down the food without saying a word until Rain started giggling. She suggested being their natural selves despite the nervousness. Everyone paused and realized that they had been acting tense lately and thanked Rain for breaking the ice. Yoke then turned on the broadcasting mirror and the topic was about the adventurer parties who were ready to raid the Endless Storm. The first party to be introduced was the organizers of the raid, Yoke's previous team, Thunderpike. Yoke's girls promised to protect him from them. Next up was the pride of all mankind, the Scordia party, which consisted of veteran adventurers with dual roles. Coming up next is the charismatic party that would do anything to achieve its goals, the Granslow party. Yoke's girls were excited to stand next to such big shots. Finally, the last party to get introduced was the Clover party led by Yoke. The girls were excited about how the broadcast presented them and Yoke pumped everyone up for the next day. Morning comes and everyone meets in front of a huge sealed gate located in the guild's underground. Only a few of the guild members knew how to open it, and this time, Mamar opened it for the expedition. A huge magic key appeared and the door opened. Yoke was finally able to see the transportation crest that would lead them to the Endless Darkness Labyrinth. The Clover party then stepped on the crest, along with Ben and Mamar, and they were all transported to the entrance of Endless Darkness, where a huge ruined tower stood before them. Everyone was in awe, especially Yoke, who only heard about it from the stories. Suddenly, Scordia and Granslow members also arrived. Yoke and the others found them cool. Scordia's mage, Miriam, noticed them and gave them a wave and a smile. Everyone was stunned and the girls started fangirling over Miriam and the rest of the members of Scordia. Led by the leader, Darkus, Scordia walked past Clover and Darkus and Miriam wished them luck. Yoke and the girls were in total fanboy and fangirls mode. Just then, Granslow members walked by, looking all imposing with their immense pressure. Yoke and the girls couldn't say anything as the Granslow members walked past them. Yoke approved of their strength despite being called rogues. Ben then wondered if Yoke was getting scared of the size of the place. Yoke agreed that it was scary, but it was the dream goal of his party that he only heard from his uncle's stories. He knew that at the deepest parts of Endless Darkness is where the door to another world lies. It was his dream to see the edge of the world. His girls and the adults just looked at him in silence until Ben smacked him out of nowhere. After Ben and Mamar wished them luck, the Clover party led by Yoke entered the tower. At the entrance, Yoke told Nene to check out what was ahead. Nene went off, wearing a cloak for sneaky stuff. Yoke felt happy seeing Nene stay calm even though it was her first time in a dungeon with them. Being the leader, Yoke then told the other girls what the mission was while they waited for Nene to come back. They needed info about the weird things going on in Endless Darkness. Since there might be a big problem, Stampede, they couldn't just ignore it. Yoke made sure they understood that Endless Darkness was a tough dungeon right from the start, with a reputation for suddenly changing. Expecting strange stuff, Yoke brought out GoPro-kun to record and fly around. He told the girls to focus on the first floor, test their strength, and change direction if they bumped into another group. Nene had returned and shared that she hadn't discovered any secret passages or traps. However, she described the place as incredibly strange due to the changing environment. Yoke sensed that something unusual was happening and asked Nene to guide the way. They couldn't explore upwards because the stairs collapsed, so they ventured underground and encountered a peculiar location that seemed like a mix of different places. Nene took the initiative to scout ahead, instructing the others to wait. Yoke observed Silk appearing nervous and wondered if she was scared. Silk denied being frightened and attempted to explain another reason, but before she could, Nene returned to lead them. The group followed through a passage and found themselves in front of a frightening yet beautiful place. Take a moment to appreciate the rare and colorful surroundings in this panel. Yoke was surprised by the unexpected scenery, quite different from the dark scenes on the broadcasts. Silk began reminiscing about the time Yoke shared his dream with them. Back then, she was solely focused on making money, but now she was grateful that their adventures had turned into vibrant dreams. She expressed her happiness as a member of Clover, stating that excitement, not nervousness, made her heart race. Yoke smiled at her and announced their arrival at the Endless Darkness, a step closer to his dream of reaching the Abyss Gate. It was a shared dream, and he suggested they enjoy adventuring while remaining cautious. The Clover party continued exploring the evolving dungeon environment until they reached a stopping point. Neen then produced a mirror to reveal what lay ahead, and it displayed a monstrous creature. Yoke observed the monster, realizing it was something entirely unfamiliar to him. The girls were curious about the strange creature they encountered, and Yoke admitted he hadn't seen anything like it before. Rain was surprised that the usually knowledgeable Yoke was unaware of it, and they realized it was a new kind of monster. Neen suggested it might be a chimera. Yoke observed that the monster had the head of a hammerhead shark and the body of a long-haired minotaurus. Recognizing the level of these monsters, Yoke guessed that the chimera was as powerful as Zarnag, the first-floor boss. Realizing the potential danger, Nena proposed taking a different path. However, Yoke thought they should confront the monster, considering it might be one of the anomalies the Royal Academy was searching for in the endless darkness. Yoke also wanted to test their abilities and see if they could survive the dungeon. In case they struggled, they could use the scroll of exit to leave the quest. Still, Yoke was confident that, with proper preparation, they could defeat the monster. The girls were uncertain if their C-ranked party could take on a B-ranked monster, but Yoke outlined his plan to reassure them. Shortly after, Neen faced the monster, getting ready to use a ring that made her faster but also would make her feet burdened if she used it too much. Even though it was a risky move, she was crucial to their plan. Suddenly, the monster went berserk and charged at Neen. Despite its speed, she skillfully dodged its attack. To gather some information, she decided to hit the monster with a physical attack. Afterwards, she led the monster to a passage where everyone was waiting. Marina had readied her new weapon, a massive magical crossbow with strong attack capabilities. Aware that Nene could evade the attack, she aimed the arrow at her. Nene, quick on her feet, used a speed ring to dodge the arrow. Surprisingly, the monster took the hit but kept on going. Anticipating the resilience of the creature, Yoke instructed Silk to follow his plan. Silk, thankful for her master's guidance, armed herself with 3 thunder arrows. Yoke had shared his knowledge about sharks being vulnerable to electricity. Silk shot the arrows, electrocuting the monster. Despite everyone's hope, the creature persisted. Yoke turned to Rain, urging her to buy some time. Rain showcased her new staff, enhancing offensive magic. She cast a level 4 thunder spell at full power, but the monster remained unfazed. Now it was Marina's turn, and she recalled how she had gained a new power just a few days prior. Yoke had given her a memo of revelation, a scroll unlocking the user's hidden abilities. They discovered a scroll in the recent dungeon and Yoke repaired it. Marina understood that it could enhance someone's strength but was concerned about using it on herself. Yoke reassured her, mentioning that the others had already given their approval. He explained that the scroll could unlock a secondary job. In Clover, everyone else already had a secondary job except for Marina. She doubted getting one as the church said magic swordsmen should only concentrate on their main job. Yoke disagreed, pointing out Marina's sharp intuition and believing she had a hidden talent. After some hesitation, the two decided to go outside to the rooftop because they needed a space for the magic circles to appear. Yoke then told Marina to get ready and multiple magic circles surrounded her. Yoke asked her to stand still as the scroll loaded her information. The magic circles expanded and started flowing into Marina. The scroll made a sound and dropped into Marina's hands. However, she couldn't read the words since they were written in ancient letters. Yoke took over and was shocked to see what was written. Now, in the present, Marina assumed a samurai stance as it was her secondary job. The monster was already close. Yoke attempted to use debuffing spells, but the monster still moved effectively despite being half dead. With one swing of her sword, Marina used a combination of magic swordsman and samurai skills, slicing the monster in half. Everyone was surprised to see the monster fall, and they all began showering Marina with praises. Yoke then wondered if Marina had figured something out. Marina confirmed that the monster had been a chimera. Silk wondered how Marina could tell, and Yoke explained that samurais possess skills to target enemies' weak points and could sense their identities. It was a kind of supernatural power known as the Sixth Sense, exclusive to the samurai job. Everyone was amazed and another round of praises commenced. Marina attributed it to Yoke's in-depth knowledge of the monster's weaknesses. Yoke clarified that, along with the development of artifacts, research on the ecology of living beings had also progressed significantly. Nene was surprised by Yoke's knowledge but mentioned that it was a bit slowed down by the other girls preventing him from pulling all-nighters for studying. Yoke had noticed a treasure chest and everyone was surprised to find one on the first floor, especially since the logs had mentioned that chests wouldn't appear until the 5th floor. They thought it might be an anomaly and chose to open it. Yoke turned off GoPro-kun and Nene opened the chest. The group was surprised to find a black box inside along with gold coins and artifacts. Everyone gathered around as Yoke analyzed the black box. However, nothing came up and he thought it was an artifact. Marina was shocked that Yoke didn't know what it was. Silk wondered if it was safe to touch. Yoke said it wasn't, but he felt strange vibes from the black box as if it were a newborn. Marina assumed it was a baby and asked if she could have it. Yoke said it was an anomaly and decided to submit it to the Royal Academy. He also found a ring artifact with it and called out Rain, who was arguing with Marina about who would get the black box if the Royal Academy returned it. He gave the ring to Rain as if he were proposing. Naturally, Rain turned red from embarrassment, and the other girls did too. Yoke explained that the ring had a calming effect on the user and was a great piece of equipment for mages. Rain was frozen until she told Marina to keep the black box instead. Everyone took a break, and the girls wiped away their sweat, feeling proud of what they had accomplished. Still, Silk realized that they had fallen behind compared to the others. Yoke agreed, finding it challenging to understand the dungeon's standards. The girls all thought the black box and the chimera were strange occurrences. Yoke quickly agreed. Then the girls started to wonder if Yoke felt uneasy talking to them. Marina suggested that Yoke should face them since he had already seen everything about them. Our MC disagreed, explaining that it was because they had suddenly stripped out of nowhere. Yoke had instructed them to keep washing as he gathered his thoughts. He acknowledged the oddity of facing a formidable monster on the first floor of the dungeon. Remembering a time when he acquired a magic bag on a different floor, he found the situation perplexing. While contemplating these anomalies, Marina, without a shirt on, unexpectedly hugged him. She suggested that a hug might help Yoke relax. Grateful for the gesture but uncomfortable, Yoke requested her to step back. Seeking assistance from the other girls, they ignored his plea and commended Marina's boldness. A little while after, the Clover Party agreed to complete the initial attack up to the upper stairs after talking it over. On the journey back, the girls kept playfully teasing Yoke for blushing, but our main character insisted it wasn't something he could control. The girls paid no mind to him and carried on discussing their advancements in the dungeon on the first day. When they reached the teleportation gate, Yoke's previous group had already arrived. Yoke saw that they had returned with 2 new members temporarily. This was the first time they met after the commotion in the tavern. Simon began teasing Yoke about his party's current C rank. Yoke chose to ignore the remarks and attempted to walk past them. However, Simon halted him, stating that a party like Yoke's wouldn't achieve much. He then requested their broadcast data and information about what they discovered inside. Yoke couldn't believe it when Simon asked him once again to hand over everything they had. It seemed like Simon was just taking away their hard-earned accomplishments. Simon interrupted Yoke and insisted that they weren't the villains, proposing an alliance instead. Yoke knew that forming an alliance meant sharing benefits mutually, and he wondered if that was what Simon had in mind. Simon told him to be grateful because a party like Clover, ranked C, was frightened within the endless darkness. He claimed it would be wiser for the Clover girls to follow someone experienced rather than a Red Mage with a small brain. He ordered them to appreciate the fact that someone superior was looking out for them. Yoke realized that Simon's actions were a form of revenge for Yoke not joining him earlier. Simon planned to take everything from Yoke and claim all the achievements for himself. Silk had interrupted Yoke's thoughts, suggesting they move forward. Simon became angry, scolding Silk for intruding into a leader's discussion, especially as a dark elf. Yoke, in turn, glared at Simon. Simon noticed that Yoke tended to lose his composure when it involved the girls and hatched a plan to tarnish Yoke's reputation. Simon wanted Yoke to socially disappear and started berating him, even stating derogatory things about dark elves like Silk, claiming they were only good as playthings for men. As Simon called her disgusting, Silk tried to slap him but hesitated when the other girls grabbed Yoke, as if they were trying to stop him. Simon was shocked and fell to the ground. Yoke, ready to draw his sword, demanded Simon apologize and take back his words, stating he couldn't tolerate insults towards his family. The girls held Yoke back while Silk suddenly hugged him. She said they were upset by Simon's words but not enough to be harmed. Silk reminded Yoke that using his sword would make him a bad guy and urged him to reconsider. Despite the insults, Silk claimed to have forgotten them, finding happiness in being considered family. Yoke calmed down, apologized to the girls, and informed Simon that there would be no alliance between them, asking him to leave. The Clover Party departed, labeling Simon as annoying and leaving him overly frustrated. The following day, Simon was still upset about what happened with Yoke. Camilla reassured him, saying that everything was captured on record how Yoke lost his cool and predicted that Clover's reputation would suffer. Simon and the rest confidently entered the guild, feeling relieved. Yet Ben and Mamar were already there waiting and instructed them to come to the investigation room. Ben and Mamar sat around a table giving stern looks to the Thunderpike members. Ben, with a forceful tone, questioned them about their mistakes. Simon attempted to defend the group, claiming they hadn't done anything to upset the higher-ups. However, Mamar quickly silenced him with a shikigami and insisted they pay attention because there was an important message. Mamar explained that Simon had used offensive language towards a former teammate and had even attempted to take credit for their hard-earned achievements. Beyond that, Simon's comments about Silk, a dark elf, had caused problems within the organization. Simon couldn't believe he was being called out for such reasons and tried to justify his actions by saying they were true. Ben couldn't believe what he heard from Simon's mouth, so he silenced him by giving him a forceful smack. He was astonished that Simon didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. Simon insisted that there was nothing amiss in making comments about dark elves, and in response, Ben landed another punch on Simon's face. Ben argued that there was something awry in Simon's thinking. Camilla questioned what was wrong with labeling dark elves as traitors after leaving the ancient elven kingdom. Ben insisted it was only a fairy tale, and a monk educated in the temple wouldn't be familiar with the actual story. Ben paused, took a breath, and referred to the members of the Thunderpike party as fools. He stated that their comments had sparked an international problem. He remembered reminding them that being an A-ranked party is distinct from being B-ranked. A royal decree was issued, and essentially the party belonged to the kingdom. Since they were vassals of the kingdom, they could act as representatives in emergencies. Ben questioned whether they had read what they had signed, and now they found themselves causing an issue on a live broadcast, tarnishing the dignity of the kingdom. Ben instructed them to apologize on live broadcast, and their A-rank party status would be taken away. In the worst-case scenario, they needed to be ready to be expelled from the country. Everyone couldn't believe what they had just heard, and Camilla exclaimed that a guildmaster like Ben couldn't give severe punishments to the vassals of the kingdom. Ben claimed that severe punishments would be impossible at the moment, but if their adventurer score plummeted, then the king would recognize demoting them. An anxious Barry claimed they just needed to do well to avoid dropping their scores and the demotion, and Camilla agreed. Mamar disagreed, claiming it would be impossible since their 2 new members had already resigned and they might not get more members afterward. The 4 of them wouldn't be able to continue exploring the Endless Darkness dungeon anymore. Shortly after, the 4 members of Thunderpike headed to a tavern to drown their worries and frustrations. Other customers were already gossiping about them, and the staff was urging them to settle their bill as they had consumed a lot. Barry lost his temper and ended up harming one of the employees. It became evident to everyone that things were going downhill for Thunderpike due to their violent behavior. The employee requested them to calm down, and suddenly, a stranger stepped in to pay for Thunderpike's bills and the trouble they caused. Simon was curious about the man's identity, and he introduced himself as Vegio Salak, the son of a noble. Vegio expressed his anger towards Yoke and Clover and decided to become Thunderpike's sponsor. 3 days before, Yoke watched the royal broadcast discussing Simon and his team making racial remarks. Marina could see that it was turning into something significant, and Yoke was getting restless about it. The Finesse Guild received many complaints afterward, with doubts being voiced about the selection of personnel for the mission. Scordia and Grantslow withdrew their participation in the mission. Marina wondered why they withdrew, and Yoke claimed there was more backlash from the other parties since Clover was basically the victim. However, Marina hated the fact that people were also criticizing Yoke since he was Simon's ex-teammate. She told Yoke to depend on her if needed, and Yoke thanked her while claiming that her presence was enough. Yoke's words brought a huge smile to Marina's face. However, it had been a successful harvest for the Clover Party. Ben and Mamoru felt proud of how they had managed to bring back both broadcast data and monster specimens. Betty was also thrilled with their achievement. The highlight of their haul was the black cube that the Royal Academy had just returned. They determined that it contained some kind of mysterious power, and Yoke believed it could be an important artifact in the future. Marina said she sensed that the black cube wanted to connect with her to help her. Yoke suggested using the appraising skill of a samurai to learn more about it. Marina agreed and playfully pulled Yoke closer, making him blush. She asked him to share what he knew about her with the cube, believing it already knew about her but wanting Yoke to affirm it. Yoke fondly reminisced about Marina's cheerful and courageous nature. When facing the Sharkhead monster, he admired her graceful and solemn sword slashes. The black cube then shifted, prompting Marina to encourage Yoke to keep going. Yoke in turn asked the cube to provide Marina with a sword suitable for her roles as a samurai and magic swordsman. The black cube transformed into a customized sword for Marina, leaving Yoke astonished and curious. Marina confirmed her hypothesis, connecting the cube to the dungeon monsters discussed by Yoke. It seemed the black cube was akin to an incomplete dungeon monster. Realizing that a skilled alchemist was necessary to complete the cube, Yoke and Marina agreed on the next steps. In the midst of this revelation, Yoke pondered why Marina had hugged him earlier, and she blushed in response. Yoke then understood Marina's intentions, but their tender moment was cut short by the return of the other girls. The following day, Yoke and the girls ventured into the 2nd floor of Endless Darkness, where they encountered a vast sky and expansive surroundings. The second exploration went well until they got to the stairs, and Nene gave them a heads up about something. When they reached the stairs, they discovered a huge open space with a sky inside the dungeon. They saw that the stairs didn't lead to the floors above even though they were heading downward. Yoke explained that this floor seemed like an external environment floor, more like a separate room. They questioned if it was the 2nd floor. but there were no records of this place when other groups went up to the 20th floor. Their only guess was that it was some kind of strange occurrence. Yoke had warned the girls not to lower their guards. He explained that they might have been assigned to a deeper area, possibly even a floor beyond the 20th. Since their task involved detecting anomalies, Yoke suggested thoroughly checking the surroundings, anticipating such occurrences. He instructed Nene to investigate what lay on the other side, emphasizing that anything unusual could be valuable for the Royal Academy. Recognizing the moment for her new accessory to shine, Nene revealed an earring-like device, actually a smaller version of GoPro Kun. Yoke then directed Rain to utilize her long-distance magic telescope eyes to identify anything visible in the area. In case of any trouble, they could make a quick escape using the scroll of exit. Yoke reassured the girls not to worry, but he ended up in an uncomfortable situation with Rain. Silk pointed out that using telescope eyes required a high altitude, so Yoke had to hold Rain's thighs to support her while carrying her. Rain felt embarrassed and started trembling, making Yoke worried and flustered too. Eventually, Rain regained her composure and activated telescope eyes. Her vision zoomed in the distance and she spotted a house with a blue roof on the other side. Since her eyes were already tingling, Yoke asked her to stop. Right on time, Neen came back and mentioned how strange it was because the floor was covered in grass and there were no enemies around. Yoke agreed, finding it odd to find a house inside a dungeon without any monsters blocking their way. He thought it might be a trap, but Marina suggested they investigate first. Yoke agreed, and reminded them about the scroll of exit. Yoke and the girls soon stood in front of the single house wondering what might be inside. They halted at the doorstep. They couldn't sense any magic and the place looked calm. Suddenly the door opened, and Yoke's eyes widened as someone emerged from the house. An elderly woman emerged, and Yoke couldn't help but wonder why a person would be in a dungeon. The woman seemed surprised to have guests. Yoke found it strange for a human to live in a dungeon and questioned the situation. The old woman kindly invited them for tea and pies, but Yoke and the girls hesitated. They wanted to know who she was and why she lived alone in the dungeon. The woman mentioned it was a long story and invited them into her house. Yoke insisted that it wasn't safe for someone to live in such a dangerous place. Politely, Yoke declined the invitation. The old woman appeared disappointed, mentioning that it was already getting dark outside. Everyone was startled because just a moment ago the skies were clear and blue. As Yoke thought about the strange situation, the girls called out to him, and suddenly, a woman with remarkable qualities appeared before him. She said it was a pity because Yoke just needed to take one more step. Yoke then understood he was already at the door. The woman praised Yoke for being wise, acknowledging the danger outside the house. Realizing the risk, Yoke stepped back quickly. The ground shook and the house transformed into a massive mansion. Everyone was confused about what was going on. Rain said something was messing with their minds, but she felt okay because she had the ring. The woman laughed and asked them to join her. The mansion kept growing and the woman started looking younger. Silk said the spirits were acting crazy. Yoke was surprised as the mansion changed into a creepy castle. The sky got dark and the whole place became eerie. Everyone were stunned by the changes, and what was even more surprising was the elderly woman gradually transforming into a child. Yoke then understood something and pieced the puzzle together. Everything happening seemed to contradict itself. Yoke finally recognized the person in front of them. She was the immortal queen Persephone. Persephone was surprised that Yoke knew about her. Yoke asked why she was in the dungeon. The girls were curious if Yoke knew her. Yoke then exclaimed that Persephone was someone who shouldn't exist, as she was a figure from mythology, the goddess of the land of the dead. Marina then realized that they were in the underworld. Persephone had claimed she was bored for thousands of years, guiding the souls of the dead. Because of this, she didn't want to let Yoke and the girls go alive. She intended to use them as entertainment to alleviate her boredom. She then employed something to immobilize everyone. Yoke was astonished to witness a massive, lifeless-looking tree suddenly sprout. He and the girls found themselves stuck to the tree, which was draining their life force. Persephone found joy in their expressions, particularly Yoke's. As the youthful goddess playfully licked his cheeks, Yoke endeavored to regain consciousness and pondered how to counteract the situation. Employing a spell called Awaken, Yoke made the colossal tree vanish. Persephone was amused that Yoke had managed to escape her illusion. All of a sudden, Yoke kneeled in front of her and the girls were puzzled about what he was up to. Yoke didn't really have another option. Remembering what he had heard in the myths, he had to trust in his uncle's teachings. On a starry night, there was a full moon shining brightly. Yoke was outside and Saga discovered him, concerned that his nephew might have had a bad dream. Yoke shared that he had dreamed about the day his parents passed away. Saga then asked Yoke if he knew the story of Lady Persephone, suggesting that it might be helpful for him in the future. He acknowledged that the story might be challenging for a child to grasp, but he believed Yoke could understand it. Saga then narrates the tale of a hero whose beloved passed away. Driven by love, the hero ventured into the land of the dead to bring the beloved back to life. However, the place was a constant cycle of serene days and gloomy nights filled with death. Despite facing nightly monsters, the hero persisted, eventually reuniting with the departed lover. Sadly, the beloved had already consumed the land's fruit, preventing her return. This left the hero in despair. News of the hero's endeavors reached the ears of the underworld goddess, who, in response, punished them by condemning the lover's soul to eternal rest. In a plea, the hero offered their own soul in exchange for saving the beloved's soul. Touched by the hero's words, the goddess spared the lover's soul and permitted the hero's return. Additionally, she bestowed a blessing upon the hero. This tale is one of the stories from Greyfield's collection, known as the Remazurka's Epic. Yoke had complained that the ending wasn't happy. Saga agreed, saying life is tough and once gone, it can't be brought back. Saga added that it wasn't just a sad ending, there was a crucial hidden idea in the story that could save Yoke's life. He explained how selling one's soul after death meant straying from the All Stream, the path where souls are reborn. The hero in the story couldn't be reborn, a cost greater than death. Yoke wondered why, considering death itself was already so painful. Saga grabbed Yoke and created a massive tree while telling him that the story would save his life in the future. Yoke opened his eyes and was amazed by the view from the top of the enormous tree. Saga explained that they couldn't bring back the dead, but the person he loved might have been reborn and living happily. Saga claimed the story would help Yoke if he ever encountered someone like that. During the mythical age, people were more afraid to stray from the All-Stream. That's why Persephone was touched by the hero's words. Yoke could clearly recall the hero's line and spoke it in front of Persephone, asking to meet again someday when his luck ran out. The girls were confused, but Yoke didn't have a choice. It was the way the hero escaped from Persephone. The goddess found it amusing to see that Yoke was planning to sell his soul after death just for the girls. Then the girls understood what was going on and tried to stop Yoke, except for Marina, who still didn't understand what was happening. Rain had explained that a monk in the church had educated her about selling a soul. She described how a person's soul would stray from the All-Stream and become trapped in hell indefinitely. Tearfully, Rain pleaded with Yoke to stop. Yoke expressed gratitude for Rain's concern but mentioned that if he could live with them in the present, he didn't care about the fate of his soul afterward. The girls were too shocked to speak and tears welled up in their eyes. Persephone had just smiled, and Yoke asked once more to be set free in exchange for his soul. The girls kept begging Yoke to stop, but Persephone had already agreed to his proposal. She sealed the deal by kissing him on the neck, and a symbol appeared on Yoke. Our main character started groaning in pain. The girls were freed from their restraints and rushed towards Yoke. Persephone assured them that she wouldn't take their lives, but she apologized because the monsters of the night had already emerged. Despite Persephone sparing their lives, the monsters wouldn't, as they had already trespassed into the land of the dead. Persephone giggled, anticipating her reunion with Yoke in the near future. Gigantic monsters charged at Yoke and the girls. Yoke quickly used a scroll of sanctuary, which halted the monsters in their tracks. Knowing there wasn't enough time to use the scroll of exit, Yoke told the girls to head for the exit and granted them enhancements. He declared that the monsters of the night were like God's companions and it was impossible to defeat them. Instructing Nene to guide them through the quickest route, he warned them not to glance behind. Yoke urged them to run while he cast various weakening spells on the monsters, but nothing was working on them. Additional monsters kept showing up, but Yoke managed to halt them using a scroll of lockbreak. Despite this, regular attacks only bought them time and didn't harm the monsters. Yoke resorted to using more scrolls to delay the pursuing monsters. During this, he tried a light-based attack and realized it had some effect, although the monsters seemed practically invincible. To protect the party, Yoke used a scroll of light shield to fend off the attacks. Nevertheless, the entire group found themselves encircled and overwhelmed. Yoke felt helpless against the god's familiar. When Yoke thought they were about to die, Nene and Marina became the leaders. Yoke tried to stop them, feeling the mark of Persephone throbbing. Despite his struggle, he couldn't speak, so he remembered the blessing the hero got from Persephone. Suddenly, a dark and murky magic began to attack the giant monsters, surprising everyone. Silk, noticing the ominous magic, shouted that it was dark magic. Observing the monster transforming into toys, Silk exclaimed that dark magic couldn't be used with normal means. Yoke, feeling his energy draining away, understood why the magic was considered taboo. Although he assured the girls he was okay, his vision became blurry because his mana and stamina were reaching their limits. They spotted the exit, prompting Yoke to use another dark magic to restrain the pursuing monsters. The girls managed to get through the exit door, but Yoke fell to the ground because he had reached his limit. Just as a monster tried to grab him for a snack, Nene quickly grabbed Yoke. Silk helped by shooting elemental arrows at the monsters. Marina also assisted Nene in carrying Yoke. Another monster chased them, but Rain was there to put up a barrier. Yoke, Marina, and Nene successfully went through the door, and the monsters glared at them from the outside. They left quickly, and the members of the Clover Party tried to catch their breaths. Yoke, with a weak voice, wondered if everyone was safe because his vision was too blurry to check. Marina assured him that they were safe. Yoke then asked everyone to come closer, and he hugged Rain, Silk, and Marina. He searched for Neen and invited her to join the group hug. Yoke started crying, feeling relieved that everyone was safe. He began blaming himself, knowing it was a trap but still proceeding. The girls were left speechless. Yoke kept saying sorry and crying, holding on to the girls tightly. He was really scared of losing them. Rain said it wasn't Yoke's fault, and they were all at fault because they were not strong enough. She vowed to become stronger so that Yoke wouldn't have to bear the burden of their lives on his own. The two kept staring into each other's eyes until Yoke started feeling weak because his stamina and life force were both at their limits. Marina wondered how they could replenish the life force. Rain then tightly held her staff and declared she could help. She cast a spell around them, and Yoke wondered what she was up to. Rain gently grabbed Yoke's cheeks and gave him a kiss. Yoke and the other girls were surprised by the unexpected scene. As the kiss went on, Yoke felt his energy coming back. He attempted to get Rain to stop, but she persisted. After pausing, she said she shared half of her life energy with him. Yoke scolded her for being careless, but Rain reassured him that she wouldn't easily perish. She declared she'd go to great lengths to save and shield him, even bringing back his soul, as she desired to be with Yoke even in the afterlife. The girls were surprised when Rain showed strong determination. Silk thought Rain might have used body magic and started pondering. Then she went to Yoke and kissed him, sharing her life essence with him. Silk had been talking, but then she stopped. Yoke said he was already feeling better and asked her not to overexert herself. Silk then said she felt the same way as Rain. She wanted to be with Yoke not just as a student but as family. She said her kiss was proof of her determination. Silk got embarrassed as she tried to confess something. Yoke knew what she wanted to say and agreed to it. Silk insisted that her commitment was genuine, and Marina acknowledged that the kiss surprised them. She vowed to become stronger, strong enough to defeat Persephone. Everyone thought Marina's determination was a bit extreme. Marina declared she was serious and jumped on Yoke. She made it clear that she was serious about love and adventure. Yoke started blushing and Marina went for a kiss. Yoke couldn't do anything with the girls' actions. The other girls called Marina bold and a bit forward for pushing Yoke down. Everyone had been arguing until they noticed there was one more person. When Nene ran toward him, Yoke wondered if she had feelings for him too. Nene tripped and fell onto Yoke. Yoke tried to assist her in getting up, but instead of opening her eyes, Neen closed them and seemed to be expecting something. The girls in the background cheered, and Yoke took the initiative to kiss her. Neen suddenly realized their lips were touching and, feeling embarrassed, collapsed. She quickly explained that she was just overwhelmed with joy about being close to Yoke and becoming friends with wonderful people. Yoke had expressed his joy at meeting the girls and having them as a family. He became emotional and started crying tears of happiness. The room fell quiet, but soon everyone realized the awkward atmosphere they had unintentionally created. Exhausted, Yoke took out a sentry rooster, a device that alerts them to intruders, and they all peacefully drifted off to sleep. However, Yoke's slumber was abruptly interrupted by a kick from Barry. He awoke to find himself and the others captured and tightly bound. Simon stood over them with a smirk on his face. Yoke had questioned Simon about his presence and found the girls unconscious and bound. Yoke, with a stern look, inquired about what had happened to the girls. Simon, in disbelief at Yoke's assertiveness, kicked him aside like he was nothing. He declared that Yoke had no authority to interrogate him, insisting that they had simply allowed the girls to rest. Camilla then revealed Nene's neck, and to Yoke's despair, he noticed slave collars on the girls. Simon explained that their sponsor, harboring a grudge against Yoke, had provided the collars. Simon had wondered whether Yoke understood the consequences of instructing Nene. Despite Yoke's warning that they might be labeled as criminals, Simon didn't mind, considering their party was already ruined. He couldn't fathom facing exile over mere misunderstandings. In an attempt to reconcile, Simon proposed they mend their friendship. He presented Yoke with a contract, essentially holding Clover responsible for everything, and requiring Yoke to apologize to Thunderpike for his actions. To ensure authenticity, Simon introduced an artifact that wouldn't work if the signer was coerced. Yoke now grasped the reason behind not receiving the slave collar. Someone had instructed Simon to carry out this intricate plan. As Simon thought about what had happened to the sentry rooster, he wondered if he could ask one of the girls to embarrass Barry. Yoke, getting upset, reminded Simon to release the girls once he had signed the contract. Simon, not liking Yoke's expression, kicked him again and continued to beat him up, blaming Yoke for everything he had gone through. He ordered Yoke to return everything he had lost with interest. Barry cautioned Simon not to kill Yoke. Simon then had another idea. Using the slave collar, he wondered if the other girls could harm Silk to demonstrate how serious he was. Then he ordered Jamie to bind Rain and dispel the sleep magic. Yoke tried to stop them, but he couldn't move because he was out of stamina. Suddenly, Barry thought of something after remembering how dark elves could be employed. He suggested spending one night with her. This infuriated Yoke, while Jamie was surprisingly anxious about it. Yoke asked them to wait as he would sign the contract. With a smile, Simon offered the contract and Yoke had no choice but to do it. He couldn't think of any other way but to sign the paper and later commit suicide to make it useless. As he was about to sign the paper, the stairs started shaking. It stopped, and Simon just laughed it off. But Yoke sensed something amiss and the ground shook again. A crack in the floor coincidentally opened beneath Simon, Barry, and Camilla. The three clung to the edges for dear life and Yoke's girls began sliding toward the crack. Yoke rushed to prevent them from falling, but his body wouldn't move at all. Jamie just stood there, observing everyone almost tumbling into the hole. Simon ordered her to take action. Yoke realized this event was connected to the stampede, where monsters emerge from the dungeon. However, it's also the same occurrence when monsters suddenly move between floors. Yoke was unsure how to escape their predicament since he lacked mana and stamina. Jamie began chanting something to aid Yoke, who was doing his best to rescue the girls. Unfortunately, the floor beneath them suddenly gave way, and Yoke, along with the girls, began to fall. Simon, observing the chaos, smirked, thinking the Clover party was finished. Unexpectedly, a magical force that controlled their descent surrounded Yoke and the girls, surprising Simon. Jamie then confidently stepped onto the remaining piece of the floor with Yoke on it. Simon and Barry were puzzled by Jamie's actions and soon they tumbled helplessly. They landed on the tough floor below, bouncing once. Everyone from Thunderpike was practically half dead. Yoke, curious about why Jamie helped him, suddenly heard others screaming for help. When Yoke looked back, he spotted humanoid monsters. The Thunderpike members, looking half dead, shivered when they spotted an orc den. Simon tried asking for help, but Yoke ignored him and chose to hug his girls instead. Tearfully, Simon expressed gratitude to Jamie for rescuing them. Jamie remembered not receiving thanks from Simon and the others earlier, but was happy to have helped Yoke. Seeing Jamie's actions, Simon disapproved and questioned her motives. Jamie asked Yoke to wait and approach Simon. Instead of saving him, she grabbed his bag and rejoined Yoke. Simon angrily cursed at Jamie, telling her to listen to him, but he soon realized that Jamie had a different attitude toward Yoke. This left Simon speechless, feeling as if he had been NTR'd. Jamie had returned Yoke's equipment, which included a powerful elixir bought for emergencies. Yoke expressed surprise and gratitude. Upon receiving the elixir, Yoke quickly consumed it. He proposed breaking out of the orc den, and Jamie agreed. The orcs then readied their bows and arrows, prompting Yoke to declare it was time to act. As the arrows flew towards them, Yoke and Jamie erected a substantial barrier. Yoke even cast a spell to counter the shots. The projectiles reversed direction, raining down on the orcs who were unable to defend themselves. Witnessing the significant loss of orc forces, Simon and the others were left speechless. Jamie, astonished, realized that even her fastest spells wouldn't have been quick enough. Even though Yoke cast his spells quickly, he felt exhausted. His concern grew as he feared an attack from the orc commander, and knew he had to defeat it swiftly. Locating the orc commander, he cast a dark magic spell to make it go berserk. This caused the orc commander to turn on its own troops, but Yoke's neck mark began spreading again. In pain, Yoke caught the attention of Jamie, who noticed his suffering but prioritized waking up the other girls. Realizing he couldn't rely on dark magic anymore, Yoke appreciated the powerful ally he gained through it, but the overwhelming number of orcs remained a problem. To buy time, Yoke used a sanctuary scroll and started searching for a troublesome figure. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he spotted something amidst the orcs. The Orc King had joined the battle. Frustrated, Yoke couldn't help but curse at the challenging turn of events. Faced with the new challenge, Yoke couldn't do anything as he had already used up too much magic. He still had some scrolls and needed to find the right time to use the Scroll of Exit. Yoke then used his last scroll to buy some time, but it wasn't enough to stop the Orc King. Luckily, Yoke dodged the Orc King's attack and realized it wasn't the time to worry about his body. He cast and applied multiple buffing spells on himself, counter-attacking the Orc King. However, his attacks were too weak to defeat the monster. Nevertheless, he knew he had caused some damage and decided to use debuffing magic. Unfortunately, Yoke's magic didn't work, and he realized he was about to be defeated as the Orc King's fist flew towards him. That's it, this manga and manga recap is over, just joking. Marina saved Yoke by slashing away the Orc King's fist. Yoke was surprised to see Marina. Silk, Rain, and Nene also joined. Everyone understood the situation after waking up and decided to fight back with Jamie. Yoke and the girls then began to counterattack the orcs, while Simon lay on the ground, helplessly watching them fight. He wondered what was happening, as he knew he was the main character from the start, and Yoke was the unexpected addition. However, in the current situation, Yoke became the main character, and Simon was just an insignificant side character. Bro didn't even realize he was a side character in this manga. He clenched his fist and started to get back up, glaring toward Yoke. Rain used her magic to halt the orcs in their tracks, then instructed Yoke to use the Scroll of Exit. Yoke retrieved the scroll, feeling awestruck by Rain's protective spell. He urged the girls to stay close as everyone gathered within the scroll's boundary. Yoke requested Jamie to fetch Simon and the rest, but Jamie hesitated due to past mistreatment by Thunderpike toward our protagonist. Yoke insisted that it should be the law to decide their fate. Eventually, Jamie complied and hurried off to find the others, only to discover that Simon was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, Simon told them not to move while holding a dagger to Rain's neck. The sanctuary disappeared and the orcs kept attacking. Yoke questioned Simon's actions and Simon accused Yoke of using money to buy favor and achievements. Yoke couldn't retaliate because he was using a scroll. Simon, feeling threatened by Yoke's success, activated the slave collar on Rain and ordered her to attack the Clover girls. Jamie intervened, pushing Simon away, and Rain managed to escape. Jamie urged Rain to run while she restrained Simon, but he punched Jamie, rendering her unconscious. Yoke observed the unfolding events but felt helpless as everyone was occupied. He urged Jamie to return to his side, yet it was Simon who approached them. Barry and Camilla called out to Simon for assistance, but he dismissed them, stating he was already at his limit. Simon smirked as he neared an escape from the dungeon. However, a magical attack sliced his leg, causing him to fall in bewilderment. Jamie had cast the spell, declaring that she wouldn't allow Simon to harm Yoke and the girls any longer. Despite Simon's curses, Yoke implored Jamie to return. While Simon attempted to command the enslaved Rain to rescue him, Jamie smiled at Yoke, expressed gratitude, and bid him farewell. Simon's words were abruptly cut off as Yoke and his party exited the dungeon using a scroll. Left bewildered, Simon shouted and cursed while menacing orcs approached him, seeking help. An orc seized his leg and ruthlessly slammed him onto the ground like a rag doll. The brutal pounding persisted until Simon's leg separated from his torso, causing him to scream in intense pain. Collapsing to the ground, he witnessed his teammates facing a similarly gruesome fate at the hands of the orcs. Barry was torn apart like soft bread and Camilla and her whole suffered unspeakable harm. Simon felt helpless, unable to intervene as the orcs feasted on Barry's body parts, leaving only his head intact. Meanwhile, Camilla met a tragic end after being overloaded with orc cream. Confronted with such horrifying scenes, Simon cried out in anguish. The yelling kept going and Jamie, who was safe, hid behind a big rock. She put on the bracelet of concealment that the Thunderpike group got unlawfully. Jamie was ready to sacrifice herself to keep Yoke and the girls safe after hearing Simon's plan. Still, she felt sorry because she would leave her little brother all by himself. She also wished she had said sorry to Yoke properly. Originally, Thunderpike's atmosphere was pleasant, but things changed when people began mocking Yoke. She asked what was going on, but others pressured her not to support Yoke. Feeling obligated to support her brother, she sided with Simon instead of Yoke. Witnessing Yoke's sadness broke her heart, and she felt like the worst person. She had a strong liking for Yoke and felt envious seeing him happily interacting with other girls, forming a seemingly close-knit group. She questioned whether she could genuinely smile if she joined them. Eventually, she recognized that she was overwhelmed with regret. Jamie remembered how Yoke had desired the law to pass judgment on Simon and the rest. Wanting to make amends and sincerely, Jamie hoped to repay Yoke for everything if he could forgive her. She chose to dedicate her life to doing what was right and pleaded with God for a second chance. After Jamie rescued them, the Clover party got out of the dungeon and Yoke passed out from the exhausting escape. He slept for 3 entire days. When he finally woke up, the girls were happy. Silk then told him about what was going on, and Yoke was surprised that he had been asleep for so long. Marina hugged Yoke and showed how relieved she was. Yoke said sorry for making her worry. They all sat down for a talk, and Yoke couldn't help but wonder about Thunderpike, especially Jamie. Silk had already asked the guild for help, but they got no response. Everyone was starting to think that they might not have made it. Then Rain handed Yoke something, a letter addressed to him that was in his magic bag. Yoke's eyes widened when he saw it was from Jamie. The letter looked crumpled, and Rain guessed Jamie must have hurriedly stuffed it into the bag. Yoke was curious about its contents, considering Jamie had given him a letter in the middle of a dangerous situation. Yoke had asked the girls to gather around as he opened Jamie's letter. The letter started ominously, and Silk noticed that it sounded like a last will. It was all about apologies towards Yoke, her brother's illness, and how she couldn't stop Simon's plans. Since everything was in the past tense, Jamie expected the letter to be read after her death. In addition to the letter, there were documents revealing the illegal dealings of Thunderpike and a recording. Nene wondered if they should watch the recording, but Rain suggested that Yoke should watch it another time. Despite this advice, Yoke insisted on seeing everything. The recording had started and everyone got surprised when they saw Beshio Salas. Yoke now realized who had been the mastermind behind Simon's actions. In the recording, Barry couldn't believe how hard Beshio was trying just to win over Yoke's girls. However, Beshio's sole goal was to capture Rain. Yoke found Beshio disgusting. The recording then shifted to a scene on the staircase where they found Yoke and the girls sleeping. Simon was taken aback to see Clover as soon as they used the first staircase. Simon aimed to traumatize Yoke by harming the girls. However, Jamie suggested tying them up first since they would be absorbing their party. The girls could see that Jamie was genuinely trying to save them and even risked her life just to protect them and Yoke. Yoke felt sorry for not realizing Jamie's thoughts earlier. He wished he hadn't let her go alone and berated himself for being foolish. The girls reassured him that it wasn't solely his fault, as they were also helpless in that situation. Yoke proposed taking action, and their new objective became bringing the mastermind behind Thunderpike's actions to justice. Yoke asserted that this mastermind was enjoying a comfortable life, and the girls couldn't forgive it, especially considering their desire to help Jamie. Yoke was determined to ensure that Bashio faced the consequences he rightfully deserved. To be honest, my blood was boiling the whole time while reading and recapping the past few chapters. Silk had wondered about what to do since they didn't know where Bashio was, and he was the heir to a big merchant group. If things went wrong, Clover could have been in trouble. Yoke reassured them, saying not to worry because they had a powerful ally, Ben. He reminded the girls that the guild was the biggest organization in Welmeria, the country of dungeons. Among all the branches, the Finesse Guild was the most important one. Since Ben was the master of the Finesse branch, he had a lot of influence. The girls almost forgot that Ben was part of a legendary party. Yoke claimed that even Bashio's merchant group wouldn't stand a chance against the guild. They also had proof, thanks to Jamie. If they handed over the evidence and the culprit, Ben would be able to take care of the matter. The girls had been wondering how to catch the culprit. Yoke assured them not to worry, saying that Bashio would show up on his own. He was aware that the creepy merchant already knew their whereabouts. Jamie's letter mentioned that the slave collar was registered to Simon and Bashio. Yoke guessed that Bashio wouldn't bring a lot of people to avoid drawing attention. He wanted to use this opportunity to turn the tables on him. Silk was curious about how they could figure out that Bashio had attacked them. Yoke insisted that their base was already surrounded. He guessed that Bashio knew Yoke had been unconscious for a few days and might take advantage of the situation to launch an attack. Bashio seemed to be in a panic after losing his pawns, the Thunderpike. Silk also knew that the girls hadn't gone outside for a few days due to the slave collar. Silk and Rain assumed that Bashio must be panicking and had no choice but to barge into their base. Considering their vulnerability against the powerful curse of the slave collar, Silk wondered what kind of trap they should set. She suggested taking Rain to a safe place, but Yoke said he had a plan. Shortly after, the girls except for Rain left the house. Silk instructed Rain to ensure she locked the door. Marina was surprised that the guild had summoned them unexpectedly. Silk assured Rain they would return immediately, and emphasized once more to lock the door. The girls hurriedly departed and someone sneaked nearby. The person then approached a carriage and someone inside began shouting joyfully. It was Bashio, and he had finally found the perfect time. He exclaimed that he had almost died waiting for this moment and was eager to do some unspeakable things with Rain. Bashio and his men had arrived at Clover's base. Mockingly, he referred to the girls as idiots, intending to exploit Rain as their weakness to manipulate them. His ultimate goal was to assert control over the girls and embarrass Yoke. Bashio attempted to open the locked door, anticipating the obstacle. To overcome it, he produced an illegal artifact capable of unlocking any door. Successfully gaining access, he entered the base, adopting a facade of familiarity as he called out for Rain. While exploring, he made his way to the second floor, harboring disturbing thoughts about what he planned to do to Rain. His unsettling fantasies were interrupted when he unexpectedly encountered Rain in a corner. Witnessing Bashio's repulsive expression, Rain quickly fled from the scene. Bashio had commanded Rain to halt and enforced it by compelling him to kneel through the authority granted by the slave collar he owned. Contemplating what tasks his initial slave should perform, Bashio lowered his pants and positioned something in front of Rain. Reacting swiftly, Rain seized a nearby vase and struck Bashio on the face. The unexpected retaliation left Bashio bewildered, prompting his guards to intervene and restrain Rain. Yet Nene and Marina were present, swiftly incapacitating the guards. Bashio, confronted with Rain's resistance to his orders, became increasingly perplexed. Someone claimed that the scene was unsatisfying. Yoke didn't expect their simple plan to work on Bashio. Bashio was confused, and Yoke clarified that leaving Rain alone was a trap to catch him. The other girls acted like they were leaving but stayed nearby. Bashio wondered why the slave collar didn't work, and Yoke told him to check. There was no more slave collar on Rain's neck. Bashio felt surprised when he saw the collar in Yoke's hands instead. Yoke urged him to accept his fate, but Bashio refused and began to threaten them with his family's merchant group's name. Yoke then informed Bashio that Silk wasn't there because she had gone to find Ben. This news made Bashio realize that things were not going well for him. Despair filled Bashio's face as he began to complain about how his plans had been ruined. He grumbled about all the effort he had put in just to capture Rain. Suddenly, Rain slapped him hard and told him that everything was his fault, not hers. She accused Bashio of being responsible for Jamie's death, and declared that she would never forgive him for it. Rain had walked past him and confusion crossed his face as he saw Rain standing beside Yoke, holding hands. Beshio told them to stop holding hands, but Rain pulled Yoke closer, kissed them, and it seemed like Beshio's world came crashing down. Rain hugged Yoke, declaring that Yoke already belonged to them, and that marked the end for Beshio. It wasn't even a case of NTR. Later on, evidence against Beshio started piling up. Ben was impressed that all the evidence pointed to one person. He predicted that Beshio would be labeled a criminal, which would be significant news since Beshio was the sole heir to the Solace merchant group. Grateful for Ben's help, everyone thanked him, and he left to prepare the carriage. Beshio had started crying because he couldn't win Rain's affection, so he decided to harm her instead. Yoke intervened, advising Beshio to stop his harmful plans. With a simple touch, Yoke made Beshio feel something profound. When Rain inquired about Yoke's actions, he explained that he had cast a spell on Beshio, causing intense discomfort at the thought of women, potentially leading to his demise. Marina questioned the existence of such a spell and noticed Persephone's mark on Yoke. Rain, realizing that Yoke had used dark magic, expressed concern. Neen was impressed by the power, especially recalling how Yoke had removed a slave collar before. Yoke attributed the magic to the evil god, and Silk recognized it as coming from Persephone. Yoke had essentially become Persephone's familiar, receiving her blessings in a manner reminiscent of legends. However, it couldn't really be seen as a blessing, but more like a curse. The girls were worried if Yoke would be okay, and Yoke claimed he would only use it in emergencies. He was concerned that he had used it while they were live streaming and wondered why he hadn't been arrested. Neen then explained that Yoke's use of dark magic wasn't recorded because GoPro-kun was destroyed by the monsters. This meant that no one had witnessed Yoke using dark magic. Silk then wondered if it was okay to consider their current situation resolved and be happy for Jamie's sake. Yoke agreed and planned to use the life Jamie saved for good. He just needed to be careful not to shorten his lifespan by using dark magic. Suddenly, Ben burst into their house and said they got an urgent message from a bird. Yoke thought it might be about Beshio, but Ben said it was something else. He told Yoke to check out the video he had just shown on Clover's broadcasting mirror. All Yoke could see at first was a fuzzy live stream, but then a faint voice came through asking for help. Yoke got nervous as he realized it was Jamie's voice. Jamie had sought help, surprising Yoke and the girls when they learned Jamie was still alive. Yoke, upon realizing this, approached Ben for assistance. However, Ben, anticipating Yoke's request, declined. He emphasized the dungeon's peril and the impracticality of risking lives for a rescue mission. Despite Yoke's urgency, Ben disclosed that the national mission had concluded with the decision to reseal the endless darkness. Yoke persisted, asserting the need to rush for Jamie's sake. Ben, like a concerned uncle, raised his voice, expressing the dangers based on reports about Persephone. He questioned the peculiar pattern on Yoke's cheek. This left Yoke silent, and Ben sternly reminded Yoke of the life-threatening risks of diving back into the dungeon. As the head of the Finesse Guild, Ben expressed reluctance to witness more adventurers perish, and declared there was nothing more they could do. Yoke thought hard, trying to figure out a solution. Suddenly, he remembered the recording Jamie had left and suggested there might be a way to help. He asked Ben for permission, explaining his plan to rescue Jamie. Ben was surprised by Yoke's rebellious attitude, cautioning him about the dangers of the Endless Darkness dungeon, which constantly changed. Yoke insisted that the dungeon hadn't changed, and shared his educated guess about its rules. He assured Ben that despite the chaotic appearance, he had uncovered how the dungeon worked. Yoke pointed out that no adventurer had understood it in the past 300 years. Though doubtful, Ben considered Yoke might have learned something in his 2 trips. Yoke proposed that if his hypothesis was correct, they could save Jamie and asked for permission to proceed. Ben, realizing he was partially at fault for informing Yoke about Jamie, clarified that he was giving them a chance to convince him. He promised to personally escort them to the dungeon's entrance, swearing on his name and party's name. Everyone sat down together as Yoke explained the endless darkness. He told them that despite exploring the floor, the map always changed. Instead of the environment changing, Yoke believed they were being teleported. Ben was surprised and asked why Yoke was so certain. Yoke reminded him of their trip to the underworld and meeting Persephone, emphasizing that it was no illusion. Yoke then asked Rain if they remembered which floor they reached after escaping the underworld. Rain replied that they were in between the 2nd and 3rd floors. Yoke had brought out the recording left by Jamie. It revealed how Thunderpike had spotted the Clover party as they descended the 1st staircase. Yoke then concluded that Thunderpike had been directly sent from the 1st floor to the 3rd floor. Rain said it was impossible to skip floors, but Yoke suggested it might be a side effect of the blur between floors during an overflow. Yoke then pointed out his main reason, the Abyss Gate, the deepest part of the dungeon. He explained how the Abyss Gate connected different worlds, and in the Endless Darkness, various worlds were linked. Yoke concluded that the Endless Darkness dungeon was reproducing different worlds within itself. This meant that any of the floors could be a different world at random. Everyone found this idea absurd. Silk had concluded that they wouldn't understand the endless darkness in the end because the dungeon randomly displayed and connected hundreds or thousands of floors like a labyrinth. Ben agreed that it made sense, but then wondered how they could rescue Jamie. Yoke then exclaimed that the teleportation had a regularity and was something they could take advantage of. Ben wondered what Yoke meant. Our protagonist then explained that they hadn't encountered other parties, but Thunderpike easily found them. Realizing it wasn't a coincidence, Ben understood what Yoke meant. Yoke then explained that teleportation regularly took them to their desired destination. The girls were surprised, and Yoke elaborated on how they ended up in strange places while investigating irregularities. The girls were impressed by Yoke's deduction skills with limited information. Excitedly, they asked Ben for permission to enter again and try to find and save Jamie. Ben sighed, calling Yoke a kind man, and wondered if there was more evidence to support the idea. Yoke had reminded Ben about the expedition log of their party, noting the 30th floor as the deepest level of endless darkness. However, Yoke disagreed, thinking that Anubis's party might have skipped floors just like they did. He knew that Anubis members only considered the 30th floor as the most difficult and deepest part of the dungeon. Ben thought back to the numerous deaths during the expedition and realized that they might have subconsciously wished for it to end. However, their wish only brought them to the 30th floor, making Ben find the dungeon strange. He regretted not being able to save more people back then, but, as the current guildmaster, couldn't give permission for Yoke to go back. Everyone was saddened by their inability to save Jamie. Suddenly, Ben stood up and announced that endless darkness would be sealed the next afternoon. He even mentioned being bored in the morning and suggested others visit him. The girls were confused, but Yoke understood Ben's meaning and instructed the girls to prepare their equipment. The following morning, Yoke and the girls were all set with their gear and supplies. Yoke noticed they were well prepared thanks to the bag Jamie had provided. However, they lacked one essential item they couldn't get from Ben. Yoke reminded the girls about the dungeon's dangers and expressed his reliance on them. The girls were surprised, expecting Yoke to tackle it alone. Silk mentioned they had learned a lot from Yoke and had been relying on him for too long. She encouraged him to depend on them as much as he needed. Yoke smiled and instructed them to head out. All of a sudden, a big man blocked their doorstep. It turned out to be Lucent, the leader of the Scordia party. Yoke wondered why Lucent was at the guild. Lucent had overheard everything from Ben and took out a scroll of exit. Yoke thought Lucent might just give it to them, but Lucent wanted to ask a question first. He wondered why anyone would risk their life to save someone when adventurers should always be prepared for danger. Yoke realized they were being tested by Lucent, one of the world's greatest adventurers. After some thought, Yoke said he would save a friend. Lucent then questioned if their friend was from Thunderpike, and Yoke quickly confirmed. Lucent was surprised by the fast response, and it was faster compared to some companies' customer support. Lucent then handed over the scroll after a stare down. Lucent was pleased that Yoke understood what adventurers value the most. He asked Yoke to save what he could. Yoke received the scroll and everyone thanked Lucent. Lucent insisted they thank Ben, as he had to humble himself to Ben to get it. After that, Lucent left Yoke and the girls in silence. Everyone then went into fan mode, impressed by how cool Lucent was. Yoke couldn't believe Lucent accepted his answer. With determination, Yoke told the girls to set off to save their friend. Shortly after, Ben led Yoke and the girls to the guild's basement and the entrance of endless darkness. Yoke expressed gratitude, and Ben, pretending not to understand the situation, observed as the young ones entered the dungeon. He silently hoped for their safe return. As they walked towards the first staircase, Yoke reminded the girls of their plan. He knew that teleportation would happen on the staircase, and they needed to strongly wish to see Jamie during that moment. Yoke was confident they would be sent to the same floor as Jamie, but he also worried about finding her quickly, especially if she happened to be on a dangerous floor. Yoke and the girls had arrived on the first floor and found that although the interior remained the same, it was expanding. Some parts were falling apart and monsters started appearing. They also spotted a space that twisted anything entering it. Yoke cautioned them to be careful. Seeing the girls quiet, he wondered if they were scared. Silk confirmed that the scene was scary, but she wasn't scared at all. Yoke then reminded them to wear their life ropes, artifacts that would connect them in case of an emergency. He also had falling control scrolls in case the floors collapsed and instructed them to grab a nearby tree or pillar if that happened. Nini was assigned to lead the way, Silk to use dryads to create a path, Rain to use her sense magic for blind spots, and Marina to be on guard for surprise attacks. Now prepared, Yoke and the girls moved forward. As expected, they encountered situations Yoke had anticipated, but they were ready for them. They had stopped somewhere, and Neen revealed some monsters they hadn't seen before. The girls became concerned upon seeing these eerie creatures and pondered how to overcome them. Yoke then insisted that he recognized them. The monsters were Hecto-Eyes, a kind of demons. He explained that they were troublesome because most attacks didn't work on them. The girls were surprised to discover the existence of such creatures. Yoke explained that even though Hecto-Eyes were only ranked as C, Their magical attacks were irritating, and they had strong magic resistance and were immune to physical assaults. Silk pondered how they could defeat these demons. Yoke clarified that they would require sacred weapons and additionally, had to strike the demons in their core while targeting all of them simultaneously. Marina grasped the difficulty of hitting 3 at the same time. Concerned about their limited sacred arrows, Yoke expressed worry as he hadn't anticipated encountering demons. Silk then asked Yoke if he trusted her. Yoke assured her that he did but was concerned that Silk might feel responsible if she missed her shots. Silk confidently declared that she would take down the 3 monsters at once. They had no choice but to try because they wanted to save Jamie. The girls then tried to convince Yoke to attempt it. Silk suggested using magic to slow down the demons. Marina said she could find the demons' weak points as she was a samurai. And Nene volunteered to lure the demons away if their initial plan failed. Yoke was surprised and became serious. He then gave Marina a magic stamp to mark the weak spots of the Hecto Eyes after identifying them. Yoke relied on them to save Jamie, and the girls agreed. Their operation had begun, and Marina moved to the front line to identify the weak points. Nene took on the responsibility of provoking and distracting the demons. The two started moving, and the demons targeted Nene. Despite the surprise attack, Nene skillfully dodged. However, the demons quickly went after her again. Yoke stepped in, providing support by casting shields to protect Nina. Taking advantage of the distraction, Marina swiftly slashed the demons in half, identifying their weak points at a glance. Marina signaled Rain to prepare as she marked the weak points with a magic stamp. Rain utilized ice magic to impede the demons' movements, but it was a struggle for Rain to keep them restrained. Silk hadn't anticipated the demons persisting, and concern crept in as she realized she only had one opportunity to defeat them. Despite the uncertainty, she knew she had to attempt it. Yoke noticed her determined look and using gravity magic impeded the demons' movements. He questioned if it was sufficient for Silk, who reassured him it was more than adequate. Yoke then enhanced her piercing ability and advised her to remain calm. With the sacred arrows in hand, Silk focused on her target. Silk waited patiently for the right moment, making sure the weak spots faced her way. When the opportunity arose, she shot her arrows and each one hit its target perfectly. The demons crumbled under Rain's ice magic, but Silk didn't bother looking at the destruction. After all, cool folks don't watch explosions. Yoke and the others were left speechless as they witnessed the demons turning to nothing. Arrows scattered on the ground and everyone praised Silk for her precise shooting. The girls showered her with compliments and a sense of relief washed over Silk. Yoke was greatly impressed by how trust and belief in one another boosted their abilities. A sense of pride filled him as their leader, recalling how the girls wanted to be a family with him. Smiling, he remembered their encouragement to keep moving forward and save Jamie. Neen had discovered a staircase that led to another floor. Yoke was certain that Jamie, being clever, would have chosen to stay in a staircase on a different floor for safety. He hoped they would be teleported to Jamie's location. Yoke reminded the girls to focus on Jamie, and everyone entered the staircase. As they walked forward, Silk wondered if it would actually work. However, they hadn't seen anyone, and Yoke started to doubt if they were teleported at all. Suddenly, Marina spotted fresh bloodstains nearby, leading through a door. Yoke then saw a piece of cloth and recognized it. He asserted that they had indeed been teleported. Silk was confused about what he meant. Yoke remembered Jamie's ribbons and realized that the bloodstains belonged to her. The group became worried about Jamie when they noticed fresh bloodstains. Since the bloodstains led outside, it seemed Jamie had chosen to leave the safe area. The girls immediately decided to go outside and Yoke cast several protective spells on them. Suddenly, Yoke halted them, prompting them to consider why Jamie would leave despite being injured. Yoke deduced that something must have harmed Jamie even within the supposed safe zone. Everyone was impressed by Yoke's calm and thoughtful approach. He advised the girls to be cautious as they continued. Everyone opened the door and was shocked to discover that they stood in front of the Finesse Guild building. They wondered what had happened, and there were no other people around even though it was usually a busy place. The place looked messy and was full of bloodstains, making it creepy. The girls wondered if it was a copy of Finesse in another world. But Yoke concluded that Jamie must have strongly wished for it as her destination. The poor girl just wanted to go home. If she had wanted to return to Finesse, the dungeon should have brought her to the first floor, but her guilt might have left her alone. Yoke told the girls to hurry and asked Neen to scout ahead. He knew that Jamie would go to the apartment where her sick little brother was staying. He instructed the girls to return Jamie to the real Finesse. Yoke and the girls arrived at the apartment building Yoke had mentioned. When they got there, they were shocked to see a body nearby. It was Jamie, behind a well. Yoke quickly went to check on her and found her little brother's teddy bear. He couldn't believe that Jamie had come to see it in her current state. He pleaded with her not to die, reminding her about her little brother waiting for her. Yoke asked the unconscious Jamie to wake up so they could express their gratitude. Tears streamed down Yoke's face until he noticed Jamie's finger move. Jamie opened her eyes to find Yoke beside her. Yoke hugged her tightly, believed that she was still alive. Jamie wondered if they all came to save her, and Yoke confirmed it, emphasizing that they were friends. Jamie's eyes welled up with tears as she thanked Yoke. Yoke in turn thanked her for staying alive and continued to hold her tightly. However, something caught Yoke's attention. He saw a familiar figure nearby, causing him to stutter. Simon asked what was wrong, questioning if they had seen a ghost or something. Yoke felt shocked when he saw Simon alive in front of him. Simon said he was glad to see Yoke again and knew Yoke would return for Jamie. Yoke understood that Simon was about to attack. Even with a hole in his abdomen, Simon swung his sword widely. Yoke attempted to stop him with debuff magic, but Simon fell backward on his own, and blood splattered everywhere. Everyone was confused about what had just happened and soon realized that Simon was already dead. Everyone was left speechless until Jamie began explaining the existence of an illegal artifact that had the power to make someone regenerate at an incredible rate. According to her, she witnessed Simon being attacked by orcs, but he was rapidly regenerating. Filled with fear, she fled, assuming Simon would pursue her, counting on Yoke to rescue her. Yoke, on the other hand, became aware of Simon's intense hatred towards him and his determination to kill. Yoke decided to take action, stepping forward and removing his cape. He used it to cover Simon's body, regretting the lack of understanding between them, which ultimately led to a bitter and unfortunate conclusion. The girls were concerned about Yoke, but our main character reassured them, saying he was okay. He asked Jamie for more information. Jamie then shared how she narrowly escaped to the stairs and managed to send out an emergency broadcast. She heard footsteps that she knew weren't Yoke's and hurried away. Yoke praised her quick thinking and expressed relief that she was safe. Jamie started crying, and Yoke stated that everything was already finished. He advised the girls to return home to the actual finesse, and they agreed. But then they heard snapping sounds out of nowhere. Yoke turned around and found out that the snaps were coming from Simon's lifeless body. Everyone got on alert as Simon unexpectedly got back up, but he looked different, with strange tentacles and flesh emerging from him. Yoke couldn't believe that the person in front of him was Simon. Simon had been shouting in pain, and everyone just stood there, completely shocked. Yoke then noticed the Medallion of Incarnation. He exclaimed that it was the most cursed tool of the most illegal kind. Yoke explained that it was a cursed artifact that revived endlessly using the devil's flesh. Everyone was shocked to learn that it was related to devils. Yoke further explained that it had unlimited uses, healing wounds immediately through incarnation. Essentially, it made the user immortal. But over time, their body would be corrupted by the devil, turning them into monsters. The girls wondered what they should do, and Yoke exclaimed that there was nothing they could do but defeat and seal Simon as the monster he had become. The girls were shocked, realizing that Simon was once human. Yoke then wondered who gave Simon the cursed tool, but it didn't matter for now. He knew Simon had used the artifact without understanding its real effects. Yoke couldn't help but call Simon an idiot. Simon had started calling someone a useless bastard. He exclaimed how he wanted to kill someone even if it was the last thing he would do. Yoke calmly asked why Simon wanted to kill him so much, pointing out that all Simon could say was kill. Simon then exclaimed how Yoke was an orphan and useless compared to him, who was the son of a lord. He criticized Yoke's job and claimed it was inferior to his own impressive role as a knight and leader of an A-ranked party. Simon felt upset as Yoke seemed to have everything that he didn't. Yoke had a realization and started to wonder if Simon had been jealous of him. When Yoke mentioned this, Simon strongly denied it. He proudly declared his own talents and couldn't accept the idea that Yoke might be happier than him. Simon even challenged Yoke to a fight to reclaim everything he felt he had lost. Yoke just stood there, silently listening to Simon. Silk suggested ignoring Simon and running away instead, but Yoke asked her to let him handle it. Despite Silk's warning about the danger of fighting an immortal, Yoke turned his back on her and admitted that Simon was his childhood friend. Seeing how earnest Simon was, Yoke felt compelled to respond in a similar manner. Yoke confronted Simon, who was slowly turning into a monster. They both ran towards each other, and Yoke cast debuff spells on Simon. Chained down, Simon realized he couldn't move and helplessly saw Yoke approaching. Despite managing to break free from the chains, Simon was too late. Yoke had already slashed his neck. With his head detached, Simon watched Yoke's back and fell to the ground. Unable to bear the sight of Yoke, Simon's beheaded body aimed for a sneak attack. Yet, Yoke noticed and countered, leaving Simon frustrated. Simon angrily asked what had happened, noticing that Yoke could confront him directly. Yoke could tell that Simon didn't realize he was losing the battle. He requested Rain to cease recording, realizing that he didn't want the world to witness the scene. The altercation persisted, and Simon couldn't believe that Yoke was keeping pace with him. Frustrated that someone weaker was overpowering him, Simon began transforming into something else. His strange flesh started engulfing the area, forcing Yoke to bind him using dark magic. Everyone waited for the smoke to clear, and found a massive tree of flesh, covered in dark binds. In the center of it was Simon, still eager to continue the fight. Yoke then addressed him as the leader and urged him to stop. Simon suddenly had a flashback to his childhood. His older brothers had more talents than him, and everyone in the family was busy. The only place he found peace was his favorite spot, where he met Yoke for the first time. Simon asked Yoke where he came from, and Yoke explained that he had moved in after his village was destroyed by monsters. Simon felt it was tough, and the two fell into a thoughtful silence. Yoke then remarked on the beauty of the scenery, which Simon agreed with since it was his favorite spot. Simon decided to take Yoke under his wing and show him around. Yoke was surprised and called Simon kind. That was the moment when the two became friends. Simon later realized that Yoke had saved him. When Simon stopped resisting, Yoke attempted to finish him off, but his hands were trembling. It was the time for them to say goodbye as childhood friends. Yoke had chanted something, and the girls noticed the pattern on Yoke's neck. They tried to stop him, but Yoke was determined to use 8 the Tear magic on Simon. The magic attack pierced through Simon, and the flesh tree slowly disintegrated into nothing. Simon's body dropped to the ground, and Yoke observed how his body kept regenerating and being destroyed simultaneously. Marina remembered that the artifact didn't have a destroy function. Yoke claimed he used the power given to him by Persephone. It wouldn't stop until Simon died and his brain stopped functioning. Silk realized that Yoke wanted to free Simon from living in eternal hell, and that was what he hoped for. Surprisingly, Rain covered Simon's body and went to hold Yoke's hand. The other girls did the same, holding a silent funeral for Simon. Yoke's tears started flowing as he bid farewell to his childhood friend. 10 days later, Yoke and the girls had just emerged from the guild building, grumbling about the rough and exhausting ordeal they had endured. Despite this, Marina felt relieved that their punishment hadn't been as severe as she had feared. Upon their return from the Endless Darkness dungeon, the Clover members and Jamie found themselves facing charges for illegally entering the dungeon. They received a penalty on their scores and were suspended for 1 month. They had to attend hearings and complete a mountain of paperwork. However, Jamie faced a different fate since she was part of a party that caused an international uproar. She was at risk of being kicked out of the country. The Endless Darkness exploration came to an abrupt halt due to the events that transpired, particularly the controversies. Afterward, many crimes committed by Thunderpike were made public, and Jamie, the sole survivor, bore the brunt of the blame. Yet Silk stepped forward with a statement affirming that Jamie had actually saved them. Her words became Jamie's lifeline, earning her a slightly better reputation among nations of other races, with some even seeing it as a tale of redemption. Yoke couldn't imagine how he would handle the criticism if he were in Jamie's shoes. All he could do was hope that Jamie wouldn't face severe punishment. 3 days later, a news report revealed that the guild had decided to strip Jamie of all her earned points and her license, imposing a 1-year ban on reapplication. It emerged that Jamie had not participated in Thunderpike's crimes but had instead tried to prevent them. Yoke and the girls were relieved that Jamie wouldn't be labeled a criminal, and they looked forward to her returning as an adventurer in just 1 year. As they were celebrating, there was a knock on the door, and Yoke went to check. To their surprise, it was Jamie, looking anxious and cold. The girls were happy to see her, especially since they had just been talking about her. They were relieved that she could stay in the country, but Jamie confessed that she might move to another country. She thanked everyone for saving her and apologized formally to Yoke. She decided she wouldn't appear in front of him anymore. Yoke wondered if he could change Jamie's mind if he tried to persuade her. Jamie said she would be foolish to stay and wouldn't be able to earn money for her sick brother now that no one else would hire her, so she chose to start fresh in a distant town. Yoke wondered if that was the only reason and invited Jamie to join Clover instead. Jamie was clearly shocked and touched at the same time. Yoke had told her that she didn't need to start all over and claimed those small reasons would solve everything eventually. He said they knew who she was inside since they were saved by her. He said he already thought of her as one of them. Our boy was trying to expand his harem. Jamie then started tearing up and couldn't believe Yoke was being too kind for his own good. She also scolded the girls for going too far for someone like her. The girls then surrounded Jamie and gave her a warm hug while welcoming her. Jamie couldn't help but cry and thank them at the same time. Marina then realized something and told everyone to hold a welcoming party. Jamie was confused, and Silk explained that they had already done some shopping since they expected her to visit. Marina then dragged Jamie inside the base and told her to have fun despite the visitors' hesitation. Yoke and the girls went to the kitchen to cook some food. Amy couldn't believe the girls had prepared so much. Marina and Silk went to decorate the living room. Jamie insisted on helping with cooking. Nene wondered if she was a good cook. Suddenly, Jamie showed off her cooking skills, surprising Neen and Rain. Yoke could see that Jamie hadn't lost her touch. Chimey said it was expected since she had been cooking for a long time. Yoke realized it would take some more time before he could catch up with her expertise. Neen asked what he meant, and Yoke explained that he had learned how to cook from Jamie when he was still in Thunderpike. Jamie said she had only taught him the basics. Rain and Neen got excited because they loved Yoke's cooking, and now they could taste his master's cooking. Marina and Silk went to check on them once they had finished. Everyone was impressed by how nicely decorated the living room was, with a banner welcoming Neen and Jamie to the team hanging on the wall. Jamie thanked them, and Neen was a bit confused about why she was included. Marina explained that although Nene was technically a temporary member, they felt it was the right time to fully welcome her as well. Nene was touched by their gesture. The original trio was happy that their surprise had worked. Yoke personally welcomed Jamie and Nena. The team started the party, and everyone thanked each other while standing in front of the food. Jamie began eating and complimented Yoke's cooking, which she always found delicious. Yoke felt touched that Jamie appreciated her cooking. Jamie became flustered and started blushing. Silk noticed Jamie's actions and realized something was up. She whispered to Jamie and asked if she also had feelings for Yoke. Jamie shouted in reflex, denying it. Then she noticed the others in front of them and quickly said it was nothing. Jamie whispered back to Silk, wondering what she meant by also. Silk confessed that everyone present had feelings for Yoke. Jamie was shocked and glared at Yoke, feeling betrayed. Yoke was confused about what was wrong. Pouting, Jamie claimed it was nothing. Marina suddenly noticed some crumbs on Yoke's cheeks and casually ate them. Jamie asked her to stop with a loud voice. Marina wondered why she shouldn't, and Jamie continued to pout. Yoke noticed the intense glare from her, so she nervously asked if everything was okay. Rain sensed Jamie's jealousy, but the new person adamantly denied it. Rain described Jamie as a tsundere, which surprised Marina. Jamie kept insisting they were wrong, but then Rain unexpectedly hugged Yoke, questioning if Jamie was okay with it. Jamie seemed crushed and fell silent, with steam practically pouring out of her head from embarrassment. Marina had joined in teasing her, exclaiming that she had been pretty clingy on Yoke. She also dropped the bomb that Rain had kissed Yoke at some point. Silk then whispered that everyone except Nena had already slept together with Yoke. Jamie was shocked to see cute-looking girls actually being daring with Yoke. She realized that she had been too late to the party. Silk continued teasing her and suggested being on the offensive before she got left behind. Jamie admitted she was worried about being on the offensive since she had a hard time being honest. Silk then suggested using the power of alcohol. Worried, Jamie claimed she didn't drink alcohol at all and whispered the reason to Silk. Silk said that would be better and offered to help her drink. Shortly after, Jamie fell silent after getting drunk. Yoke became concerned for her and scolded Silk for allowing her to drink so much. Silk brushed it off, insisting Jamie would be fine, and then asked Jamie about it. However, Jamie responded by kissing Silk. This behavior alarmed Yoke, as it was the first time he had seen Jamie act like that. Silk admitted that she may have overdone it with the drinks. Neen noticed that Jamie became very affectionate when drunk. She was taken aback by Jamie's kiss and found it difficult to escape. Neen realized that an adult's kiss was quite different. Silk then realized that Jamie's behavior could be used to their advantage. As the atmosphere heated up between the girls, Yoke attempted to leave the situation. But then, out of the blue, Silk proposed that Jamie should kiss Yoke too. This caught Yoke off guard, and he began to blush. Jamie, who was a bit tipsy, eagerly agreed with Silk, which left Yoke feeling bewildered and anxious. Jamie then reached out for Yoke's hand, expressing a desire to hold hands like lovers. Yoke, feeling utterly confused, was at a loss for words and simply froze. Jamie started to cry, questioning if Yoke didn't want to be with her. Caught off guard, Yoke struggled to respond, stumbling over his words. Yoke allowed Jamie to hold his hands, which made the mage giggle. It was the first time Yoke had seen her so happy. Jamie leaned in and kissed Yoke. After a moment, she pulled back and said she was happy. Yoke blushed, and Silk was happy for Jamie. Yoke knew Jamie would soon be embarrassed, so he asked the girls to cheer her up. The kissing fiend then targeted Marina and fell asleep in her arms. Yoke offered to take her to the bedroom, and he gently carried her as if she were a princess. It was the first time he had seen Jamie enjoying herself, and it made him happy. Setting her down on the bed, he looked at her face with a smile. He noticed that Jamie still had her hair tied up and realized it wouldn't be comfortable for her to sleep like that. As Yoke began taking out the hair ties from Jamie's hair, the mage woke up and noticed Yoke. Our main character apologized for waking her up and told her to go back to sleep. Jamie suddenly got up and pushed Yoke down onto the bed. Jamie ended up on top of Yoke, who started to feel flustered because of their awkward position. Yoke wondered if Jamie was still drunk. Jamie didn't say anything and started unbuttoning her blouse. Yoke's eyes widened as he realized what was going to happen next. With her sweet, drunken voice, Jamie told Yoke that she loved him. Caution, melons are falling out of the basket. Jamie began undressing Yoke and then started touching and kissing Yoke's body. When she tried to remove his pants, Yoke stopped her. Jamie started crying and asked if Yoke didn't like it. Yoke, who was drunk, mistakenly thought that Yoke had never liked her. She apologized for moving too fast and promised not to do it again. Yoke tried to reassure Jamie, but the drunk mage kept complaining. Yoke saw Jamie crying loudly and felt compelled to hug her tightly. Jamie seemed surprised by the gesture. Yoke then said she didn't realize Jamie was actually kind. He used to believe Jamie was mean, but a memory surfaced. It was when Simon would often scold Yoke over small things. Expecting another day of Simon's complaints, Jamie would say she was tired and suggest they go home instead. Simon would agree, realizing he was wasting time with Yoke. Yoke began to understand that Jamie was trying to help her, but he still doubted it because the Jamie he knew seemed unkind. However, Yoke now fully realized that Jamie was kind all along. Jamie felt touched and thanked Yoke while hugging him. She was glad that Yoke understood her now and accepted her. She then told Yoke that she would do her best to make him fall in love with her someday and wondered if that was okay. Yoke then agreed with a resolute expression on his face, and Jamie couldn't help but tear up a bit. Since Yoke agreed, Jamie pushed him down on the bed again and decided to be a little naughty. Caution: melons are falling out of the basket. Yoke freaked out more than ever as he started taking a step to adulthood. Jamie wondered if Yoke had something against naughty girls. As he felt her touch on his body, Yoke tried to stop Jamie. However, Jamie started tickling Yoke on his sides and Yoke burst out laughing. Jamie giggled and called him cute. Yoke was surprised and started blushing, and Jamie just giggled upon seeing his expression. Yoke asked her to put back her clothes on, but Jamie didn't want to since she still wanted to see Yoke's cute, flustered expressions. Her clothes continued to fall off and she licked her lips like she was a predator who just pounced on her prey. Jamie kissed Yoke, enjoying the feeling of his lips. Yoke was surprised and stayed still, feeling stunned. Jamie laughed and attempted to lick him, but then abruptly stopped, feeling nauseous. Yoke started sweating nervously and rushed to assist her to the bathroom. Unfortunately, it was too late and Jamie began vomiting uncontrollably. The following morning, Jamie said sorry for the trouble she caused. Silk said it was okay because it was her mistake and they all had a good time. Jamie realized everyone was kind. Silk even helped her despite competing for Yoke's affection, but Jamie noticed their friendship growing stronger as they worked together. When she saw Yoke and the girls, she suddenly thought of Thunderpike, which surprised her. Marina then asked if Jamie really lived alone since her little brother stayed with their childhood friend. Jamie confirmed, and Marina suggested she stay at their base since she's already part of Clover. Jamie was surprised when everyone looked at her. Shortly after, the girls got a room ready for Jamie. They assisted her in moving her belongings, and Jamie was pleasantly surprised to find a room all to herself. She seemed happy, and Yoke was pleased for her. Yoke then went out to fetch more boxes belonging to Jamie. With Yoke gone, the girls were left alone. Silk remarked that their situation had become even stranger. Marina asked what she meant, and Silk explained that there were now 5 women living together with one man, and all of them seemed to be fond of him. Marina agreed that it was indeed a rather unusual situation. The girls were having their usual chat when a messenger bird suddenly flew in. Yoke, who had just returned with a box, was surprised to see the bird land on it. The girls were curious about who the message was from, so Yoke untied it and read the note. His eyes widened as he realized it was a ticket to a hot spring resort. The girls, except for Marina, were thrilled at the idea. Nain explained that it was a traditional Japanese bathhouse, and Marina soon joined in the excitement of spending time together at the resort. They whispered among themselves, planning how to strengthen their friendship with Yoke as a group. But the plan got shut down in just a few seconds when Yoke mentioned that the ticket was a couple ticket. Yoke said it was a present from Ben to thank them for sorting out the Thunderpike situation. He said Ben shouldn't have done it and suggested the girls talk about it later, focusing on Jamie's room for now. As Yoke left the room, the girls quietly glanced at each other, surprised to find out that the ticket was only for a couple, 2 people. They silently wondered who would go with Yoke to the resort. In a tense atmosphere, the girls kept looking at each other until Silk reached out her hand. Marina was confused about what she was doing, and Silk explained that there was only one ticket. She didn't want any hard feelings between them by trying to go ahead without discussing it. Silk suggested settling things fairly by competing to win Yoke's affection. Rain wondered if Yoke would find it appealing while subtly expressing their desire to go with him to the onsen resort. Silk confirmed this. She asked them not to hold any grudges against the winner. Rain smiled and agreed to Silk's suggestion. Nene, Marina, and Jamie also agreed. Without Yoke knowing, the girls began their own competition to win his heart. Shortly after, Jamie had finished moving in and she thanked everyone for their help. The next task on the agenda was the girls' competition to impress Yoke and win the onsen ticket for couples. Silk took the lead by offering to make some tea, confident that Yoke would admire her industriousness. Meanwhile, Rain volunteered to bring out cookies she had baked. Marina, known for her absent-mindedness, chimed in with the idea of using their homemade jam. The tea and cookies got served, and Yoke thanked the girls for the snack. Silk drank her tea, noticing that Nene and Jamie were running late. Just as Silk thought she was ahead in the race, Nene suddenly said she loved hot springs. Silk was surprised that Nene went straight for it instead of earning points first. She wondered how Yoke would react to Nene's directness. Yoke didn't seem bothered at all. Then Jamie joined in, saying hot springs sounded nice because she never got to go on trips due to her sick little brother. Silk was surprised at Jamie's attempt to get sympathy points. Since Jamie knew Yoke the longest, Silk worried Jamie might take first place. Silk checked Yoke's reaction, but Yoke looked like she might take Jamie to the hot springs. Marina, who often seemed scatterbrained, suddenly piped up that she wanted to join in too. Silk started feeling anxious and decided to take action. She suggested to the other ladies that they should relax since there were only 2 tickets available, and she hinted that they shouldn't bother Yoke. The other girls were surprised that Silk was trying to make herself look good by pretending she didn't want to go. Marina then boldly asked if Silk really didn't want to go. Silk had a plan to pretend she was reluctantly holding back from going, hoping to gain some admiration by seeming noble compared to Yoke. The other girls were taken aback by Silk's tactic, but Yoke's reaction was even more unexpected. Suddenly, the other girls realized that Silk was a formidable opponent. They became wary and the day turned into a psychological battle among the group. Since none of them were used to outmaneuvering each other, they became extremely exhausted as the day went on. However, everything took a surprising turn when Marina suddenly asked Yoke who he would use the couple ticket with. Everyone was shocked, especially Silk, who didn't expect the absent-minded Marina to make such a bold move. Yoke then began to respond and the girls were nervous. Yoke said he had been thinking about it. As they tried to continue their conversation, someone knocked on the door and Yoke quickly got up to check who the visitor was. The girls suddenly felt the tension dissipate and Marina wondered why they felt drained. Rain then admitted that she had tried her best to act interested, but everything was leaving her feeling empty. The other girls realized that they were also feeling the same way. Yoke received another email and read it. He had expected a response from Ben and he said that the couple's ticket was a mistake. The girls were surprised by this. Yoke then read Ben's email, in which he explained that he wanted the girls to enjoy the onsen together because they were good friends. Ben had originally intended to buy tickets for everyone, but there was a mix-up, and he mistakenly thought the couple's ticket would work for everyone. Ben apologized for not getting more tickets since the onsen place was popular. Yoke had noticed the girls looking depressed and embarrassed about their secret disagreement. Feeling sorry for them, he assumed they all wanted to visit the hot springs, but he worried they only had a couple's ticket. Silk then thanked Yoke for caring but declined the idea, saying it would be pointless if not everyone could go. Yoke understood her point and suggested a consolation. He proposed a retreat to a sacred mountain to train and reflect during their 1-month suspension. He admitted it might not be as good as the hot spring resort, but the sacred mountain he mentioned had its own hot springs. The girls suddenly perked up and cheered, realizing they'd still get to enjoy the hot springs in the end. Yoke tried to explain it wasn't a vacation, but the girls didn't listen. A few days ago, Yoke and the girls hiked up to their camping site for their mountain retreat. Yoke told them to hold on a little longer as they were getting close. Marina suddenly got excited about the hot springs, but Yoke reminded them that it wasn't a vacation. He explained that during a mountain retreat, they were supposed to think about their 1-month suspension on the sacred mountain. Marina then asked what the sacred mountain was. Yoke explained that it was a place surrounded by sacred energy and without any dangerous creatures. It was the perfect place for them to clear their minds, bodies, and any segs. Maina was excited as she dipped into the onsen, exclaiming her joy. Silk then whispered a reminder to her, urging her to keep their true goal hidden from Yoke. Maina assured Silk that she remembered the plan. Silk admitted to realizing something after the incident with the couple's ticket. She revealed that she only wanted all of them to be happy by becoming Yoke's brides. Silk reminded the girls to take things slowly and steadily progress their relationship with Yoke, emphasizing that they could only do so during the mountain retreat. Rain had been worrying about whether Yoke would be upset with them, given how aggressive their plan had been. Silk reminded everyone that they used to be Yoke's students, so it might be difficult for him to approach them first. She cautioned that they might not progress beyond just kissing. The other girls agreed, except for Marina, who wasn't aware of what came after the kissing stage. Silk encouraged them all to stick to the plan. As Rain noticed Silk getting more enthusiastic, the other girls nodded along. They all cheered together when Yoke called them. Yoke said he could already see where they were headed. Excited, the girls rushed over to see for themselves, and they were greeted by a scene straight out of a fairy tale book. They all found the place incredibly beautiful. Marina eagerly urged Yoke to keep moving forward, and our main character agreed to stop and rest sooner since they would start training the next day. He offered to set up the tent and cook dinner while the girls took a bath in the hot springs. Silk asked him what he meant with a mischievous smile, which confused Yoke. Suddenly, the girls all grabbed him at once and Yoke realized what was about to happen next. He pretty much realized that he was going to the hot spring with the girls. He wondered how things had ended up that way. Marina tried to calm him down by hugging his left arm. Nini grabbed his right arm because she was scared of the water. Marina wondered why Yoke was getting upset. Rain commented on how extreme their move was. Jamie just sat there silently. Yoke asked Silk and Neen to let go of him, but Neen refused because she was scared of the water. Yoke wondered why she was in the bath, and Neen exclaimed she didn't want to be left behind by others. Yoke exclaimed he could feel her breasts, but Nina didn't care at all. Yoke wondered if Silk could let go at least, but the elf teasingly refused, and continued rubbing her breasts on Yoke's arm. Yoke exclaimed that the girls were taking it too far already. Silk knew they were crossing a line, but they didn't have a choice. Their goal was to deepen their relationship with Yoke and take it to another level. They wanted to raise the bar into a mature relationship. However, their actions in the bath were meaningless since Yoke had his eyes tightly shut. Just then, Neen exclaimed how red Jamie and Rain were and wondered if they were feeling alright. Yoke started asking if their skins were reacting to the onsen's water. Silk used this as a chance to make Yoke worry further by exclaiming how weirdly red the two were, and asked Yoke to check on them. Yoke then exclaimed that everyone was naked, and there was no way he would look. Silk claimed it was an emergency and wondered if he didn't care about the girls' well-being. Yoke claimed he did. Silk asked him to open his eyes. Yoke claimed he would open his eyes but only to check the girls' conditions. Yoke then slowly opened his right eye to peek, but he only found Rain and Jamie blushing while silently staring at him. Yoke got mad and splashed water on Rain since she overreacted. He then swore not to open his eyes, but Silk wondered if Yoke was sure in making such a statement. Silk knew that it was also Yoke's first time in an onsen and claimed how magnificent it could be. Yoke wondered what she meant. With a menacing smile, Silk offered to enlighten Yoke about the quintessence of onsen, where you should not close your eyes shut. Yoke had asked for more explanation. Silk then said that unlike many places, an onsen was an outdoor bathtub, and the visibility there was poor. She told him to take a good look because they already had an uninvited guest with them. Suddenly, she pointed out that there was a bug on Jamie's head. Jamie freaked out and ran toward Yoke because she hated bugs. Somehow, Rain also got bulldozed all the way to Yoke by Jamie. Despite feeling something soft in various places, Yoke still asked what kind of bug it was. However, Jamie had been too scared and wouldn't let go of Yoke. Silk exploited Jamie's fear of bugs to initiate her plan of everyone pressing themselves onto Yoke. Knowing Marion would volunteer to remove the bug, Silk seized the opportunity to join in pressing on Yoke. She pretended to be fleeing from a sudden appearance of a roach. Marina, who detested roaches the most, panicked and also clung to Yoke. Silk's plan progressed as anticipated, with Yoke just needing to open his eyes. Teasingly, Silk asked Yoke to eliminate the bugs, but our main character couldn't budge from his spot. The heat started to overwhelm Yoke and he collapsed with a loud thud. The girls screamed upon discovering Yoke unconscious. Shortly afterward, Yoke woke up and found the girls all concerned for him. He apologized for fainting and began checking on the girls to see if they were okay. Silk attempted to apologize, but Yoke insisted they return to the warm water since it was cold outside of it. Silk hesitated to go without Yoke. They kept arguing until Silk finally snapped and requested they cease. Everyone returned to the onsen in silence. This time, Yoke went his own way from the girls and listened to their conversation. Rain noticed something seemed off with Silk, sparking Yoke's interest. Silk questioned why Rain was asking, and Rain mentioned she noticed Silk acting strangely throughout the day. Unable to keep it from Rain, Silk admitted she felt nervous. She realized how all the girls in their group felt after the issue with the couple ticket, and expressed her desire for everyone to be happy with Yoke. However, she also acknowledged that Yoke had never expressed a desire for a romantic relationship with them. This realization left her unusually nervous. Rain empathized with Silk's feelings and words. She then assured Yoke that she knew he valued all of them. She confessed that they all wanted to deepen their relationship with him. She urged him to open his eyes and see them. This left Yoke nervously confused. She explained how Silk had gone overboard for the sake of other girls. Yoke also realized this when he saw the girls crossing the line by getting into the onsen together. He understood how serious they were by sincerely expressing their feelings. Yoke decided to reciprocate their feelings and he opened his eyes. In front of him stood Rain, who was blushing out of embarrassment. Yoke also blushed, and the two became a new source of steam. Silk gently touched his cheeks and asked him to look into her eyes. He felt a bit embarrassed, but Silk didn't seem to mind and still displayed her charm. They all let out a sigh of relief, releasing the tension from their minds. Marina chuckled at their antics, and Nina wondered if they were growing up. Jamie remarked on how Nina was hiding behind Marina. Silk pondered if everything was overwhelming for Yoke, but Yoke disagreed. He admitted feeling guilty and apologized for making the girls worry, expressing his desire for their well-being. He assured them he wouldn't pry into their personal matters, which saddened Silk. However, he took the opportunity to express his deep affection for all of them, valuing their presence above everything else in his life. Silk was surprised by this. Blushing, Rain exclaimed that it had been a bold statement. Marina said she also valued everyone, but Nini pointed out that Yoke was saying it differently to her. Jamie silently thought it was surprising that Yoke was bold with his words now. Silk giggled and said her anxiety had just washed away. Embarrassed, Yoke reminded her that he wouldn't say such stuff again. Seeing them argue, Rain just giggled and said that soaking with everyone in the onsen under the starry sky had been nice. The others then looked up to see the starry night sky. Yoke gave them a pass on the incident, and the girls laughed at him for getting swayed. Shortly after, the group had their dinner with drinks, and Marina led the toast to the rebirth of Clover. She also wanted to celebrate their new setup and their move towards adulthood. Yoke asked her not to talk like that. Marina then encouraged the girls to train again so they could return to endless darkness. Rain wondered if the dungeon would be unsealed, and Silk explained that once the overflow settled down, the dungeon's mana should restore the damaged interior. Yoke then clarified that it wouldn't be unsealed even if the overflow settled down, because they just found out that Persephone was inside. He stated that the only party that could enter the dungeon right now would be the Anubis party. The girls were shocked since Anubis was the only legendary party fully capable of clearing endless darkness. The other girls knew how strong Anubis was compared to a C-rank party like Clover. They knew they might go far, but Yoke exclaimed that it wouldn't change what they were going to do. They were going to become stronger by taking requests, and reminded the girls about their real goal. Their goal was not to become the strongest party, but to clear endless darkness, reach the edge of the world, and see the gates leading to another world. He asked the girls to enjoy their adventures to the fullest. Yoke believed that they could all achieve their goals and make their dreams come true. The girls were surprised by Yoke's sudden speech and suddenly got motivated to train during the 1-month ban. Jamie also wanted to do the same even with a 1-year ban. Everyone then celebrated as the official rebirth of Clover had just started. A month had passed, and in the Finesse Guild, Mamar warmly welcomed Yoke back. She wondered if he was eager to start taking requests again after his 1-month ban. Yoke expressed his excitement, mentioning how he and the other members had been training hard during the past month. Mamar looked proud, likening her feeling to that of an aunt, and mentioned that she wasn't the only one thrilled about their return. She revealed that the kingdom had chosen the Clover Party for a special nomination request. Their first task after being reinstated would take them to the trade city of Duna, where a newly discovered untouched dungeon had been found. Shortly after, Yoke informed the girls that it was finally time for them to embark on a new adventure. It marked the beginning of a fresh chapter in their journey, and he encouraged them to relish a beautifully illustrated 2-page spread by the series author. The entire group returned to the Finesse Guild, where Marina eagerly greeted Mamar, signaling their return to business. Mamar was pleased to see Marina's enthusiasm and expressed her own excitement. Marina eagerly expressed her desire to put her new skills to the test. Silk advised Marina to remain composed and not let her excitement overwhelm her. Rain reminisced about Silk's earlier humming, which led to a playful argument between the two. Meanwhile, Jamie cheered them on while managing the base. She sported a cute uniform from her part-time job, which she had obtained after returning from the Sacred Mountains ahead of the others. On the other hand, Nene shed tears of joy as she officially joined the party, ready to embark on adventures with them. Yoke also expressed his excitement, eager to see how the girls had grown stronger during their training. The girls credited their progress to Yoke's guidance, prompting him to reassure them that their upcoming request would be rewarding as they prepared to venture into a new dungeon. Later, in an office, Ben explained that it had been over 10 years since a new dungeon was discovered, and Clover had been assigned an internal investigation quest. The girls felt honored and excited about this quest. However, Ben seemed anxious as he explained that the dungeon might be significant. He further explained that according to the Royal Academy, the abnormal phenomena and overflow that had occurred earlier were caused by the emergence of the new dungeon. The dungeon's impact extended throughout the kingdom, making it a significant matter. He warned them that the dungeon might be massive inside. However, he knew that whatever dangers or treasures they might encounter inside would be exciting for them, and the girls agreed. Silk then wondered if it was okay for a rank C party like them to take on the request. Ben wondered what she meant, since Clover was a dark horse who had solved the mysteries of the endless darkness, and was currently the most talked about party. Their achievements had been recognized by the kingdom, qualifying them for the task. Yoke claimed they had merit in taking the quest. It would have helped them achieve their dream of clearing the endless darkness one day. They just needed to build up their reputation by taking requests from the kingdom and making their party name known throughout the world. The girls agreed with Yoke since it was Yoke. Ben then claimed that clearing the endless darkness would have meant being on par with him. Ben was a member of Anubis, but this just made Yoke and the girls all fired up. Ben was glad that they were enthusiastic and reminded them to beat the other parties invited to participate in the investigation request. Marina wondered what he meant. Ben then explained that as a celebration in discovering a new dungeon, the whole world should celebrate. 2 more popular parties of the coming generation would also participate. The investigation request was basically a race between the 3 parties on who would clear the dungeon first. They called the event the New Genesis Cup. Shortly afterward, Yoke and the girls rode in a carriage until they reached the city of Duna. They were amazed by the bustling surroundings. Marina noticed a peculiar building and wondered about it. Yoke explained it was a cafe styled after Salmutaria. Marina asked what Salmutaria was, and Silk said it was a neighboring kingdom south of Elmilia's Duna. Yoke then pointed out some Salmutarians by their distinctive clothing. He said they often wore curved blades, leather armor, and patterned capes that represented their hometown. The girls were impressed by Yoke's knowledge as usual. As they chatted, they arrived at Duna's Adventurer Guild. The girls remarked on its sturdy appearance compared to the Finesse Guilds, and Yoke told them to wait nearby while he dealt with the reception. A receptionist welcomed them, and Yoke introduced himself. The receptionist asked him to wait a moment as the guildmaster would come out to meet him. Yoke heard loud noises nearby and he quickly understood what was going on. The girls were being chased by large Salmutarian men. It felt like deja vu to Yoke, and the girls spotted him. They all hid behind him, and Yoke realized Marina had turned down the men's offer for a drink once more. This time though, the men were extremely drunk and Salmutarians, which made the situation worse than before. Yoke pondered his options since talking to them would be pointless, and he couldn't use magic in the city. Suddenly a pair of hands grabbed the drunk men and lifted them with ease. The drunk Salmutarian men were slammed to the ground, and Yoke was impressed to see two giant-looking men fly through the door. Yoke then took a good look at the huge woman in front of them. Monstrous strength, vivid pink hair with trademark twin braids. The two women approached the drunk Salmutarian men and asked whose guild they were messing with. The woman was Maniela, known as the Queen of Destruction, Dunas's guildmaster, and a member of Anubis. Maniela didn't care if she beat up someone from a neighboring country, and Yoke suddenly got worried. Maniela was known as Anubis's absolute vanguard, and would always make monsters' blood rain down. Yoke then stepped forward and said something in Salmutarian. The girls were shocked to see Yoke speak the language. The two men sobered up and left while saying something. Yoke sighed out of relief, and Maniela told him that she was only ruthless toward monsters. Yoke just laughed it off. The girls were shocked by what had just happened, and Yoke claimed it was because of their nationality. They were confused, so Maniela explained that in Salmutaria, women were treated as objects and assets, mainly doing housework and assisting with family business. Women didn't have independence there. The Salmutarian people saw them without a man and assumed they were valuable. Yoke's involvement changed everything. He further explained that Salmutaria had strict religious and legal rules with severe punishments. If they took the girls from Yoke, they wouldn't complain if someone later stole from them. The girls were once again impressed by Yoke's deep knowledge and how he stood up to the Salmutarian men. And Yoke just laughed it off. Maniela laughed and wondered if Yoke hadn't actually been Saga's biological son, given how cute he had said the words to the Salmutarian. Yoke was surprised that Maniela had easily picked up on his relation to Saga. Maniela thanked Yoke for handling the situation and formally introduced herself. The girls suddenly got excited seeing such a legendary person in front of them. Yoke apologized for the trouble, but Maniela didn't mind because the Salmutarians had been the rude ones. She apologized as she told them to follow her while she explained things about the request. At that moment, Rain came up to Yoke and mentioned that his Salmutarians sounded a little off. Yoke was puzzled and asked her to explain. Rain then pointed out that it was the part where Maniela had said something was cute. Yoke sought clarification, but Rain brushed it off and walked away to catch up with Maniela. Later, in an office, Maniela mentioned that someone would be arriving soon. The door opened, and Maniela clarified that it was the other teams joining the investigation request. Maniela introduced the two other teams, Fullbound and Misty. Everyone in Fullbound was from Duna and known throughout the nation. Misty, on the other hand, was made up of beautiful members who were extremely popular in the capital of the Elmelia Kingdom, even though they were rookies. Clover was then introduced to the two teams as super rookies with achievements in the Achromatic Darkness dungeon. As Maniela tried to brief them about the mission, Zakard, the leader of Fullbound, asked about Clover. Maniela told him to be clear. Zakard knew the Genesis Cup was a race among the most popular parties of their generation. He already knew that his party and Misty were popular, but he doubted that a C-ranked party belonged with them. Maniela wondered what Zakard was talking about since Clover had been in the spotlight since they investigated Achromatic Darkness. Zakard exclaimed that they could have done the same job and threatened Yoke. He said he hated wimps who made girls wait on him. Alice, the leader of Misty, claimed that Zakard's statement was just his personal opinion, and that he must have been jealous of Yoke. She confessed that she was a fan of Clover and thought Yoke was a cool person. Everyone in Misty also exclaimed that they liked Clover, and Yoke's girls panicked, seeing more rivals. Seeing the girls panic, Alice told them she also wanted to have a special relationship with Yoke. Zakard watched the commotion in front of him in silence for a while until he called out to Yoke. He shouted that he would knock him into smithereens. He ordered his team to move forward and ignored Maniela's briefing. Maniela apologized, explaining that Zakard was the type of person who liked to show off and feel proud. She then proceeded with the briefing. She told the teams they had 2 weeks, and that the team who went the furthest or cleared the dungeon would win. Teams were prohibited from teaming up or interfering with each other, and each team had to follow its own strategies. She told them to focus on aiming for the 5th layer first. As both leaders agreed, Rain asked why they were focusing on the 5th layer. Yoke explained that it was to gather data first to estimate the dungeon's difficulty. Maniela was impressed and explained that the Royal Academy would make the final decision and everything would be live-streamed. They could keep any items they found, but if necessary, they would need to send them in for surveying and get them back later. The national camp would be set up near the dungeon entrance with full support. Manuela gave them the rest of the documents and the leaders had no questions. She told them to prepare for the long journey in 3 days and to enjoy the inns with special features provided. Clover then got a whole building for themselves, and the girls were surprised. They were excited about the special features and soon discovered an onsen inside. Yoke started sweating heavily and complained about why things turned out like this again. 3 days later, the race between the teams was broadcasted everywhere. Everyone cheered mostly for Fullbound and Misty. The commentator explained that the broadcast would switch between the 3 teams with full commentary. He announced the start of the new Genesis Cup, and the 3 teams entered the dungeon. At the entrance, the 3 teams arrived on time. Zacard continued calling Yoke a wimp and told him to go home. The girls got mad, but Yoke told them to ignore the other teams and focus on their own race. Zacard tried to claim that Yoke was just pretending to be brave, but the girls suddenly surrounded him, including those from Misty. They thanked Yoke for his calming words. Zacard was annoyed at being ignored, but his own teammates found the situation amusing. Yoke said that people like Zacard were the first ones to get beaten down and that they should just ignore him. Zacard got angrier and ordered his scout to go ahead. Alice also told their scout Marta to go. Yoke then told Nene to take her cloak. Nene wore the cloak and Zacard was shocked to see Nene become see-through. Nene proudly claimed it was her hidden cloak. Zacard exclaimed that such a thing could fully conceal someone. Marina then said that was true for ordinary cloaks, but since Yoke was an alchemy genius, he had altered the cloak and maximized its concealing effect. Zacard found it absurd and claimed Clover had just stumbled upon the rare item somewhere. Alice then said she might have thought the same as him if it was only the cloak. She pointed out that she couldn't hear Nene's footsteps and assumed that the boots were also special. She concluded that the 2 items were altered by Yoke rather than being rare finds. Soon after, Nene was the first to return despite being the last to depart. She even explained what was inside the dungeon and drew a map with the best directions. Zacard started to doubt if Clover was really a C-ranked party. He was getting anxious but still tried to stay calm, reminding himself that the race was just starting. As Nene tried to say something concerning, Marta returned with a loud voice. She exclaimed there was a monster unlike anything they had seen before inside. Everyone then went inside, with Nene leading them. She stopped in a corner and used a mirror to show the monster. They were all shocked to see a huge humanoid monster covered in chains. Everyone agreed that they had never seen anything like it before. Marta said it was a new type of monster, noticing that even Misty, the most experienced among them, was surprised. Even those who could read magical or spiritual signatures, Mage Amelia and Priestess Aurora, had no idea what it was. They said the monster had both a human presence and the aura of a magical creature, impure like a demon or undead. Aurora concluded it was a new type of monster. Alice thought that new dungeons might create new monsters. Despite having no information about it, Zacard suggested they should try to defeat it since it was only the first layer. Yoke told them to wait and guessed that the monster was intelligent because it looked humanoid. Seeing no other monsters along the way, he assumed the monster in front of them was a dungeon guard or a boss monster. Everyone was shocked by Yoke's guess. Zacard couldn't believe Yoke had figured it out so quickly. Since Yoke said attacking recklessly was dangerous, Alice suggested that all 15 of them should take on the monster and see who could defeat it first, instead of teaming up. Zacard wondered how they would compete against the monster. Alice suggested taking turns attacking, with the person who landed the finishing blow taking everything. Zacard asked how this was different from one party soloing the monster. Alice explained that they could gather information while fighting, then switch out to rest as needed. However, she emphasized that everyone needed to trust each other and avoid any backstabbing. Yoke and Zacard agreed with the proposal. Since the first party to go would have an advantage due to the lack of information, Alice suggested her party go first. Zacard was surprised and argued that his team should go first since they were the seniors. Alice thanked him for being considerate and asserted that her team were no ordinary rookies and could secure the victory. Zacard laughed and agreed to go second, while Yoke and Clover decided to go last. The Misty girls moved forward and Alice began counting down for their attack. When Alice gave the signal, everyone charged at the monster and started weakening it with 3 debuff spells. The monster resisted the spells and used its chains to attack the girls, surprising Alice and her team. The monster quickly jumped around using its chains to move and attack the girls. Alice then told Aurora to use a provocation spell on Marta, their best option to stop the monster from moving around. Amelia then cast a spell called Butterfly Blast. Magic butterflies flew toward the monster and exploded. Yoke and the girls were impressed and the monster stopped moving. Then it was Misty's vanguard's turn to attack. Yoke found it incredible to see Alice and Silveria coordinate their attack and thought they might finish off the monster themselves. However, the monster fought back by spinning its chains and pushed the girls away. Suddenly, Zakard told them to retreat as he dealt a heavy slash to the huge monster. The monster was sent flying and Zakard and his team continued their attack. With their exaggeratedly named skills, the Fullbound members kept attacking the monster. Yoke and the girls couldn't believe how flashy and chaotic Fullbound was, with bad naming sense for their moves. Zakard exclaimed that the monster was defeated under the rubble. Yoke saw why both parties were popular despite their different fighting styles. He agreed that both Fullbound and Misty were two strong groups. Just when they thought it was over, the monster suddenly got back up in its second form. Seeing the monster get thinner, Zakard assumed it could now take more damage since it had lost its armor. However, Alice realized something and told Marta, who was still the target of the provocation spell, to get out. Marta barely dodged the monster's quick attack. The monster had become faster and had a wider range of attack now. It was gaining on Marta, who had been confident in her speed. Just then, Nina moved to the front, and Yoke used multi-quick cast on her, adding physical enhance, provocation, and great haste. Seeing how fast Nani had become, the Fullbound and Misty party members were shocked. Yoke then stepped forward and said they would go next. Alice and Zakard listened as Yoke instructed his team to try their new formation since the monster was limited to physical attacks and hadn't used magic once. Zakard wondered if Yoke had a plan against such a strong opponent. The girls were also excited to try out their new moves. Nani used her ninja art, Clone Jutsu, to distract the monster and its chains while attacking it with silk at the same time. Zakard complained because they were only blindly attacking the monster. Alice then told him to look again as the vanguard was actually leading the monster toward Yoke and the others. Zakard doubted that Yoke could do anything. Yoke then cast 4 debuff spells on the monster, but it still resisted after a few seconds. However, this gave the monster enough time to lower its guard. Marina leaped toward the monster with her katana and tried to slash it, but she missed. Marina then said she was not the only star of the show. Rain finished chanting her grade 6 magic ray and fired it at the monster from close range. The monster was hit without defending itself and broke into pieces, leaving only the chains on the floor. Zakard was shocked to see a grade 6 magic spell from a member of a C-ranked party. Alice then explained that Clover's strategy depended on Marina and Rain to finish off the monster. Neen and Silk had lured the monster into Clover's attack range. Yoke then weakened the monster to create an opening for Marina, who would then finish it off with her magic blade. However, it didn't matter if Marina's attack landed or not. Zakard then realized that Clover had another plan involving their mage in the back. Alice said that this was Clover's risk mitigation stage. She explained that Clover always had a 2-step strategy. Yoke praised them for noticing, but said it was just one of many strategies they had. The girls from Misty were excited to hear this and called them incredible. Hearing Yoke's words, Zakard suddenly felt anxious. Just then, Marta noticed something shining in the monster's remains. Everyone took a closer look and found a key under the chains, which made everyone confused. Everyone assumed the key might be for a nearby treasure box or something similar. However, it could also have been a key for a door somewhere. Alice then claimed that Clover had the key since they defeated the monster. Damien from Fullbound agreed that they lost this time. However, Zakard grabbed Yoke's collar and exclaimed that the monster was already beaten down, and Clover only finished it since they were the last ones. He insisted they didn't lose the round at all. Silk tried to protest, but Zakard surprisingly agreed that Clover won this round. Zakard's own team members were becoming confused by their leader's words. Zakard then raised his fist for a fist bump but punched Yoke instead and laughed at him. He claimed he would win the next round and told his teammates to keep moving. His own teammates protested, saying their leader was just trying to act cool. Alice then said they were also disappointed about going first since they could have won if they had gone later. She mentioned they hated losing and would also hurry ahead. Yoke said they wouldn't lose against them either. As the 2 other teams left, it was time for Clover to check the loot. However, Silk noticed that Marina was not getting excited about it. Yoke then asked Rain to check first if the drops were dangerous. Rain then claimed the key and chains were fine, but something underneath them was somehow strange. Yoke then looked around and noticed a ring made of gold. The girls found it simple but charming. However, Yoke noticed the opposite and felt an extremely ominous aura from it. He couldn't read it using his appraisal skill but knew there was magic applied to it. They then decided to handle it with caution, and Yoke saw that was the only loot. Marina then panicked and exclaimed that something was gone. Her expression turned grim as she claimed that something was really gone. She wondered if her senses were off. Seeing her looking pale, Yoke asked if she was fine. Marina asked what they should do since she just realized something truly terrifying. She explained that when she grazed the monster with her blade, she used her 6th sense and saw its true form. She claimed the monster might have been human. Yoke then realized that Marina was saying the new type of monster was human. Marina didn't know much, but the moment she slashed the monster, she knew it was human. She also reminded everyone that a monster should leave a magic gem behind when defeated. But there wasn't one. Silk added that other things seemed strange. She noticed that the charred parts of the monster's corpse, which had been tangled in the chains before, had completely vanished as if they never existed. Everyone fell silent, and Yoke started piecing together the clues based on what they had noticed so far. However, it wasn't enough. So Yoke asked Neen to scout ahead for more information. Soon after, Nene finished her scouting and had two things to report. She said there were stairs leading upwards. Everyone was surprised, and Yoke realized that the new dungeon might resemble a place they knew. Neen then mentioned a locked door that might need the key they had just gotten from the monster. She then asked what they should do next. Yoke claimed they should stick to their original plan to sweep the first floor and use its size and the monsters that lived there as a way to measure the dungeon's overall scale and difficulty. So the team went to the locked door first, and Nene used the key. The door opened and the interior looked ordinary. It appeared like a normal storage room with no sense of danger. There was nothing that could be considered a reward for defeating the monster. Just when Yoke felt uneasy, Nene found a notebook. Yoke assumed there might be information about the room or the dungeon itself written in it. Yoke asked Rain to check it, and Rain confirmed that it was fine after she used magic and curse sense. Yoke then opened the notebook and discovered writings he hadn't seen before. He assumed it was written in some sort of language, and the writings resembled a shopping list since they had bulleted items that were crossed off. Neen agreed because Rain mentioned the room resembled a storeroom. As Yoke thought about it, he sensed that the room felt strange. He pointed out that they hadn't seen any dust or smelled mold since they entered. Everyone looked clean despite feeling worn out, as if someone had been using the room until the day before. Silk wondered if someone was still coming and going from the room. Yoke claimed it was impossible since the chain monster was blocking the path. Yoke then reminded them that the chained monster was the one holding the key. Based on the clues so far, they could assume that the chained monster was the owner of the room. However, Rain said things still didn't make sense considering how ordinary the room was. Yoke didn't want to think about it too much, but he could only assume that whoever lived in the room had somehow turned into a monster. Silk understood the idea after Marina's claim some time ago. Rain then suggested that they might have used something cursed, similar to what Simon had used. Yoke went silent when he noticed that the girls didn't worry about the most important thing. He then suggested changing their plans and going to the upper floors. Silk asked why, since they initially needed to sweep the floor. Yoke pointed out that the dungeon resembled achromatic darkness. He listed the mysterious monsters, the inconsistency between the direction of the stairs and the positioning of the floors, and the presence of a human. Silk then agreed with the similarities. Yoke asked the girls to operate under the belief that the dungeon was as difficult and dangerous as achromatic darkness. He reminded them how they didn't get any information by staying on achromatic darkness's first floor and decided to go to the upper floor to get information this time. However, the girls were confused since they experienced the underworld in achromatic darkness. Yoke then noticed Marina feeling uneasy. He told her that her feeling would fade as they got closer to the truth. He reminded her that all they needed to do was defeat the new race of monsters in the dungeon to clear it. He asked the girls not to feel uneasy since they were the ones who solved the mystery of achromatic darkness. He claimed they could also unravel the new dungeon's mystery. He also pointed out that they were in a brand new dungeon and making new discoveries would be exciting. The girls then got excited and Yoke looked glad. The whole team then decided to go to the next floor. An hour later, after assessing the damages and taking a lunch break, Clover carefully made their way to the upper floor. They worried about returning to the surface since it was bright, but right after passing the exit, they discovered a huge town in front of them. They wondered where they were since it was clearly not the city of Duna. Yoke didn't recall seeing such a place on the surface and assumed that space had distorted again, transporting them somewhere else. Despite its beauty, the place felt unsettling because there were no signs of life and it looked like it was still being used. He hoped the girls were not spooked again. Nene couldn't see any living beings so far, and Rain found the sky strange since it was supposed to be afternoon. Yoke assumed they were scared, but Nene suddenly exclaimed excitedly that they were still inside the dungeon. Silk agreed since they had already experienced something similar in achromatic darkness. Neen claimed it was the same as the outdoor layer there. The girls continued discussing and planned to find a base and investigate the area for monsters. Even Marina recommended sticking around their base since the place might change like achromatic darkness. Yoke was surprised that the girls were level-headed and able to devise a strategy after he had thought they would be terrified. He assumed they would enjoy conquering the dungeon since they appeared calm. Just then, Nene worried about which way to go since the place seemed big. Yoke then suggested going to the castle, just like in the books. He explained that there was a similar dungeon called Aureus Royal Castle Ruins, where the boss monster was always located in the king's chamber. Yoke proposed assuming the same setup and clearing the dungeon by heading to the castle and defeating the boss monster. The girls were surprisingly excited about the adventure ahead of them. Yoke laughed, and like Nina suggested, they first went off to find a base. However, when Yoke stepped forward, he suddenly felt something and dropped to his knees. He touched his neck and said it was throbbing. The girls remembered that this was where Persephone's mark had been. With the mark, Yoke said he could sense the presence of another world, just like in achromatic darkness. He apologized to the girls because he couldn't shake the bad feeling. Just then, a voice came from Yoke's shadow. Everyone became alert as something started emerging from the shadows. The thick fog began swirling until it formed a human shape. A robed person with a cane appeared in front of Yoke and the girls. Everyone froze when they realized it was another human living in the dungeon. The robed person laughed and realized they had been rude. They wondered if they had startled Yoke and called out his full name. Yoke was surprised and asked how the robed person knew his name. The old man stared at them until he mentioned that Yoke had become quite famous compared to someone like him who had been left behind in a broken world. Yoke wondered who the old man really was since Persephone's mark was throbbing. Recalling his time with achromatic darkness, he assumed the old man was also some sort of mythological being. The stairs were behind them and they could escape any time. However, Yoke wanted to use this chance to gain information about the dungeon. Yoke then asked what the old man was doing inside a dungeon. The old man laughed when he heard that they thought they were in a dungeon and claimed things had taken quite a distorted turn of events. Yoke was trying to put the pieces together as he noticed the words distortion and broken world. Yoke then assumed that they were not in a dungeon. Neen claimed the old man was just messing with them, and Yoke said they could just escape through the stairs if things went wrong. The old man decided to introduce the place to Yoke. He called it a lovely royal capital, a place once known as the City of Joy. The place was named the royal capital of Gladshiam. Yoke had never heard of such a place and wondered if they were really in a different world. He then asked if there were other humans besides the old man. The old man exclaimed that they were all there. The king and his subjects were around. Upon hearing those words, Yoke realized that everyone existed but was not alive and concluded that they were indeed in a dungeon. He assumed that the place used to be a normal town but one day got attacked and suddenly transformed into a dungeon. He assumed a distortion the old man mentioned might have caused it. During that time, the chained man from before, the king and his subjects turned into monsters because they didn't properly transition into this world, making the king the dungeon boss they needed to defeat to clear the dungeon. The old man complimented Yoke's intuition but said it wasn't that simple and it wasn't his job to explain. Since Yoke and the others were confused, he told them to look up. A light suddenly appeared as if it was falling from the sky. Everyone was puzzled by it, and then the old man disappeared. Silk then exclaimed that the falling light was a girl descending from the sky. The white-haired girl slowly opened her eyes as she came down. She then looked at Yoke and said she had been waiting for him. Yoke became anxious because another being knew his name. The girl then said there wasn't much time and she would only say what was necessary. She told them Yoke's world was currently in danger of a culling. Yoke and the girls then raised their guards. Yoke asked what the girl meant and how she was doing. He grew anxious as strange things appeared one by one, and he had heard that his world would be destroyed. The girl then simply mentioned that the culling meant the setting of the sun. She explained it was the very sun that cast the twilight glow in the area and caused the distortion, which she called the culling. The girls, anxious and confused, asked if they should attack the girl. Yoke told them to hold on, thinking that the girl was neither their friend nor foe yet. He realized they needed to calm down first and listen to the rest of the story. Yoke then tried to clarify that the sun the girl was talking about was only the dungeon's glow. He wondered how such a thing could consume a world. The girl claimed it was not limited to the dungeon and would eventually consume everything on the planet, causing its decline and disappearance. Yoke asked if the cause of decline could be destroyed. The girl then claimed they should have been wiped out a long time ago. However, they refused to accept their fate, and the foolish king, along with his ignorant subjects, tried to control the uncontrollable. Yoke assumed that had caused the setting sun, and the girl quickly confirmed. Yoke then asked for specifics, and the girl claimed it was gold. It was something that humans must not touch, a cursed omnipotent device and the fruit of the world tree that could make any wish come true. Yoke realized it was like a golden locust that ate everything in its path. The girl said it had already eaten several worlds and they didn't want to make the same mistake again. She asked Yoke to defeat the Twilight King and destroy the gold. Otherwise, Yoke's world would also be swallowed by the setting sun. Yoke asked why it had to be him. The girl said Yoke was the only one in the world who was qualified because he had a special power, that of a hero. Yoke was shocked and confused. He was still trying to understand everything the girl had said. As he thought about the word hero, he remembered something. He recalled the story of the hero who gave his soul to the goddess to save his lover. It was the same thing Yoke did to save the girls when he offered his soul to Persephone. Yoke then realized that the scheming Persephone was behind this. He remembered how she really liked heroes and had a reason to not let them go easily before. Persephone granted him power to make his party's adventures more difficult. Suddenly, the girl asked them to take care of a girl named Rune's body. Yoke was surprised and tried to confirm if she wasn't the girl they were talking to. The girl explained that she was once known as the Golden Priestess but could no longer stay. She said that Rune could help them because she could also cross the barrier to the outside. She begged Yoke and the others to take care of the gold and their sins. The girl then descended to the ground, and a silk of light escaped from her body. She suddenly fell unconscious, and Yoke caught her. Her beauty left Yoke speechless and confused. The other girls were also confused because it was too much to process. Seeing the girls stunned, Yoke suggested they return first and revisit the topic once they had calmed down. The girls agreed but wondered what to do with the girl left behind by the priestess. Yoke said they couldn't leave her and suggested asking the Royal Academy for support. If the girl was dangerous, they could handle her. Fortunately, Persephone's mark was no longer throbbing, and Yoke concluded that the girl posed no danger. Silk agreed and instructed Neen to lead the way. As they reached the exit, Yoke noticed someone familiar. It was Marquis Bedibor, the director of the Royal Academy, and everyone freaked out by his presence. Bedibor mentioned that they watched Clover's stream. With a respectful tone, he asked Yoke, as the chosen hero, to save the world. His words, of course, surprised Yoke. Soon after, an emergency meeting was held to discuss the culling caused by the new dungeon and its related events. Zakhard was confused when they were suddenly called out of the dungeon for the meeting. Since everyone was puzzled, Viscount Bodeman, the on-site supervisor of the dungeon, announced that the Genesis Cup was cancelled due to the threat of the culling. He also confirmed that the setting sun had already damaged their world. Yoke asked what kind of damage it was, and Bodeman shared the news that all Misty Party members had suffered mental breakdowns and had been taken to the clinic. They experienced hallucinations, mumbled mindlessly, and became aggressive and violent. Additionally, some civilians who watched the livestream also suffered the same symptoms. Everyone was shocked by this sudden news. After seeing the new dungeon sunset and receiving a damage report from Fullbound's footage, they immediately cut off the broadcast to the public. This minimized the damage and kept information about the culling away from the public to prevent chaos. Since the Genesis Cup was a high-profile event, they expected more damage from those with personal tablets and estimated about 30,000 cases. Since Dune was near the dungeon and the first to be affected by the setting sun, they declared a state of emergency and began evacuating people. The report startled Zakhard, causing him to leap from his seat with a strong urge to aid the people of Duna. Bedibor then addressed Zakhard by his title and requested him to stay, emphasizing the need for skilled adventurers like him. He urged Zakhard to devise the best strategy to protect their people and the world. The tent fell silent as everyone listened intently. Yoke reassured the girls not to worry. In a serious tone, Bodeman called everyone's attention. He encouraged them not to feel down and suggested a tea break. Confusion ensued as Bodeman began serving cups of a special imported tea he had recently acquired, known to calm nerves. He also attempted to lift spirits with his violin playing, though it unfortunately grated on everyone's ears. Bedibor developed a headache, familiar with Bodeman's unchanging nature. Zakhard grew concerned about having Bodeman as the on-site supervisor. However, Yoke had been more impressed that these higher-ups kept their calm despite the emergency. Zakhard then protested about how they were taking things lightly, despite the grim news brought by the culling and setting sun. Bodeman smiled and reminded them that losing their composure was one foolish thing that could happen during a crisis. Zakhard was struck by his words and returned to his seat to drink his tea in one go. He apologized and asked them to continue. Bodeman then shared that there was one more thing that would frighten everyone. With Bedibor's permission, Bodeman opened a long scroll and spread it on the table. Everyone asked what it was. Bedibor then explained it was a copy of the mural located in the ruins deep under the royal capital of Elmilia Kingdom. The scene depicted was a record of a culling that had taken place in prehistoric times, during which humanity had nearly been wiped out in a great battle. That is the end of the recap at chapter 102. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.